As a door slides open, an off-panel speaker asks someone how they are getting home. Another voice then calls out, asking for a moment with Miss Amelt. A young woman named Alice Amelt timidly agrees to the request. Watching from a distance, another student observes that the transfer student seems to be in trouble again. This observer, having seen this scene before, intuits that the other girls are about to warn the cheeky commoner for daring to enroll in a noble academy. She decides that this is the perfect moment for her to make an entrance. Suddenly she, Elisabetta von Alvaheim, has memories of a past life where she was obsessed with an otome game. She recalls the game Everlaba, where the heroine Alice Amelt is a commoner with rare magical talent who transfers into the Adonia Royal Magic Academy. The game involved choosing from 6 potential love interests and raising 5 different stats to capture their hearts. Elisabetta remembers that she too appears as a character in that very game. She briefly wonders if her role is to be Alice's best friend. The other noble girls continue to look down on Amelt. However, she quickly dismisses that idea just as one of the other students recognizes her as Lady Elisabetta. Elisabetta dramatically reveals her true role as the villainess who interferes with the heroine, before cheerfully greeting Miss Amelt. A narration box identifies the girl with drill-like curls as Count Priesel's daughter, accompanied by her followers. Elisabetta approaches, thinking that Alice's beauty is only natural for an otome game's heroine. She feels she can't leave such a valuable villainous scene to mere mob characters. Resolved, she decides to act in the name of her noble house, Alvaheim. However, upon seeing Alice up close for the first time, Elisabetta is internally shocked at just how cute she is. She is visibly flustered by this realization. As Elisabetta internally questions if Alice's charm stat is really just 40, Lady Priesel greets Miss Amelt, who seems confused by the attention. Lady Priesel's followers are aghast that Amelt doesn't recognize Lady Elisabetta of the famous Alvaheim Marquis House, prompting a stammered apology from Amelt. Upon hearing the name, Amelt bows deeply, apologizing profusely for her rudeness. One of the followers claims that Amelt's ignorance is precisely why she could do something like that. Elisabetta interrupts, asking what Amelt did. The follower reveals that it was seen being shown around the academy by Crown Prince Klaus. The follower then adds that Lady Elisabetta is the fiancée of that very same prince, a fact Elisabetta calmly acknowledges. With this new information, Elisabetta realizes that the game's initial meeting event between the heroine Alice and the capture target Lord Klaus has already occurred. As if on cue, she sees a group of noble girls confronting Amelt. Lady Priesel tells the commoner she shouldn't be so familiar with the crown prince, then demands she state her business. Another girl then accuses her of using seduction to get into the academy, calling her a prostitute's child. The accuser falters upon seeing Lady Elisabetta and apologizes, but Elisabetta coolly tells her to continue. However, Elisabetta intervenes, stating that while the rumor about Lady Alice being a prostitute's child has been spreading, an investigation has already proven it false. The accuser is left speechless, murmuring Lady Elisabetta's name. Flustered, the girl asks Elisabetta if she did something to offend her. Lady Priesel explains she was trying to throw her a lifeline as a fellow villainess, but Elisabetta insists she's doing more than enough and tells her to continue. This leaves Lady Priesel stammering, unsure of what to say next, before telling the others not to get carried away. As Amelt looks on in confusion, Elisabetta asks if that's all they have to say. Just then, a maid arrives to announce that Elisabetta's carriage is ready. Elisabetta promptly takes her leave, wishing Lady Alice a good day, which a surprised Alice returns. Once in the carriage, Elisabetta triumphantly declares she did her job, though her maid Carla notes her sudden movement was dangerous. She boasts to Carla about her gallant performance, but the maid simply tells her to sit down. The narration explains that Carla, or Carolina von Roos, has been Elisabetta's personal maid for about 10 years, since her engagement to Lord Klaus. Carla calmly confirms to her lady that she was watching the whole time. The narration reveals Carla's past as an assassin, a fact Elisabetta pretends not to know, that she now protects her from resentful rivals. Whenever Lizzie is threatened, Carla is there to protect her, as shown in a brief flashback. Back in the present, Elisabetta proudly muses that she managed to become quite the villainess, but Carla questions this assessment. When Elisabetta asks what she means, Carla admits she cannot quite judge what a villainess is supposed to be like. She then states that Elisabetta's earlier behavior did not seem villainous, shocking her lady. Elisabetta asks if Carla was watching properly, and the maid confirms she watched from the moment she introduced herself to the transfer student. Carla points out that Elisabetta didn't speak to her beyond a greeting, which Elisabetta realizes might be true. Elisabetta asks what difference that makes. She argues that hypothetically using the other girls to bully Alice felt villainous, but Carla bluntly disagrees. Carla explains that it looked like Elisabetta was restraining the bullies, and by calling her Lady Alice, she even seemed close to her, leaving Elisabetta stunned. Panicked, Elisabetta realizes her intention to act as a villainess didn't come across at all and wonders how Lady Alice perceived the situation. She worries if Alice even understood that she was being bullied. If she didn't, Elisabetta realizes that would be a huge problem for her plans. Her maid, Carla, bluntly tells her that her naturally villainous face and strange presence are enough to fulfill her duties, shocking the young lady. Elisabetta blushes with embarrassment at the comment, which leaves Carla wondering why she would react that way. Moving on, Carla informs her lady that the item she requested is ready at the mansion, and Elisabetta thanks her excitedly. Upon receiving it, Elisabetta joyfully welcomed the portrait of her favorite character, leaving a stunned Carla to question her choice of words. Elisabetta internally confessed that unlike the original Elisabetta from the game, she truly loved Lord Klaus. She reflected that his face was exactly her type, and while he was usually quiet and composed, the occasional kindness he showed completely swept her away. In fact, he had been her favorite character ever since she played the Otomi game, Everlaba. She gazed lovingly at his portrait. Even after reincarnating, her favorite hadn't changed, leading her to collect his portraits, though she acknowledged that in the game, his kindness was mostly directed at Alice. A voice of reason pointed out that since Klaus was her fiancé, she could just admire the real person, but Elisabetta rejected the idea. She happily hugged the portrait close. Later, surrounded by portraits in her room, Elisabetta praised them as wonderful works and thanked Carla, who was glad to hear it. Carla then reminded her that she would see the real Klaus tomorrow and should do her best, which startled Elisabetta. The next day, Elisabetta and Carla sat with Klaus in a garden. An excerpt from the game's official guidebook introduced Klaus Glans von Schulzberg, the calm crown prince who was inwardly fed up with his presumptuous fiancée, Elisabetta. Klaus greeted her, noting it had been a long time and asking if she was well. Elisabetta internally repeated his words, thinking about how long it had been. She mused that their tea parties had decreased since starting at the academy, as Lord Klaus was busy with palace duties and his role as student council president. She looked down, lost in thought. She concluded he was simply reluctant to have tea with her, but hoped he wasn't as annoyed as he was with the game's Elisabetta, since her personality was different. After greeting him, Klaus told her to stop laughing because it echoed in his head. He then instructed her to put her fan away as he couldn't see her face. Flustered, Elisabetta worried that perhaps he was annoyed with her after all. She hid her blushing face behind her fan. Elisabetta blushed furiously. Klaus watched her with a neutral expression. She peeked at him from over her fan. She was taken aback by his appearance. Internally, she gushed that he was too handsome today as well. She gazed at him, completely smitten. As she murmured his name, a narrator explained that in addition to being crown prince, Klaus excelled in academics and martial arts and was very popular. She thinks to herself that none of the many portraits in her house can compare to his real charm. Her companion points out that since he is her fiancé, she could just admire him directly, but Elisabetta retorts that it isn't so simple. She explains that they are in different classes and rarely have contact, so a one-on-one meeting is overwhelming. She feels it's enough to just look from afar. She continued to fret internally, thinking it would be impossible and disrespectful to stare at him, and that she would die of embarrassment if she tried. The shock of her favorite 2D character becoming a 3D person was simply too intense for her to handle. Just then, Klaus broke the silence, asking her how she was enjoying the tea. Klaus mentioned that he had recently obtained a fruity and delicious new tea, noting that while the previous one was good, this one was nice as well, and Elisabetta agreed. Elisabetta added that the tea was popular at the academy, and that students were even discussing which sweets would pair well with it, before offering to pour him some more. As she prepared the tea, a thought occurred to Elisabetta. She carefully poured more tea into Klaus' cup. She then asked Klaus about the progress of Everlaba, specifically inquiring about Miss Amelt, having heard that he and Lord Wilfried were instructing her in magic. The narration introduced Wilfried as the heir to the Valberg Marquis house, a capable aide to Klaus, and a popular capture target in the game Everlaba. It was explained that Alice Amelt, who received personal instruction from the capture targets, was fated to be constantly surrounded by them as the Otomi game's heroine. In response to her question, Klaus simply confirmed with a yes. Klaus elaborated that Imelt's magic control was no longer an issue, so regular classes would suffice, which prompted Elisabetta to exclaim that the news was wonderful. Elisabetta recalled the game's mechanics. Since Alice was initially poor at magic, Klaus and Wilfried would teach her until her magic stat rose, at which point the event would end. She noted with satisfaction that things were progressing smoothly, recognizing the end of the two-person private instruction event from Everlaba. She remembered that according to the game, private instruction would then continue with either Klaus or Wilfried alone. In the game, both men would become interested in Alice and offer to continue the lessons, leaving the choice up to her. This two-person private instruction event was essential for raising affection and locking in a character's route. Taking a sip of her tea, Elisabetta thought to herself that it was too bad for Wilfried. She mentally addressed him, acknowledging that he might also be interested in Alice. However, she resolved that she would not let Alice go down the Wilfried route. Her expression was one of cool determination. Looking at Klaus, Elisabetta thought that this served Wilfried right as punishment for his bad personality, and that he should just give up, while Klaus remained silent. Klaus listened with a neutral expression. With a confident smile, Elisabetta declared internally that Alice would be aiming for the happy ending of Lord Klaus's route. In the kingdom of Idonia, a nation that worships spirits, everyone possesses some degree of magical power. High magic power, which is seen as a blessing from the spirits, directly influences one's social status across the 6 elemental types: fire, light, wind, water, darkness, and earth. Lise notes that she herself has an aptitude for fire magic. She recalls that Lord Klaus's aptitude is for light magic, and she internally muses about whether that means he can literally shine brightly. Lise continues her thoughts, explaining that light magic affects physical matter while darkness magic affects the mind. People with more than one aptitude are rare, and Alice is one of them. In fact, Alice possesses all 6 magical aptitudes, a fact Lise attributes to her status as the Otomi game's protagonist. Lise reflects that while Alice can currently only use 5 of the 6 types, excluding fire, it is still an unbelievable feat that justifies her being personally tutored by the Crown Prince and a Marquis's son. She recalls the plot of the game Everbara, where on Lord Klaus's route, Alice awakens her final fire magic, becomes the Spirit King, marries Klaus, and they rule as King and Queen of Adonia. With determination, Reze declares that this happy ending is exactly what she is aiming for. She cheers for victory and glory for Lord Klaus, along with a cute and good-natured bride for him. Reze believes that if she can properly fulfill her role as the villainess Elisabetta, she can successfully guide Alice onto Lord Klaus's route. To do this, she resolves to say sarcastic things to Alice and cling to Lord Klaus in her presence, though she struggles to think of any other villainous duties to perform. She then recalls that in the original game, the villainous Elisabetta barely appears in Lord Klaus' route, existing only to establish that he has a fiancé. As the game progresses, her character fades into obscurity, making her a decoy rival who is too insignificant to even be considered a true rival. However, Reze resolves that even if she is just a decoy villainess, she will not slack off and will perform her given role perfectly. She proudly declares her intention to personally open the path to Lord Klaus' brilliant future, and her thoughts immediately turn to Miss Amelt. Suddenly, Wilfried's voice breaks through her thoughts, asking if she is listening and reminding her that they are in the middle of a tea party with Lord Klaus. Reze's thoughts return to the rumor circulating in the academy that she, now known as Reze, has been bullying Miss Amelt. She reflects on her steady activities, which involve acting arrogantly and making snide remarks to Alice, all based on the game's version of Elisabetta. These rumors have apparently reached Lord Klaus, who asked her if they were true. Reze confirms this to Wilfried, who then adds that he also asked Miss Amelt directly about the bullying, but she denied it was happening. Wilfried assumes Lady Alice is simply holding back because she isn't the type to speak ill of others. Reze adds with some exasperation that Alice even claimed to be grateful to her. Klaus then added that Alice had also been happy when Reze denied the nasty rumors about her mother. Reze internally fumed, thinking that rumor would have died down on its own anyway. She felt the girl was misunderstanding her. She had only denied the rumor because it was factually incorrect, not to help. Reze lamented that she was supposed to be bullying Lady Alice with complaints and sarcasm, not protecting her. Turning to Klaus, she pleaded with him not to be misled by Alice and demanded to know whether he would believe his fiancée or a commoner girl. But he simply told her to listen. For a moment, Reze wondered if her outburst had been sufficiently villainous-like. Klaus then advised that if she truly wanted people to think she was bullying Amelt, it would be more effective to deny it to him while feigning ignorance, an idea Reze enthusiastically endorsed. She realized this approach felt more like a true villainess, creating credibility by hiding her intentions, and was impressed by how smart Lord Klaus was. The conversation took place in a beautiful garden setting. After Reze praised his insight, Klaus changed the subject, informing her that his second dance at the upcoming welcome party would be with Amelt, which Reze calmly accepted. Internally, however, she noted that she already knew this was going to happen. The narration explains that the welcome party is a dance held to deepen friendships among the students. It begins with a dance led by the student council president, Lord Klaus, and his fiancée Reze, after which everyone is free to dance with whomever they like. Reze reflected that since it was a free party, dancing with others was fine, and she appreciated that the proper Lord Klaus had told her about his plans beforehand. Recalling the game's mechanics, she knew Klaus danced in order of highest affection, meaning Alice was his top choice. Reze was pleased that things were progressing smoothly. Despite this, Klaus began to ask if the arrangement made her uncomfortable. Reze quickly cut him off, insisting that she was not uncomfortable at all. Klaus then explained his reasoning. Since Lady Alice hadn't yet blended in with the other students, this was a good chance to show she was important to the kingdom. Reze acknowledged that she understood. Seeing a rare, indescribable expression on Klaus's face, Reze mentally consulted her knowledge from the Evergreen Lover's official guidebook. She deduced he was happy to dance with Alice but was holding back to avoid being rude to his fiancée. She lamented that there was no image-saving technology in this world to screenshot his subtle face. The two of them then stood apart, an awkward tension hanging in the air between them. Meanwhile, the dance instructor, Madame Super, praised Lady Alice's progress, encouraging her to keep practicing the basic steps. Watching from the sidelines, Reze realized she'd found a blind spot. Nobles have tutors from childhood, but Alice, a commoner, would be at a disadvantage. She conceded that Alice's progress was impressive for such a short time, but decided it still wasn't enough. Stepping forward, Reze called out to Alice, challenging her and questioning if her current skill level was truly sufficient to be Lord Klaus' partner. She declared Alice's performance to be mere child's play, mocking the idea of her being Lord Klaus' partner at the upcoming party. Internally, she admitted that while she hadn't minded this in the game, her real-life pride as a noble wouldn't allow such a poor showing. She then made a sharp, decisive gesture. Alice looks up, startled by the sudden attention. Elisabetta looks down at her with a determined expression. She then informs Madame Super that she is borrowing a confused Lady Amelt for practice. When Alice strikes a combat stance, Elisabetta sharply corrects her, reminding her that it is dancing, not martial arts. To properly instruct her, Elisabetta announces that she will take the male part in the dance. She immediately begins drilling Alice on the waltz, firing off a series of commands to straighten her back, raise her head, and not look at her feet. Held in a dance embrace by Elisabetta, a flustered Alice apologizes for her mistakes. Elisabetta firmly tells Alice Amelt to lift her head. Startled by her tone, Alice looks up. Looking her in the eye, Elisabetta encourages Alice to straighten her back and be confident. She then advises her that no matter what others say, she is the one who chooses which words to accept. Visibly moved by the unexpected encouragement, Alice quietly says Lady Elisabetta's name. After more practice, Elisabetta declares Alice's dancing to be good and suggests they take a break soon. However, she privately thinks that while Alice looks decent, She would like a third-party opinion. With that in mind, she calls over Lady Pricel, who responds from nearby. Lady Pricel giggles and offers a backhanded compliment, saying Lady Amelt is fine as she is, very commoner-like. Clearly annoyed, Elisabetta presses for a real critique, asking what specifically Alice should be careful about in her dancing. Lady Pricel ignores the question and instead fawns over Elisabetta, praising how beautiful she dancing the male part, much to Elisabetta's silent irritation. Elisabetta begins to react with sarcasm but cuts herself off. Lady Pricel's companions watch the exchange nervously. She dismisses the useless opinion and tells the onlookers to step away. A panicked Lady Pricel immediately apologizes, fearing she has offended Elisabetta again. Elisabetta clarifies that she summoned the ball crasher Lady Pricel precisely because her experience at many dances should provide useful advice. She then pointedly asks if she overestimated Lady Pricel's abilities. When Pricel remains confused, Elisabetta spells it out. She wants to know what is lacking in Alice's movements and how to improve them. Finally understanding, Lady Pricel provides concrete feedback. Alice's weight shifts are good, but she should turn from the waist, not the knees, and ultimately just needs more practice. Elisabetta immediately turns to Alice to confirm she was listening properly, which Alice affirms. Alice enthusiastically vows to practice more and thanks a relieved Lady Pricel, as Elisabetta mentally congratulates herself on her successful plan. However, as Lady Pricel attempts to leave, Elisabetta stops her, declaring she's not done yet. She then requests that Lady Pricel supervise Alice's movements one more time. Lady Pricel stares in shock, realizing she has been roped into becoming a dance coach, and so the day of the welcome party arrived. Guests were gathering in the grand, brightly lit hall. From a balcony, Elisabetta watched the festivities unfold below. On the dance floor, Crown Prince Klaus danced with Alice. Watching from the sidelines, Elisabetta planned to check affection levels by observing the dance order before going home, just as someone called her name. Alice was happy to be praised by Lady Pricel, who in turn complimented Elisabetta on her lovely appearance. After their wonderful dance, Alice brought a drink to Elisabetta, who thanked her. She accepted the glass. Elisabetta internally noted that Alice's dancing was barely passable, and only thanks to Lady Pricel's supervision. Nearby, two noblewomen remarked on how much Lady Amelt's dancing had improved, with one taking credit for having trained her hard. A young woman expressed her relief at having been helpful to Lady Elisabetta. As she continued to watch Klaus and Alice, Elisabetta noticed that the prince's atmosphere seemed softer than usual. She mused that while he rarely showed expression, the change felt nice. From her vantage point, she thought Alice looked quite cute. She reasoned that Klaus, seeing the girl up close, must surely think she was cute too. To her astonishment, Elisabetta saw Klaus smile. Her theory was confirmed when Alice shyly asked him not to laugh, and he apologized, admitting she was just too cute. Suddenly, Elisabetta recognized the moment as a scene from the game Everbara, one she had watched many times. Just then, a man's voice asked if he could have this dance. Startled from her thoughts, Elisabetta realized she was being addressed by Gilbert von Muller, a notorious playboy and a capture target in Everbara. Kneeling before her, Gilbert formally asked Lady Elisabetta, daughter of Marquise Alvaheim, for the honor of a dance. Elisabetta internally identified him as the playboy and processed that he was asking her to dance. Finding it unexpected for a capture target to approach the Villainess, she saw a good opportunity to probe Gilbert's affection toward Alice. She calmly accepted his offer. As he took her hand, Gilbert called it an honor to dance with such a beautiful lady, a line Elisabetta dismissed as smooth talk. Elisabetta wondered why he had invited her, noting that her dress and accessories were in the Crown Prince's colors, a common custom for engaged couples. She reasoned he wasn't foolish enough to flirt with the prince's fiancée and was likely just curious. Gilbert then admitted he thought she might reject him because of that very outfit, but felt it was worth a try, prompting Elisabetta to ask what he meant. Elisabetta recalled how in Everbara, Gilbert had also approached Alice out of curiosity before eventually falling seriously in love with her. As they began to dance, Gilbert declared that he had finally confirmed it. She knew about Everbara. Just as she'd thought, he admitted he was curious about her, Lady Elisabetta. With a sudden move, Gilbert caused her to lose her balance. Caught completely by surprise, Elisabetta found herself falling into his arms. In a classroom, a maid stood stiffly by the door. The maid, Carla, waited with a stern expression. A blurred image recalled a key scene from the Otomi game. Suddenly, Gilbert appeared, cheerfully asking if she had been waiting. Lise coolly laid out their cover story. She was staying behind because her carriage was late, and he was there to retrieve something forgotten. In response, Gilbert simply called her cold. She closed her eyes in annoyance. Lise looked down, a troubled expression on her face. She warned him that it would be troublesome if strange rumors about a secret rendezvous started. Gilbert mused that nobles are a bother and then called her Lise again. She insisted they stick to their cover story and demanded he not be so familiar. So he cheekily switched to calling her Ellie. Flustered, Lise retorted that wasn't what she meant, inwardly calling him a frivolous man. She reflected that despite being in the same class, she'd never had a proper conversation with Gilbert. Her only impression was that he was a playboy, just like in the game. Gilbert wondered aloud if this was her true self, not an act, even joking if she was a playboy in a past life. Lise shot back that as a noble he should be more mindful, since any rumors would affect her fiancé Klaus Sama. He then bluntly asked if Ellie liked the prince, causing her to gasp in surprise. Gilbert noted how cute she was, turning all red. Lise thought to herself that his observation made his next question all the more strange. She demanded to know why he was supporting Alice. Gilbert pointed out the contradiction. Since Lise knew about Everbara, she could easily sabotage Alice's chances and win the prince for herself. Instead, all her actions seemed to be guiding Alice directly into the prince's romance route. When she asked why he thought so, he reminded her that she was the one who told Alice to receive personal tutoring from His Highness. Lise hesitated, unable to answer immediately. A flashback showed her telling Alice to choose Klaus-sama without hesitation for her magic instruction. In the memory, Alice was startled by the sudden advice. Alice had simply agreed. Lise had explained that choosing Klaus would practically decide his route for her, as long as Alice didn't do anything strange. Despite Alice's hesitation, Lise insisted. However, Alice had questioned if Lady Elizabeth wouldn't dislike that, pointing out that she and the prince were engaged. The question had caught Lise completely off guard. Continuing the flashback, Lise told Alice that she didn't seem to understand her own position. She explained that as the country's treasured beloved child, it was Alice's duty to polish her magic, and her growth benefited everyone. Furthermore, Klaus was an excellent teacher. When Alice meekly suggested Lord Wilfrid instead, immediately shut her down, prompting a confused Alice to ask why. Lise had bluntly stated it was because he had a bad personality, which shocked Alice. Back in the present, Gilbert mused on the idea of a happy ending for Klaus and Alice, admitting that Lisa's assessment of Wilfrid was half a joke, but not entirely wrong. Carla, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up, agreeing with the statement. She declared that she knew nothing of this and was hearing it for the first time, making Lise realize it was a mistake to have brought her. Gilbert then asked Ellie if her maid's presence meant she knew about their situation, noting that Carla's face screamed that this was all new to her. Lise insisted that Carla was fine and could be trusted, though Gilbert questioned why she hadn't told her maid anything before coming. Carla apologized, explaining she was flustered because it was so unexpected to hear her lady supporting His Highness with another woman. Lise simply asked her to continue with her story. Lise explained her worry. What would Carla think if she suddenly confessed to having memories of a past life in a game world? Carla considered this, musing that since her lady had always been a dreamer, she might have just assumed she'd finally gone off the deep end. Gilbert, for his part, had felt the same way, explaining that meeting another reincarnated person made his own situation feel more real. He confessed that he hadn't even told his family, and had been half-doubting himself, wondering if his memories of a past life were just a delusion. For that reason, he was overjoyed when he realized Lise might also have memories of the game Everbara. Lise, intrigued, asked how he managed to notice. She believed her villainous act was supposed to be perfect, but Gilbert revealed he became sure she was like him during the welcome party, leaving her confused. Gilbert began to explain, recounting how he had spoken with Alice while she was dancing with the prince. Lise recalled that as a commoner, Alice normally wouldn't have funds for a new dress, but she received support from the country as the beloved child. It was then, Gilbert continued, that he heard from Alice that Lise had been the one to choose her outfit. Lise remembered how she had altered the game's plot. Instead of Alice shopping with her friend Hannah, Lise had forced her way in, knowing the party outfit affects affection levels. Thinking of Gilbert as a lecherous guy, she recalled how a revealing dress would raise his affection but lower Klaus's, and how she had used her authority to coordinate an entire outfit for Alice. Lise finally understood. Gilbert, knowing the game, had noticed something was amiss when Alice appeared in an outfit specifically designed to capture Klaus's affection. Gilbert explained that his sister had assumed Lise disliked her engagement to the prince, an idea Lise immediately rejected. He then asked why she was pushing Alice towards the prince. Exasperated, Lise asked if he'd played all the endings, but Gilbert admitted he only watched his sister play and was shocked to learn there were 6 capture targets, not 4. Lise was stunned that he didn't know about the 2 hidden characters and scolded him for boasting, but Gilbert clarified that he only knew about the dress because his sister was a huge fan of the prince. He explained that she played the prince's route over and over, even making him play parts of the welcome party, which is how he remembered the outfit. Lise commented that his sister had good taste. She then added that the true preciousness of Klaus's route is only understood after mastering all the others. Changing the subject, she asked if he knew about the prince's assassination event during the Spirit Festival. Gilbert recalled that the event ends as merely an attempt. Lise corrected him grimly. It only ends as an attempt in Klaus's route. In all other routes, the prince is assassinated, which she believes is the true history of Avalaba. Gilbert was shocked by this revelation, realizing how bad that would be. Lise elaborated, explaining that while the royal palace was in an uproar after the queen's death, it was Prince Klaus who pulled everything together with the prime minister. Gilbert understood that if the prince were assassinated, the kingdom would be thrown into chaos once again. As Lise looked down with worry, Gilbert watched her with a concerned expression. However, she declared with renewed conviction that in the Klaus-sama route, the assassination is prevented. In that future, Alice becomes the Spirit King. Klaus has a brilliant reign and the country remains peaceful, a future Lise valued far more than the true history. With fierce determination, she vowed to use any means necessary to ensure Alice achieves the happy ending of the Klaus-sama route. Gilbert listened, his expression hardening with resolve. Lise then turned to him, asking for his cooperation, and he readily agreed. As he agreed, a hazy memory from his past life surfaced in his mind. He remembered his younger sister telling him she planned to start working right after high school. Lise's voice calling his name snapped him back to the present. She looked at him with concern. As she asked what was wrong, Gilbert found himself wondering what his sister was doing now. He brushed off her question, but internally lamented that after their parents died, he had wanted to at least send his sister to college. Gilbert mused on the irony of being inside the world of an otome game his sister called Evalaba, known to him as Evergreen Lovers, and as a capture target no less. He watched as Lias let out a very particular laugh. He then thought of Reze, or Elizabeth von Alvaheim, the rival to the heroine Alice, and found her noble laugh to be quite unusual. Gilbert continued his assessment, noting that Reze was a tall beauty with striking features, the very image of a high-handed young lady from a manga. However, he felt that seeing her in person was different. The image she projected was somehow different from the game. He recalled that in Evalaba she was supposed to make sarcastic remarks out of jealousy or conspicuously cling to the prince. In the game she was a bothersome woman, but in this reality he rarely saw her and the prince together, leading to rumors that they were on bad terms. From behind a tree Gilbert watched Lise. He wryly noted she looked like a maiden in love. She was gazing at the prince from a distance. Gilbert observed that the prince definitely noticed her but showed no reaction, making it hard to tell if he disliked her as he did in the game. Recalling other unnatural things like a missing character, Gilbert realized he became certain of his theory when he heard from Alice that Lise had picked her outfit for the party. He concluded that either Liese herself or someone close to her must have memories of Evalaba just like him. Lise walked gracefully up a grand staircase. Even so, Gilbert's first thought was that he just wanted to live peacefully and uneventfully. He watched her, deep in thought. He felt that getting caught up in trouble would be a hassle, and had no intention of getting involved with Lise. Gilbert watched her from a distance, his resolve wavering. However, he decided that as a future royal knight, he could not overlook the matter of the prince's potential assassination. More than that, he couldn't just leave a girl with such a pained expression all alone. The sky was filled with clouds. He suspected she was forcing herself to aim for the Prince Klaus route, and that was what caused her such pain. Meanwhile, Klaus stood with his back to them, surrounded by falling leaves. Hidden nearby, Lise swooned, thinking how wonderful Klaus looked that day. She lamented that he was too far away and she could only see the back of his head. As she watched him, Lise noted that the martial arts training grounds were over there, and wondered if he trained even after school, admiring his stoicism. She felt her hiding spot was perfect, hoping her red hair would be mistaken for out-of-season autumn leaves. But Gilbert appeared behind her and bluntly stated he doubted it. Startled, Lise had just been thinking she could gaze at Klaus to her heart's content. She gasped in surprise. Whirling around, Lise demanded to know how long Gilbert had been there, telling him not to sneak up on her. He calmly replied that he had been there for a little while. Gilbert then scoffed, telling her that if she wanted to talk to the prince, she should just go and do it. Lise tried to explain that the Elisabetta from the game was different from her, so he didn't need to get involved. However, her maid Carla firmly disagreed, insisting that they must follow the proper procedure to ensure the event Lise wanted would occur correctly. Carla maintained a determined expression. A man in polished shoes took a step forward. Suddenly, a voice greeted Lady Elizabeth, and she turned in surprise to see her uncle, wondering why he was there. The man, introduced as Court Count Aloysius von Siegfried, remarked that she seemed as lively as ever. Aloysius explained that he had some non-urgent businesses with His Highness and had come for a change of scenery from the palace. He and Lise walked together through the grounds. He added that it was a pleasure to see her again after so long, and she replied that she was honored. Lise was then startled when Klaus himself appeared, humbling her by coming to greet her personally. She was confused, having thought he was at the training grounds, but quickly became distracted by how smooth and glossy his hair looked. Klaus addressed Aloysius directly, assuming he was there on business, while Lise continued to wonder about his hair care routine. Watching them, Gilbert asked Alice if the prince was always so harsh with Ellie, but Lise overheard and accepted it as the treatment a villainess deserves. Lise paused, looking thoughtful and a bit confused. She asked Gilbert what was on his mind, and he confronted her, asking why she had glared at him when he was leaving earlier. A close-up showed Klaus's hair, which was said to take on a whitish hue from anger. This was explained as proof of the von Schultzberg family's lineage, the rulers of Adonia. Gilbert realized the rumor was true, finding the reality more terrifying than he'd heard, and quickly dismissed Lise's question as nothing. Elisabetta reviewed her plan to guide Alice onto the Klaus route. She must play the villainess and crush all other romance routes. She recalled that the otome game Evergreen Lovers had 4 main capture targets and 2 hidden characters. She had already dealt with the hidden characters, pulling strings to prevent one from appearing and noting the other's encounter condition was no longer met. With them out of the way, she turned her attention to the 3 remaining capture targets besides Klaus. First, she considered Gilbert von Muller, but since he had been pulled to her side, she wasn't worried about him, probably. The next target on her list was Johann Bühler, Alice's childhood friend and the son of a pastry shop owner. She knew his route was triggered by a crisis where his family's shop was about to close, so by preventing that, she could avoid his route entirely. Reflecting on her success, she recalled how she'd had her servants patronize the shop for 3 years, making it hugely popular, especially its best-selling chocolate Kugelhop. As she considered the one remaining target, a voice interrupted, greeting Lady Elizabeth after a long time. Elisabetta politely acknowledged the greeting. Recognizing the man as Lord Wilfried, she greeted him and, seeing he was heading to the training grounds, asked if she could accompany him. A narration identified him as Wilfried von Wahlberg, the eldest son of a prestigious Marcus house and hailed as the brain of Adonia. Elisabetta internally noted that while Wilfried was in a different class, he sometimes assisted the magic instructor, and she found it disagreeable that he had already completed all his courses upon enrollment. She then mused that Klaus Sama had also completed his studies early through royal education, and was often absent, which she found wonderful. Wilfried asked if she and Alice were on good terms, as he'd seen them together often. Alice confirmed she was in Lady Elizabeth's care, but Elisabetta dismissed it as them simply being in the same class. Elisabetta reflected that ever since the welcome party, Alice seemed to have taken a liking to her and was often by her side, making her wonder if the girl was a natural airhead. Just then a voice called out to Lady Alice. Lady Pricel appeared, declaring she had no intention of being chummy with Alice. Wilfred observed that the conflicting rumors about them, being on both good and bad terms, simply meant everyone was interested. He then specified that the bad terms rumor claimed Lady Elizabeth was bullying Lady Alice, which he said he would imagine. Elisabetta internally acknowledged that the students were fascinated by the perceived love battle between her, the rival character, and Alice for the prince. To play her part, Elisabetta announced that she was indeed bullying Lady Alice, which left Alice completely shocked. Elisabetta elaborated on the rumor's logic. Since she, the fiancée, was being passed over for Alice, who was receiving personal instruction from Klaus, it was assumed she was jealous and bullying her. Elisabetta was aghast that Alice hadn't noticed the rumors and questioned why she was the one who was surprised. Alice, however, merely mused that she should get a handkerchief from Carla to act more villainous-like, then pointed out that she'd never actually been bullied, and wouldn't be with Elisabetta if she were, leaving Elisabetta exasperated at her denseness. Wilfried, observing them, noted that Alice hasn't been particularly harassed lately. He then asked Alice why she didn't try to get along with others, and she replied that Lady Elizabeth was the only one who treated her normally. Elisabetta despaired internally, wondering why the heroine was becoming the villainess's hanger-on, and silently urged her to listen to the rumors. Alice, misinterpreting her agitation, told her to calm down and watch her step, causing Elisabetta to look down in confusion. There on the floor, a snake suddenly appeared from behind a curtain, startling her. As she shrieked in terror, Gilbert von Muller cheekily asked if she wasn't good with snakes. She glared furiously at him, muttering his name. Elisabetta accused Gilbert of setting her up, arguing a snake should be hibernating in the cold, but he just laughed and feigned ignorance. Gilbert then turned his attention to Lady Alice. He claimed with mock sincerity that he had simply returned the snake to the soil, prompting Elisabetta to declare that he had just admitted his guilt. Elisabetta passionately warned Alice not to be fooled by Gilbert's smile, calling him a heartless man who would use magic to harass a sleeping creature. He teased her about her childhood dislike of insects, but she retorted that was long ago and she doesn't make a fuss like he does, leaving a confused Alice to look on. Alice observed that the two seemed to get along well, an idea Elisabetta immediately and vehemently rejected. Taking his leave, Gilbert told Alice to report any bullying from Elisabetta to him, promising to deliver punishment as the student council vice president. He then advised Elisabetta to show more composure, warning that her rampages would make her father cry, and reminded her she was expected elsewhere before departing. Alice then asked if Elisabetta and Lord Wilfried were old friends, and Elisabetta confirmed they knew each other from her childhood visits to the palace as a playmate for Klaus Sama. Elisabetta fell silent for a moment, contemplating. She clarified to Alice, however, that she and Wilfried were not close enough to be considered friends. Alice reflected that she had just witnessed Wilfried's true, unguarded self, not his usual affected manner. Meanwhile, Elisabetta privately noted that what Alice saw was actually Gilbert's true nature, pleased that her Operation Insults was progressing as planned. Alice connected the dots, realizing that Elisabetta, Wilfried and Klaus were all childhood friends, and remarked she had never seen Lord Wilfried so worked up before. A brief memory showed the three of them together as children. Changing the subject, Elisabetta asked Alice about the rumors that Gilbert is always seen with a different girl. An image of Gilbert surrounded by women reinforced his reputation as a playboy. Elisabetta then checked in on Alice's progress with Klaus Sama, and Alice happily reported that her magic instruction was going smoothly. However, Alice explained that when the prince is busy, she receives magic lessons from Lord Wilfried instead, surprising Elisabetta. Elisabetta was shocked, as she knew from the game that the unchosen character was supposed to disappear from the route. This deviation meant things were not proceeding as planned. She marveled at how Alice was managing a cheat-level trick by simultaneously advancing on two event paths that should have been mutually exclusive. Puzzled, Elisabetta tried to understand what could be happening. She began to panic, fearing her entire operation. Insults was already on the verge of collapse. Gilbert reappeared, asking Alice if Lord Wilfried had used the romantic line about her smile being like a flower, before turning to ask Elisabetta the same question. Elisabetta recognized the line as being from the Wilfried Route tutoring event and realized he hadn't said it yet. She scoffed that it would be creepy to hear that from him, while Alice noted how specific Gilbert's knowledge of the line was. Gilbert then asked what Klaus Sama had told her, and Alice quoted his advice to be conscious of her next move because an opening appears at the end of a strike. A confused Elisabetta wondered what strike he meant, and Alice clarified it was about swordsmanship, leaving Elisabetta utterly baffled. Alice explained that she found it strange when the tutoring turned into serious martial arts instruction, recalling Klaus' advice to redirect force rather than take a blow head-on. Still trying to understand, Elisabetta asked what Prince Klaus's intentions were, and if he had said anything else to her. Alice recalled another moment, when the prince promised to protect her and then patted her on the head. She found it hard to imagine Prince Klaus acting that way, and wondered if he was truly that kind of person. Overhearing, Elisabetta asked what she meant, becoming flustered at the thought of Klaus saying such things to another woman while she was his fiancée. Letting out a frustrated sigh, she quickly caught herself and exclaimed that her previous thought was not what she meant. Elisabetta panicked, worrying that the pure Prince Klaus would be labeled a cheating bastard, before again telling herself that wasn't it. A nearby noble lady reassured her that Prince Klaus was fine, explaining that Elisabetta's engagement to him was merely a formality. As the lady began to explain the reason the Alvaheim family is called the Shield of Idonia, Gilbert told a shouting Elisabetta to lower her voice. He then covered her mouth with his hand to silence her. While two other ladies decided it was fine to leave them be, Elisabetta demanded to know what Gilbert was doing. But he retorted that she was the one speaking too loudly about sensitive matters. Elisabetta accused him of being the type to hold hands without permission and make it conditional on dating, which Gilbert flatly denied. Turning to Alice, Gilbert asked if she knew why the Alvaheim Marcus house, which rules the borderlands, is called the Shield of Idonia. He continued, explaining that while the title relates to their role in trade and defense, its true origin lies elsewhere. Gilbert recounted a story from long ago, when the head of the Alvaheim family risked his life to save the King of Idonia and the Spirit King during an invasion. In recognition of this devotion, the king bestowed upon the Alvaheim family the rank of Marcus and the title Shield of Idonia. As Gilbert concluded that Elisabetta's family has served as the royal family's shield ever since, Elisabetta mentally cheered him on for explaining that Klaus was not a playboy. Gilbert then gave an example of this role, formally becoming the fiancé to a royal in order to protect the true candidate for consort. Alice, processing this, realized aloud that Lady Elizabeth was merely a stand-in and asked if that was what he meant. Another noble lady interjected, clarifying that being a stand-in is an honorable duty. She continued, explaining that because of this, Prince Klaus has no reason to feel guilty if he seeks another partner. The lady then asked Elisabetta if she was okay with this arrangement, noting that she thought Elisabetta admired the prince, leaving her speechless. To illustrate, she shared that her own aunt had a similar engagement to the current king, who ultimately married the woman he loved, while her aunt married her own longtime love. Internally, Elisabetta admitted that if she could marry Prince Klaus based on her own feelings, she would have done so long ago. She reflected that while some in her family had married their fiancés, it was impossible for her due to her average magic power in a world where magic is everything. Recalling her 10-year-old self receiving an average magic assessment, she remembered having to change her life's goal from marrying Klaus to simply making him happy. Therefore, Elisabetta declared to Alice that she is the strongest candidate, stating firmly, "I believe it's you." Stunned into disbelief, Alice could only whisper her own name. Elisabetta thought to herself that meeting Alice in person reaffirmed what she knew from the game. She was cute and kind, truly the heroine. She was completely different from herself, the Villainess. Flustered, Elisabetta shouted at Alice not to get the wrong idea, insisting she hadn't acknowledged her, but Gilbert teased that saying it herself was starting to hurt. Embarrassed, Elisabetta turned away from the group. She continued to deny it, but Alice simply placated her with a calm yes yes. Later in a magic class, Elisabetta proudly showed off her fire magic. Watching the demonstration, Alice internally reviewed the principles of magic, noting it required inscribing formulas in spirit script. She mused that with her aptitude for 5 types, she would need to learn 5 different magical languages. Her thoughts were broken by her amazement, as the movement of Elisabetta's fire spider looked incredibly real. Another student commented on the incredible concentration and skill required, while Elisabetta, playing her villainous role, laughingly sent the spider on its way. Looking on, Alice felt dejected, believing that such a feat was impossible for her. The scene then shifted to Alice's combat training, where she had just been knocked to the ground. Prince Klaus ordered her to get up, coldly stating that if his leg had been reinforced with light magic, she would have a hole in her stomach. He continued his critique, pointing out the opening she created when attacking and telling her to use her own light magic to defend or counter. Alice meekly agreed, thinking to herself how strict the prince's instruction was. Klaus reminded her that all royal knights fight this way, pointedly asking if she still wanted to join them and become the queen's guard. Her expression was one of pure determination. Despite his harshness, Alice reflected on her goal. She recalled Elisabetta saying Klaus was a good teacher and acknowledged his precision, though his considerate method of leaving bruises only under her clothes was scarcity. Her desire to become a knight was sparked by Elisabetta, who she felt was different from other nobles and had no malice. Though Elisabetta called her dense, Alice believed she was sensitive to others' feelings, and with renewed resolve she decided to try again. She remembered Elisabetta's confident smile. She recalled her own past words. The image of Lady Elisabetta inspired her. She thought about her own sensitivity. Meanwhile, Gilbert mused that it was because of Lady Elisabetta that he hadn't come to hate nobles. He recalled telling Klaus he wanted to protect people like her, and the prince had replied that their interests might be aligned. In that same memory, Klaus advised him to polish his martial arts if he wanted to join the royal knights, leaving a younger Alice confused. Back in his thoughts, Gilbert conceded that while he didn't sense malice from the prince, he couldn't read his true intentions. He continued to ponder the situation. His expression was serious and contemplative. He specifically recalled Klaus' expression when talking about Elisabetta at the party. At that moment, back in the classroom, an instructor called for the next student, Alice Amelt. As Alice herself was lost in thought, sure that Klaus had feelings for Elisabetta. The scene returned to the magic examination, where another student had just finished her turn. Elisabetta, acting as an examiner, then addressed Lady Alice, inviting her to demonstrate her skills. The instructor curtly dismissed the previous student, telling her to be quiet and return to the classroom. Alice nervously realized it was her turn. She worried internally, admitting she wasn't just bad with fire, she was afraid of it, a trauma from the Great Fire 7 years ago that had involved her family. Facing the class, she worried if she could perform well, knowing she had to demonstrate all 5 of her magical aptitudes. But as she began to cast the fire spell, the sudden heat startled her. The sensation triggered her trauma, and she collapsed, desperately wanting to run but finding her legs wouldn't move. Panic set in as she lay on the floor. Her face was a mask of terror. Images of the past fire flashed before her eyes. A vivid memory surfaced, her mother's voice screaming for her to run as her younger self called out for her mom amidst the flames. Ellie realized with certainty that a triggered event from the game was unfolding. She noted with alarm that she possessed the same fire attribute involved in the incident. As Alice lay unconscious on the floor, a voice cried out her name. Gil then scooped Alice up, announcing he would carry her to the infirmary, which made Ellie's inner fangirl squeal at the sight of a romance target performing a princess carry. As Gil and Ellie accompanied the unconscious Alice, the narration explained her past. 7 years ago, a great fire killed her parents, leaving her with a deep trauma that unconsciously sealed her fire magic. Seeing the flames from the textbook had triggered a flashback, causing her to faint. This was an event from Eberaba, but it was originally supposed to be Wilfried's moment. Ellie looked on with a frustrated expression. In the game, Wilfried was meant to extinguish the flames and carry Alice, but the event had been hijacked. Ellie realized it was because she herself had extinguished the flame spider she painstakingly created. Gil remarked that he had suspected as much, but was glad they had prepared for emergencies. He recalled that in the Klaus route, Alice overcomes her fear of flames and becomes the Spirit King. A detail Ellie confirmed was correct. Ellie then asked if Alice becomes the Spirit King in any of the other routes. Gil explained that this only happens on the Klaus route, as the trauma recovery event locks it in. Historically, all Spirit Kings have married into the royal family. He added that this was a political maneuver to keep the powerful Spirit King contained within the royal family. Therefore, if Alice became the Spirit King, marrying any other romance target would become extremely difficult. Ellie mused that this matched the game, then mentioned there were 2 hidden characters before turning her attention to Gil. Gil jokingly asked if she thought he was a strategy guide, prompting Ellie to reply that he seemed to know everything anyway. Noting her excitement, Gil thought to himself that Ellie clearly enjoyed discussing Eberaba. Ellie then enthusiastically offered to tell him anything he wanted to know. Taking her up on the offer, Gil immediately asked if one of the hidden characters could be her brother, Lord Curtis. A narrative box identified Curtis von Alfheim as the eldest son of the Alfheim Marquisate and Ellie's older brother. Ellie confirmed he was right, admitting she'd suspected it too, as Curtis stood out too much for a mere supporting role. She smiled mischievously. When Gil asked what she did to her brother, who was absent, Ellie cheerfully confirmed she'd had him removed, leaving Gil utterly shocked. Ellie's expression turned dark and intense. As Gil wondered if she'd killed him, Carla suddenly appeared, stating that Master Kurt was in good health, which only confused Gil further. Startled, Gil demanded to know when Carla had arrived. The maid calmly explained she had intervened to clear up a misunderstanding. Gil then asked who Carla truly was, sensing she was no ordinary maid. Carla revealed that she previously worked at the royal palace. When pressed for more details about her time at the palace, Carla refused to elaborate, citing confidentiality. The narration then explained the backstory for Curtis's route. After his wife's death, he moved to the capital and met Alice while working as a martial arts instructor. It was revealed that Curtis is a hidden character unlocked after one playthrough, and Ellie had taken decisive action to avoid triggering any of his romance flags. As the students processed the incident's resolution, one expressed relief that it was a close call, while another was insulted at being treated like a murderer. A nearby girl commented that it was because that student would do anything for Lady Elisabetta, admitting she felt the same devotion to Lord Klaus. Hearing this, Elisabetta thoughtfully considered the word anything. As the other students expressed their fear, they were told not to worry. Elsewhere, Curtis reassured Gilbert, telling him that Carla would handle the dirty work so the lady wouldn't have to, praising the maid's competence. He then thanked both Gilbert and Carla for their efforts. Elisabetta recalled the earlier announcement that teachers and student council officers would hold a meeting regarding the incident. She reasoned that since it's impossible for a textbook to spontaneously manifest magic, it must have been either tampered with or defective, a problem regardless. A teacher dismissed the class for the day, thanking Gilbert for his cooperation, which he casually accepted. However, the teacher then asked Elizabeth to stay behind, and Gilbert added that he had a few questions for her before the meeting. A sense of dread washed over Elisabetta as she wondered if she was being suspected. She then walked away with Gilbert. Now alone with Gilbert, Elisabetta wryly told him to go ahead with his questions, joking that this wasn't a Katsudan interrogation. Gilbert began by reporting that Alice had sustained burns on her hands, but they were within a healable range, which was good news. In response to Elisabetta's question about Alice's condition, he confirmed there were no other physical abnormalities. He then instructed an aide to arrange for Count Adolf to escort Alice home once she woke up. Turning back to Elisabetta, Gilbert stated his belief that someone had tampered with Alice's textbook. He theorized that the culprit had likely overlaid a spell on the book and infused it with magic without Alice noticing, an explanation Elisabetta took in. Elisabetta asked if such tampering was illegal and Gilbert confirmed that it was. He explained that the culprit must be punished, which was why he needed to question her first, as suspicion would naturally fall on her. Much to her shock, Gilbert elaborated that the kingdom owns the textbooks, which are merely leased to students, and tampering with them is prohibited by law. As Elisabetta panicked at the realization she was truly a suspect, Gilbert confirmed it, pointing out that she was the closest person present during the incident. He added another reason. The manifested spell was fire magic, unsuitable for Alice, and her response to it had been far too precise. Elisabetta knew he was right. One couldn't nullify a spell instantly without knowing it beforehand. As Gilbert confirmed her unspoken thought, Elisabetta lamented that her own competence had backfired. She began to explain that the reason was simple. She knows every published fire magic spell. She elaborated that while her average magic prevents her from using powerful spells, she is perfectly suited for removing characters from a spell to prevent its manifestation. Because of this unique skill, nullifying the spell was for her a simple matter. She recalled how she had desperately memorized everything, driven by a desire not to lose to anyone, knowing that nullification required only memorization, not power. After hearing her out, Gilbert turned to Wilfried, confirming that he also understood the situation. Elisabetta privately reflected on how she had nearly exhausted her magic just demonstrating the spell. Her thoughts continued on the effort it took. Wilfried then remarked to her that saying such a pitiful thing with such confidence was, in its own way, her strength. Ellie decided to take his comment as a compliment. Gil, however, immediately clarified that he was being sarcastic, prompting an annoyed Ellie to retort that he always says one thing too many. He continued, explaining that he already knew her magic was depleted and that the powerful spell from earlier hadn't been hers. When Ellie asked why she was being interrogated, Gil replied that it was a necessary process in case suspicion fell on her. He added that it was a friend's courtesy to prevent her from being summoned unnecessarily, leaving Ellie speechless. Elsewhere, Alice worriedly asked Gil if Lord Klaus would complain about his involvement. He assured her he would never act against the prince's interests, which she hesitantly accepted. Alice then asked if he knew whose magic was used. Gil explained that classroom magic couldn't affect the training area, so only one person could have sent magic to the textbook. A sinister purple aura emanated from her. He then revealed that the magic detected belonged to Lady Preisel. In a flash-forward, a captured Lady Preisel screamed her hatred for Alice, jealous that a commoner was favored by the prince and Lord Waldberg and had everything she wanted. Alice is visibly stunned by the venomous outburst. Nearby, Elisabetta and Lady Pauline watched the scene unfold with concerned expressions. When Ellie asked what would become of her, Gil explained that for committing a crime with magic, Lady Preisel's title would be revoked and she'd be banished from the capital, causing her to cry out in despair. Alice's face is etched with utter devastation at the pronouncement of her fate. Back in the present, Wilfried told Ellie that while she and Gilbert took Alice to the infirmary, he spoke with Lady Preisel, whom Ellie called vertical roles. Gilbert confirmed that Vert had insisted she knew nothing. Wilfried recounted his interrogation, noting that although a flustered Lady Preisel denied it, she seemed aware her own magic had caused the incident as he pressed her to confess. Ellie considered this, wondering if the real vertical role from the game Eberaba was the true culprit. However, she then recalled that Lady Preisel's attitude towards Alice had softened from mean to tsunder since their dance practice, making her doubt the girl's guilt. Pauline interjected, arguing that Lady Preisel and her friends lacked the nerve for such an act, and theorized that someone else must have overwritten the spell formulas. Wilfried agreed it was possible. The culprit could have preemptively altered several formulas, and it was just by chance that the textbook reacted to Lady Preisel's magic. Pauline lamented that since Alice's textbook had been incinerated, they couldn't identify the overwritten ink and only ash remained. A frustrated Ellie wondered what they could possibly do by collecting the ash. Wilfried considered the situation, and suggested that with the prince's power, it might be possible to restore the book. He explained that while most formulas are public, some are known only to palace officials, and a few can only be woven by the royal family, startling Ellie. The mention of the royal family triggered a memory. As a child, Ellie, then called Reze, cried to a young Lord Klaus that she had broken a precious vase from her father. The young Klaus simply told her not to cry. A hand then made a gesture over the broken shards. He then cryptically stated that they had done nothing. The vase was magically restored, amazing the young Ellie. Klaus gently told her again not to cry, demonstrating the royal family's unique restorative magic. The young Ellie thanked him, thinking to herself how cute he was, a feeling she knew she shouldn't show her future fiancé. She reasoned that he must have fixed the vase to save her from a scolding, which would have led to a severe punishment from her family. The memory fades, shifting the scene to a large hall dominated by a grandfather clock. Ellie vowed to keep Lord Klaus' kindness a secret forever, reminding herself to be obedient when it came to him. From off-panel, Klaus' voice is heard saying he is happy to be relied upon. In another location, Lady Pauline, a candidate for crown princess, told Alice she wanted someone to hear her out, but Alice insisted she should be the one saying that, praising Pauline's excellence in magic. Pauline then gossiped with her friends, mentioning that Alice Amelt had injured herself with fire magic and was causing a fuss at the palace, calling her a troublesome person. She continued confessing that she was constantly worried about being compared to Alice, a commoner who had surpassed her magic scores right after transferring. Pauline admitted she had always been jealous of Amelt, and wondered if her jealousy and magic, which seemed drawn to Alice, had caused the incident. Pauline looked distressed. Her friend Rosine appeared equally worried. Meanwhile, Ellie was secretly observing them from behind a door. As Pauline panicked, blaming Rosine but then defending her lack of ill intent, Ellie mused that since mind and magic are connected, such an occurrence wasn't surprising. Lady Purcell suggested they report to the student council and offered to go with Pauline, who seemed moved by the gesture. As they prepared to leave, Ellie appeared, offering Pauline a bottle of ink. Ellie explained that she heard one must bring ink for questioning at the palace, which is likely where they were headed. Pauline thanked her friends for everything, but Ellie suddenly shouted for them to wait. Lady Prycel was shocked to see Ellie, calling out her full name, Elizabeth. Ellie casually claimed she was there on business, which prompted Rosine to question what business a marquis's daughter could have in a supply closet. When Lady Prycel accused her of improperly eavesdropping, Ellie simply dismissed it as a bad rumor. Internally praising her maid Carla's foresight, Ellie turned her attention to Pauline, addressing her as Viscountess Cassel. The special ink bottle was shown. Ellie held the ink bottle in her hand. Ellie then addressed Lady Prycel as vertical roles, startling her. A narration box explained that special magic ink was needed to overwrite textbook spells, leading the girls to question if Ellie truly had it by chance. Pauline became distraught, apologizing and insisting that bringing ink for questioning couldn't be right, and that they shouldn't believe things so easily. The other girls watched her outburst. Ellie then directly accused Pauline of being the culprit who swapped the overwritten textbook. Pauline defensively asked what about the ink. Ellie reminded her that Alice's textbook had burned. As Pauline tried to dismiss the connection to the ink, Ellie called her out by name, Lady Pauline. The chapter opens on a decorative panel with flowers. A young woman with freckles calls out to Lady Elizabetta. Elizabetta looks at her with a thoughtful expression. The freckled girl apologizes for getting angry, wishing Elizabetta had consulted her. A blushing Elizabetta replies that she considers her a friend. Elizabetta then asks if she can call her by her real name Rosine, instead of the nickname Ringlet, which moves Rosine to tears. To Elizabetta's surprise, Rosine firmly refuses. She insists on being called Ringlet, leaving Elizabetta to muse that even she would be upset if called by her own embarrassing nickname, Red Tempa. Just then an off-panel voice summons Elizabetta von Alfheim by name. She is ordered to report urgently to the student council president's office. As she walks down the hall, Elizabetta knows the summons must be about the incident from the previous day. Bracing herself, she wonders why she has been summoned as she approaches her destination. Elizabetta's thoughts drift to the plot. Pauline framed Rosine, and tampering with a royal textbook would lead to jail. She imagines Lady Purcell yelling at Alice not to interfere, calling her a mere stand-in for the prince. She concludes that the motive was clearly to target the future crown princess. Her thoughts are interrupted by Lady Prycel herself, who confronts her. Elizabetta calmly dismisses the girl's taunts as unoriginal. Elizabetta internally laments that it's a shame Lady Prycel committed a crime, as she would have otherwise made a fine villainess to recruit. Lady Prycel looks down at a pebble in her hand, confused. With a smirk, Elizabetta reveals that it's a fire magic stone. Suddenly, Elizabetta shouts that her uniform has caught fire and urges Lady Prycel to run, sending her fleeing in panic. As her maid calls for help, a panicked Lady Prycel explains that the stone was just a personal puzzle she used for magic control training. Embracing her villainous role, Elizabetta holds up a fan and dramatically commands her to dance the dance of death, delighting in the chaos. Lady Prycel's inner thoughts reveal her true feelings. She doesn't mind getting burned as long as Alice got burned too. The scene shifts to Elizabetta's brother Curtis, who sighs that she has done something outrageous. He reports that the royal palace has completed its investigation and decided on a punishment, while Klaus is shown stating he only provided information on the condition of obedience. Curtis continues, explaining what he heard from Wilfried. Prince Klaus's magical repair of Alice's textbook revealed it belonged to Pauline, implicating her and her father, Viscount Giselle. In that meeting, Lizzie confirmed with the prince that she had stayed obedient as promised, asking what he meant by that. When he addressed her by name, she had simply answered, yes. He then questioned her maid's involvement, but Lizzie insisted Carolina had only followed her, taking full responsibility with shame. As the prince declared that attacking with magic was forbidden and suspended her for 2 weeks, Lise was internally distracted, admiring how cool he looked. Carolina immediately apologized, while another lady observed how meek the maid became in front of His Highness. Klaus added that the Alfheim Marquisate would be informed, prompting a cry of despair from Lise, though he insisted it was natural and she must be more aware of her position. Lise noted to herself that the prince was angry. She lamented that this was the result, after she had proudly told Wilfried she would never act against Klaus's interests, while Carolina privately chuckled, thinking he should be stricter. Klaus reflected on the commotion his fiancée had caused, but Liese was simply thrilled that she finally got to talk to him after so long. Her thoughts replayed the shocking news. The Crown Prince's fiancée, a lady of the Alfheim Marquisate, was being suspended. As she processed her own suspension, she suddenly realized that Klaus had smiled. She called out to him and he simply replied, "What?" Lise asked if he had just smiled, but he denied it, leaving her to ponder the word suspended once more. A look of dawning realization crossed her face. She then realized with a jolt that Prince Klaus was actually laughing, and his earlier sternness had just been an attempt to hold it in. Overjoyed, Lise celebrated seeing a rare expression she'd never witnessed even in the game. She vowed to memorize his crimson eyes and hire a painter to capture the moment. One of the men present shouted for her maid, "Carla!" Gilbert asked why she was so happy about the suspension, then quickly apologized. Wilfried, however, told Klaus not to apologize, warning that Valletta wouldn't forgive him. Carolina watched the scene unfold with a stern expression. Lise mused on Klaus's strange sense of humor and wondered what would happen if she were expelled. prompting Klaus to ask if she was thinking of something dangerous. He called her name, and she excitedly requested he call her Red Tempa instead, to which he skeptically asked if she was serious. Dismissing her request with a simple "that's all," he addressed her as Lise once more. He then leaned in, warning her not to interfere in dangerous matters again, and admitting he was glad she was unharmed, which made her heart flutter. Lise was ecstatic that Prince Klaus had worried about her, but Carolina urged her to stay composed. Meanwhile, at the Friesel Count's mansion, Rosine's father asked if she had gotten into trouble and if she was injured. The scene shifts to the grand exterior of the Friesel estate. Rosine confirmed she was fine, explaining that Lady Elisabetta had protected her. She noted her father wasn't worried about her, and he clarified his concern was that her marriage prospects would narrow if she were hurt, adding she was lucky to be connected to the Alfheim family. Her father then declared that it was time to discuss her husband. He reminded her of his order to have no dealings with the Zephyrin brat and insisted her future husband must match the Friesel family status. Just then, a flustered young man named Fritz appeared with flowers, greeting Lady Rosine, much to her surprise. A maid questioned Lise's presence during her suspension, but she cheerfully explained she was just passing by for her brother's return and decided to offer her congratulations. The servant had tried to stop her, insisting she wait because her master was currently busy. Just then her brother appeared, calling her a fool for barging in without notice and ignoring the servants. He expressed his shame and questioned why her own maid, Carla, had stood by and let it happen. He continued his tirade, telling her not to look away and accusing her of only apologizing when she wasn't truly remorseful, correctly guessing she had stopped the servants herself. Her brother then turned to Count Friesel and formally apologized for his sister's great rudeness. Count Friesel reassured him, stating he understood Lise's personality and her lack of friends, and expressed sincere thanks that Lady Rosine had befriended such a foolish younger sister. The Count asked him to continue treating Lise kindly, and her brother immediately agreed, of course. Count Friesel then announced he also wished to offer congratulations, having heard that Lady Rosine and Viscount Friesel's son Fritz were now engaged, much to the surprise of the young man. Lise's brother reacted with enthusiasm, declaring that the Friesel family was secure with Fritz, and that this engagement would improve relations with the Alfheim Marquisate. A grateful Fritz thanked him. Watching the exchange, Lise wondered what exactly was happening, recalling that she had brought a gift to celebrate the engagement between the two. With a satisfied smile, she realized that this was how power is used. Later, Lise reflected on being suspended for a fight, musing that this wasn't like a dating sim. She contrasted her happiness at Prince Klaus' laugh with her annoyance at Gilbert's. She wanted to punch his smiling face, feeling as if she had been reincarnated into a delinquent manga instead of a romance game. Lise asked Gilbert if he had come to visit or to tease her. He laughed, then revealed he'd heard from Lady Rosine that Lady Pauline was rumored to be in critical condition after being completely burned by fire. Gilbert remarked that Lise's reputation really worked against her, and she agreed emphatically, adding that Wilfried had already named her as the first suspect. Lise sighed that being a villainess isn't easy, while Gilbert praised Carla's delicious tea and invited the maid to drink with them. Just then, a young girl with long light hair peeked into the room from the doorway. Lise noticed her, calling out to Fee and inviting her over. She then told Gilbert she would introduce her sister, who shyly presented herself as Fiona von Alfheim. Gilbert introduced himself and immediately flattered Fiona, calling her as cute as a little bird and saying he was honored to meet her. As a flustered Fiona hesitated, Carla advised her to move away. Internally, Lise's player-type flirt alert went off as she noted that while Carla was Fee's bodyguard, Camilla had already been captured. Gilbert dismissed her concern as nothing, but Lise sternly warned him that she would strike him down if anything were to happen. Gilbert then turned his attention to the maid, asking if her name was Camilla and calling it cute and proper, which prompted an angry Lise to tell him to stop making eyes at her staff. Feigning innocence, Gilbert teased Lise about being jealous and declared she was the only one for him, but she cut him off, saying that was enough. Just then, Lee's brother Curtis appeared and threatened to behead Mr. Muller if the ladies caused any more trouble. Gilbert claimed he was just talking, not making eyes, but Lee's retorted that he calls everyone cute and has no self-control. Changing the subject, Gilbert then asked why Fee-chan was there. Fiona apologized to Curtis for intruding, explaining she came because Lizanie had called for him and she thought he might have already left. Gilbert admired the young girl, remarking that he now understood why the Alfheim Marquess kept her hidden, as she would become extremely beautiful. He told Lise he hadn't known she had such a cute little sister, which left Fiona confused about the meaning of this introduction. Holding her fan, Lise noted that they were finally getting to the main topic. The image of the abandoned church lingered in their minds. He then playfully told Lise he was glad she had decided to accept his love, joking that now that he'd met his brother-in-law, he just needed to meet the parents. She furiously retorted that she had no such intentions, and he had simply happened to meet Fiona earlier. Turning to Fee, Ellie urgently warned her not to believe Gilbert's nonsense. Lise began to explain the situation, revealing that Fee was adopted 7 years ago and her real brother is the assassin Theo, a hidden character in the game. Gilbert immediately connected this to the year of the Great Fire in the capital, the same event that traumatized Alice and cost her parents. Gilbert recalled from his game knowledge that during that same fire, he had protected Alice in an abandoned church. He calculated that Ellie would have been 10 at the time and wondered if this was another instance of her using information from Eberaba. However, Lise clarified that Fee knew nothing about Eberaba. Feigning ignorance, Gilbert asked her to continue, though he thought to himself that he knew it. The memory brings forth the image of the dilapidated, abandoned church where they met. As a memory of Fee sadly murmuring that her brother wouldn't come home played out, Gilbert confirmed that she had been looking for this brother, the assassin Theo, and asked for proof. Lise provided details from the game, identifying assassin Theo as Theobald Meyer, a hidden character who only appears if Alice's courtesy stat falls below 20. Gilbert then noticed that Fee's hair was the same vivid silver color as Theobald's was described to be. Lise added that Theobald mentioned having a sister in the game's story, confirming the connection. This led Gilbert to wonder if they could use magic to reveal Theobald's hair color and find him more easily. Wilfried interjected with the report that Fee was being targeted, which was why Theobald had joined the Shadow Division to protect her. As Gilbert questioned what that was, Lise explained it is a secret royal organization, adding that things get complicated if Alice doesn't follow the Klaus route. She continued detailing Theobald's route, where he is tricked by rebels and implanted with a servant stone, forcing him to try and assassinate Klaus until Alice awakens a magic to erase it. The memory made Lise realize with a start that it was too late. She had to act before Klaus was killed. She recalled that Theobald's route ended with either a happy ending where he and Alice flee, or a bad ending where he is captured and executed. Having overheard the explanation, Fee was horrified to learn that her brother would attempt such a terrible thing as assassinating the crown prince. She confessed that while she was happy he was alive, his actions would bring trouble to the Alfheim family who had adopted her, despite the fact that he had once saved her. Gilbert noted Fee's kindness, but Lise grimly added that her own brother Kurt also had a bad ending where he planted explosives and killed both himself and Alice, shocking Gilbert. Lise admitted that, as Kurt's sister, her pragmatic reaction had been to think blowing up the palace was foolish. Seeing Fee's sadness over Theobald's story, she apologized for her lack of consideration, as Gilbert noted her harsh words. Returning to the matter at hand, Wilfried stated that they needed to secure Theobald. Lise agreed, reasoning that an assassination would be difficult without a traitor in the Shadow Division, but she still wondered where Theobald could be. Gilbert pointed out the practical difficulty, saying they couldn't just search the palace, and that he likely hadn't been found yet. Lise then questioned if finding him would even make things easy. He then recalled a key detail from the game, asking if Theobald had been implanted with subjugation magic, which would mean he couldn't disobey anyone holding a Master Stone. The narration concludes that Prince Klaus' path to a happy ending remains fraught with challenges. The narrative explains that Anna of Kleinert County possesses considerable knowledge of magic stones, which could help Ellie understand the vassal stone inside Theobald, the assassin targeting the Crown Prince. Meanwhile, Gilbert decided to check on Alice's progress with the Crown Prince on behalf of the suspended Ellie, insisting it was a mission and not just his own ulterior motives. He was really looking forward to it. In his office, His Highness Klaus reviewed some documents. Suddenly, Gilbert found himself teleported before Klaus, confused as to how he got there from the front garden. Klaus told him to be at ease, but Gilbert recalled from his past life that a superior's informality should not be taken at face value. Gilbert remained wary and confused. Klaus maintained his composed, unreadable expression. The prince continued to stare coolly at him. Gilbert nervously wondered if this summons was about Leah's, speculating that Klaus was warning him not to get too friendly with his fiancée. Klaus confirmed he'd heard Gilbert was getting close to Lise. Gilbert found this baffling, as Klaus himself was always with Alice, and he now understood why the prince was called the Ice Prince. He then considered another possibility. Perhaps Klaus wanted him to look after Ellie since he was so focused on Alice. Gilbert decided to give a safe, non-committal answer. As Gilbert began to speak Ellie's name, Klaus's expression visibly hardened. Correcting himself, Gilbert stated formally that he was simply enjoying a close friendship with Lady Elisabetta as a fellow student. Internally, Gilbert was terrified, realizing Klaus's eyes had changed color the moment he'd even attempted to use Ellie's familiar name. At that moment, Klaus had a revelation, becoming certain that the feeling he was experiencing was jealousy. Gilbert recalled how Elisabetta's actions had diverged from the game since the welcome party, where she wore the prince's colors instead of her game-accurate crimson dress. Taking a direct approach, Gilbert asked His Highness what his intentions were regarding Lady Elisabetta. He pressed further, asking if Klaus planned to keep her in this state without making her his concubine, to which the prince replied he would never do such a thing. When Gilbert asked if he would make her an official concubine, Klaus flatly stated he had no intention of taking one. Gilbert countered that a royal order could force the issue, but then mused that such bad faith would erode loyalty. He was perplexed. If not a concubine or mistress, what did Klaus want with Ellie? He then realized in shock that the only remaining position was that of queen. The scene shifts to a view from a window at night. Gilbert processed this stunning revelation. He could only react with stunned disbelief. Elsewhere, Lise and Fi's mother lamented that she wasn't invited on their fun-sounding secret festival exploration. Holding the souvenir they brought her, she exclaimed how cute it was and thanked Lise and Fi, promising to treasure it. Lise noted her mother's busy schedule in the capital, but their mother said she'd checked her calendar. Fi then shyly asked what she thought of their gift. Later that evening, the two sisters looked out a window as snow began to fall heavily. Fi wondered aloud if their brother Kurt had arrived safely at his sister-in-law's, who was due to give birth soon. Lise, however, wasn't watching the snow but the lights of a ritual procession outside, certain that His Highness was among them. She worried that he might catch a cold, recalling his weak constitution as a child, but then remembered he would be kept warm by a fire magic stone in his palanquin. Looking out at the distant lights, Lise affirmed to herself that Klaus was out there somewhere. The procession continued through the snowy town, with the crown crown prince riding inside his carriage. Lost in thought, Lizzie imagined she could eat 3 bowls of rice just from the feeling of contentment. She felt a wave of relief, thankful that she had managed to get through the year safely. Her gaze fell upon a framed photograph of Klaus. She reflected that the main story of the game had finally begun. And because her villainous act was so effective, Alice seemed to be progressing along Klaus's route as intended. With renewed determination, Lise vowed to herself that she would never make the wrong choice again. She stood with a resolute expression, her hands clasped in front of her. The capital city was decorated for a festival. The narration explained the Hutensai festival, a week-long period of festivities and prayer to welcome the new year in the Idonia kingdom. The scene shifted to the Idonia Royal Magic Academy on the day before winter break. There, Anna, the daughter of Count Kleinert, cheerfully asked Gilbert if he was looking forward to the festival. Gilbert, however, was preoccupied with his own plan: ensure Alice progresses on Klaus's route, prevent the prince's assassination, and secure a happy ending for everyone. The narration confirmed that the girl who had just spoken was indeed Anna. Suddenly, a great fire erupted in the city, which Lizzie's inner voice noted seemed to have started from negligence at a restaurant. With dawning horror, she recognized this as the infamous Great Fire from the game's plot. She panicked, wondering how it could be happening and why it couldn't be prevented. A flashback showed a younger Lise being held back by her maid. An adult's hand firmly held the small child's hand. In the present, her maid Carla grabbed her, forbidding her from leaving and ordering her to stay inside the mansion. Lise desperately told Carla to let her go, but Carla refused, explaining that even though a river would likely stop the flames, it was still too dangerous. As Lise protested, Carla firmly repeated her command for Lady Lizzie to remain quietly inside. Carla then reminded her that one of the disaster measures Lise herself had proposed was to avoid going to see a fire, questioning if she intended to break her own rule. Lise agonized internally, wondering if she should confess that she knew the Great Fire would happen, and was sorry she couldn't prevent it. She thought about her worries for Alice, a girl she had never even met, and her parents who were caught in the blaze. But seeing that the fire had already started, she despaired, feeling it was too late and that Carla wouldn't listen to her anyway. Elsewhere, watching the distant smoke, Gilbert wondered if his methods had been wrong. He questioned if he could have changed the game's scenario and the kingdom's predetermined fate by making better choices. At the same time, Prince Klaus watched the events unfold with a grim expression, asking himself if he could change things. He hardened his resolve, determined to change what happens next. She too was questioning her own role, wondering if she could truly make him happy, admitting to herself that she didn't know the answer. But she resolved that there must be something that only she could do. Her expression hardened with a similar determination. Firm in her decision, Lise declared she just had to do it and called for Carla, stating she had a request. Suddenly, a noise from the window startled her, and she demanded to know who was there. A figure appeared, silhouetted against the night sky. Looking up, Lise was stunned to see it was Klaus. In disbelief, she wondered if it was really him or just a hallucination, questioning if her prayers had been answered since he had just come through the window. She recalled that it had been some time since she was notified of her suspension. Klaus broke the silence, asking if she had been well. Lizzie's mind raced, realizing what had happened. She replied that she was glad to see him doing well too, while internally praising Carla, who confirmed that the matter was already handled. The realization of Carla's efficiency left her momentarily stunned. Concerned that he must be cold from being outside, Lizzie offered to have tea made, but Klaus told her there was no need. She turned away, intending to prepare the tea anyway. He apologized for intruding like a thief in the night, explaining that he would be leaving soon, though Lizzie quietly protested. Internally, Lise found the idea of a thief Klaus charming, thinking it added a roguish appeal to him like a phantom thief. Klaus then insisted that she not blame the guards, assuring her there was no failure on their part. Lise marveled to herself at how amazing it was that Klaus had managed to slip through such a tight security net. She asked if the ritual procession was still ongoing, and Klaus confirmed it was, explaining he had slipped away while passing by. Much to her shock, worried, Lizzie questioned if it was really okay for him to be there by himself. Klaus reassured her that no one ever peeks inside the palanquin, and that he had left instructions with Wilfried in case he was discovered, prompting Lise to feel sorry for Wilfried for the first time ever. This encounter forced Lise to reconsider her perception of Klaus. She had always seen him as a serious rule follower, but now realized he was surprisingly playful and cute. Klaus looked at her, his expression unreadable. His gaze remained steady and intense. Lizzie looked back, her own feelings in turmoil. A blush crept up her cheeks as she processed her new feelings for him. She recalled how he had appeared before her, explaining he had no particular reason for the visit other than simply wanting to see her face. Taken aback, she could only question if he truly meant her face. He had looked down at her with a serious, unreadable expression. He simply confirmed his reason, her face. Blushing and flustered by his affirmation, Ellie managed to stammer out a thank you. His hand then reached out towards her. Klaus gently lifted her chin, leaving her stunned and speechless at his sudden proximity. Elsewhere, Gilbert contemplated Ellie's situation, reasoning that Klaus' behavior was only normal for a possessive lover, not a fiancé in a sham engagement. He also noted that despite the engagement being for show, no other noble sons ever approached her. This led him to wonder what had been going on the entire time. As he recalled they hadn't even had tea parties lately, his companion asked if he had something to say. Gilbert then voiced his confusion, questioning why Klaus would be so cold to Ellie if he was secretly being so protective. In a flashback, Lise recalled knowing from her past life that a great fire would occur in the capital 7 years before the game's story, when she was 10. She had thought that with 2 years' notice, she could prevent the fire, but she was mistaken. Knowing her father, the Marquis, would listen to a logical argument, she had presented him with a report she compiled on the town's fire vulnerabilities for the Royal Council. She had even pinpointed the central area where the fire was expected to start. Back in the present, during her suspension, Lise noted it was about half a year until the Spirit Festival. She prayed fervently that Klaus's assassination would be prevented, and that he and Alice could achieve their happy ending from the game. A framed photo of the prince sat on her desk. Suddenly she jolted upright with a start. Realizing she was suffering from a lack of Klaus due to her suspension, she desperately wished to see him, even if only for a moment. In another scene, Prince Klaus reflected that things were becoming unmanageable, worrying that his unannounced absence could be mistaken for a kidnapping or assassination. When Ellie asked about the king, Klaus admitted he'd simply told his father he was going out for a bit. A shocked Ellie questioned why he would go to such lengths just to come see her. He once again stated there was no particular reason, leaving Ellie stunned that he wasn't even there on a secret mission. Lise is visibly startled by his touch. Lise feels the warmth from Klaus' hand on her cheek and murmurs that it's warm. She quickly clarifies that it's just because his own hands are cold. Flustered, she struggles to explain her reaction. Klaus, however, closes his eyes and says her warmth feels just right. Overwhelmed by his proximity, Lise can only stammer in agreement. Suddenly, Lise's attention is drawn to the hallway, and she wonders what the noise was. She realizes with embarrassment that someone was watching them the whole time. Through the open doorway, figures could be seen in the corridor. Unfazed, Klaus turns to leave, bidding her farewell until their next meeting. Lise rushes to the window to watch him go. She cries out in shock, realizing he's on the second floor and about to jump. Klaus leaps gracefully from the balcony window. As her maid arrives, Lisa internally compares Klaus to a ninja before quickly saying it was nothing. He lands safely on the snowy ground below. As he walks away, Lise calls out from the window, telling him to be careful. She watches him depart with a soft, lingering smile. Lise wonders aloud why the prince came to visit, a question Carla echoes. Carla remarks that the prince's demeanor seemed unusually soft, even wondering if he was an imposter. Lise blushes as she ponders her maid's words. A sudden realization dawns on her. She theatrically suggests his visit was a gift from God for her hard work as a villainess, but Carla flatly denies it. Lise then muses it was a Christmas present from Santa, prompting Carla to tell her to get a hold of herself. Elsewhere, Alice was being presented as the beloved child, one who receives the protection of the 5 elements. Seizing the opportunity, Count Seifried declared his intention to adopt her into his house, provided no one objected. When asked, Crown Prince Clout stated he had no objections to the arrangement. An observer realized this meant the Seifried house was positioning the beloved child to become the future crown princess. Georg von Buttstedt confronted Seifried, sarcastically noting that this move would make him the crown prince's father-in-law, and calling it an audacious plan for a former commoner. He then reflected on the past, recalling his constant worry for the kingdom after the former queen's death, as the king was too honest and easily swayed. However, he noted there had been a pleasant miscalculation. That miscalculation was Crown Prince Klaus himself, who despite Georg's efforts to protect him, proved to be a shrewd political operator, skillfully using his authority to outmaneuver his opponents. Georg admitted that Klaus' youthful tendency to rush things had caused him considerable anxiety on more than one occasion. Nevertheless, he acknowledged that the palace's current stability was the direct result of the prince forcefully pushing his agenda over the last decade. In a memory, Klaus informed Georg that while he would eventually present his choice to the council, he intended to personally decide on the crown princess. Recalling the king's wish for his son to choose his own partner, Klaus asked for Georg's approval. Georg privately agreed, believing that a man as capable as Klaus needed someone he could truly love. Georg considered it a joyous occasion that the prince had chosen a partner, but also thought about Lady Alvaheim, whose marriageable age was a pressing concern. He concluded that they should release her from her duty as fiancée soon. Meanwhile, Lise greeted her father, asking how he was feeling. He curtly replied that it was of no concern to her. Her father, Walton von Alvaheim, then told Lise he was glad she was healthy but expressed disappointment, wishing she had grown to be more graceful and calm. Lise wryly thought to herself that parenting must be difficult. She then addressed her father, confirming her suspension period had ended and noting that while he'd scolded her, his anger seemed to have cooled, cheekily suggesting they let bygones be bygones. She called out to her father again, seeking his response. Walton conceded her point but admonished her, stating that the person at fault shouldn't be the one to say, all's well that ends well. Setting the matter aside, he tried to continue, but Lise simply dismissed his concern, saying it was fine. Her father pressed on, asking about her future and whether her feelings had changed. She internally reflected on that future, acknowledging her role as the villainess was merely to be a scapegoat for the crown princess. She knew that for Klaus to have his happy ending with Alice and become a great king, her engagement must be dissolved before any marriage announcement. A brief flash forward showed a royal marriage announcement. She knew that once the game's story concluded after graduation, there'd be nothing left for her to do for Klaus, and she confirmed to her father that her feelings remained unchanged. Lise then stated her wish to become a bard and travel to various places after she graduates from the academy. A flashback began, showing a younger Lise insisting she was fine after a stumble. Lise narrated that as a child she never complained, even when she struggled with her tasks. Blushing but determined, her younger self would simply resolve to try again. She recalled perfectly finishing impossible amounts of homework, reflecting that unlike the naturally gifted Klaus, her own abilities were not high, forcing her to work harder. The flashback continued, showing the moment she stumbled and dropped a pile of books. After falling, the young Reze quickly apologized. A young boy's voice asked if she was injured, to which she replied she was not. The boy was revealed to be a young Prince Klaus. Reze looked up, stunned to see it was him. Klaus kindly reached a hand out to her. Completely flustered, she insisted she was fine and hastily ran away. Back in the present, Reze explained to her friend Siegfried that she had clung to her queen's education for Klaus' sake, and Siegfried listened with understanding. Reze then recalled the magic power test at age 10, noting it was the only time she ever cried, and the day she stopped saying she wanted to become Klaus' bride. Siegfried remembered that was when Reze started talking about becoming a bard, admitting she hadn't thought her friend was serious. Reze confessed she didn't know why that idea came to her, speculating it might have been a form of escapism. Still, she mused that the life of a wandering traveler sounded quite nice. She then cheekily suggested that as a traveler she could promote Klaus's greatness in every place she visited. However, Reze acknowledged the reality that her family was unlikely to understand or approve of her dream. She concluded that once she fulfilled her role as fiancé, she would have the royal palace's backing, which would force her family to listen to her requests. Her father then began a difficult conversation, admitting he knew this day would eventually come, but she simply asked what was the matter. He revealed that Prince Klaus had officially announced his decision regarding the crown princess at that day's court council. His hand gestured softly as he spoke. Upon hearing the news, Reze maintained a calm expression and simply replied, "Is that so?" In the memory he had looked down, lost in thought. Reze had noted with surprise that his visit was that very day. He had asked her to keep his visit a secret, and when she asked if he had just laughed, he confirmed that he had. Meanwhile, in the royal palace's deliberation room, the powerful Prime Minister Georg von Buttstedt listened to the proceedings. An official concluded his report on the budget and asked if there were any questions. He gestured to signify the end of his presentation. Another council member then raised a new topic, asking if a guardian had been decided for Alice Amelt. Following this, Prime Minister Georg pledged his full support for His Majesty's decision. Prince Klaus, addressed as Your Majesty, acknowledged Georg's many years of dedicated service. Georg humbly replied that such words were an honor he felt he did not deserve. A wide view showed the stately grounds of the palace. While the court decided fates, Reze was lost in her own memories, recalling her fear that her average magic power would prevent her from becoming Klaus's bride. She knew that in her kingdom a queen without magic was unthinkable. The thought was accompanied by a sudden painful memory of her maid crying out that she was injured. Back in the present, Reze reflected on the unheard-of fate of becoming a bard, a strange reward in a kingdom where noble women married young. She had always assumed her own marriage would be arranged next, once Klaus's partner was decided. Surprisingly, her father hadn't objected to the strange proposal, though he hadn't agreed to it either. Her father then looked at her, recalling how she had adored Prince Klaus since she was a child. He praised her for fulfilling her duties as fiancée without bitterness, declaring her the pride of their house. Reze's father, Walton von Alveheim, informed her that Prince Klaus had officially declared his decision regarding the crown princess at the Imperial Council. Reze processed this news, realizing Klaus had made his choice, and she let out a small, satisfied laugh. With a confident smile, she thought to herself that everything was going just as she had planned. While the announcement came sooner than she expected, Reze mused that it was for the best. Recalling that in the game, Klaus and Alice's union happens at the very end. She reasoned that Alice likely knew nothing about it yet and wondered what Klaus would do if she rejected his proposal. However, she immediately scoffed at the idea, finding it impossible that anyone would reject the prince. Gushing over how handsome Klaus was, she concluded that Alice was bound to fall for him. In fact, she was sure Alice already had. Reze saw the public declaration as a clever tactic by Klaus to cut off any avenues of escape for his chosen bride. Regardless, she knew that his declaration at the council meant her own engagement could be annulled at any moment. She felt no shock, however, having been prepared for this outcome for a long time. In fact, she celebrated internally, reflecting on the years of scheming and effort that were finally bearing fruit, with everything proceeding exactly as she had envisioned. Lying face down on her bed, Reze gloated that she should be bursting into laughter, which prompted her maid, Carla, to call out to her. Reze remained sprawled on her bed. Her feet dangled off the edge in her slippers. Carla then asked her to stop talking to herself while face down, finding it a bit creepy, to which Reze gave no reply. Suddenly, Reze sat up, startling Carla. She then grabbed a surprised Carla, pulling her down onto the bed. Carla cried out in shock at her lady's sudden action. Flushed from the exertion, Reze complained that it was hot. Her maid, Carla, quickly recovered and offered her a glass of water. After downing the water, Reze immediately asked for another glass. Carla agreed, on the condition that Reze drink it more normally this time, and Reze promised she would not do it again. Reze then began to reminisce about Klaus' secret visit, admitting she had been overjoyed and even wondered if he liked her, but now dismissed it as mere fan service before their engagement ended. Looking exhausted, Reze wondered aloud what she was honestly doing with herself. Carla, standing nearby, dryly agreed with the sentiment. Reze took a moment to drink from a cup, looking pensive. Carla then announced that Reze's father had permitted her to go on a broken hearts trip, and that she would be accompanying her. A troubled Reze started to speak. After quietly repeating the phrase broken hearts, Leze formally asked Carla to come with her, and Carla confirmed she intended to from the start, teasing that Leze couldn't even book an inn by herself. Leze then asked what would become of the Roos house, since Carla was its head. The maid explained that she would simply retire and pass on her title if Leze were to marry. In any case, she reassured her young mistress she would follow her to her new home as she is first and foremost Lady Leze's maid. Touched by this unwavering loyalty, Leze could only thank her. Carla then took the opportunity to state that she had some thoughts she wished to share with her lady. She began by confirming that Theobald Meyer was indeed in the dark section when she retired 10 years ago, noting that his game alias, silver hair, and age all matched. As a confused Leze listened, Carla elaborated that the dark section has a youth unit for spies, and that she recalled Theo being a nepotism hire, as she herself had instructed that unit. Aghast, Leze interrupted, exclaiming that Carla shouldn't be talking about the inner workings of the dark section. She knew it was a top-secret organization, and that even speaking of it could lead to criminal charges. Leze's expression was filled with concern. She worried it was a slip of the tongue, but then reasoned that the level-headed Carla would never make such a mistake, having never mentioned it in 10 years. Carla confirmed this was deliberate, stating that now was the time to speak. When Leze questioned the timing, Carla affirmed it, explaining that they were alone and that the palace's shadows do not enter the mansion. Carla added that as long as Leze kept it confidential, no one would find out. But Leze recalled other times they had been alone in the mansion. Carla clarified that on those occasions, Leze was too preoccupied with her hobbies to be disturbed, which left Leze momentarily speechless. Leze marveled at Carla's mysterious standards, where her hobbies took priority over leaking state secrets as Carla prepared to add more. Carla then revealed non-public information she knew as head of the Roos house. 2 years ago, the Master Stone and service were stolen from the palace, and neither the items nor the culprit have been found. Lise connected this to her game knowledge, realizing that around that time, the thugs targeting her sister Phi had stopped appearing. She recalled that in the game, Theobald was used by a rebellious count who held Phi hostage. She deduced that the count likely hired those thugs, and that Theobald must have had the servant stone embedded in him, just as in the game's plot. Leze thanked Carla but again questioned if she should have been told such secrets, to which Carla simply remarked that her lady tends to be a bit too serious. Carla then advised Leze that if she wished to know about the dark section, she should make use of the resource right in front of her. Leze protested that this involved state secrets, but Carla countered that from her perspective, the game stories Leze spoke of were just as significant. She pointed out that the details Leze knew about Theobald's route far exceeded what a marquis's daughter should know, and warned her not to speak of them lightly. As Carla prepared to say more, a startled Leze braced for another revelation and quietly agreed to be careful. However, Carla simply said no and changed the subject, telling Leze that since her health had returned, it was time to write replies to her invitations. Looking at a pile of invitations, Leze mused that despite only attending the bare minimum of social events, she was always invited and had grown accustomed to writing letters of refusal. She then noticed one particular letter and realized with surprise that it was from the Vertical Rolls, her nickname for Lady Pricel. Deciding she should attend this one since they were friends, Leze let out a triumphant laugh. Her maid Carla dryly pointed out the smirk on her face, causing a flustered Leze to trail off in surprise. Her attention was then caught by something else, and she trailed off in thought. The invitation was for a tea party, and soon Leze found herself at an elegant outdoor table. She thanked her host for the invitation, and Hannah von Fulhaber formally welcomed Lady Elisabetta in return. Hannah is the daughter of a viscount, and as Leze recalled from the game Everaba, the protagonist Alice's best friend. Hannah cheerfully dismisses Leze's formal thanks. Holding her fan, Leze shows a determined expression. Leze internally acknowledges that she doesn't know what Hannah, a close friend of her rival Alice, might be plotting, but she resolves to accept the challenge. Leze's face is shown in a close-up, her expression firm. Hannah insists it's nothing sinister, explaining that Alice wanted to see Leze. However, Leze reflects that, as Klaus's fiancé to be annulled, and Hannah being the best friend of the top candidate to be his wife, they should naturally be enemies. Hannah explains she invited Leze because she rarely attends parties, and was curious about what would happen, adding that it's just the three of them. As Alice arrives, Leze internally identifies her as the game's protagonist. Alice calls out happily to Lady Elisabetta. Leze is struck by how dazzling Alice has become, thinking she gets cuter with every meeting. She recalls that stats in Everaba maxed out at 99 and wonders if Alice has already reached that in reality. Leze worries that if Alice's charm gets any higher, it will interfere with her daily life. Seeing Leze, Alice thinks to herself that Lord Klaus is just as charming, their power being equal. As Alice begins to thank her, Leze cuts her off with a cool good day. Leze then chides Alice for her informal approach, sarcastically asking if she already sees herself as the crown princess. A flustered Alice quickly apologizes and offers a proper greeting. Leze internally remarks that Alice is as much of a free spirit as ever. She continues her assessment, noting that Alice's curtsy shows her etiquette is progressing well. Mentally converting it to a game stat, Leze estimates Alice's etiquette is around 70 to 80, an ideal number for this time. Alice explains she's wanted to thank Leze this whole time, as Leze was suspended while Alice was out of school recovering. Hearing this, Leze thinks that Alice has become strong. Alice bows and thanks Lady Elisabetta for saving her, which makes Leze internally exclaim how cute she is. A flustered Leze stares at the earnest-looking Alice. Leze quickly denies saving Alice for her sake, but internally she's so overwhelmed she wonders if Alice is a fairy or an elemental, before deciding she must be the fairy king. Hannah smoothly intervenes, suggesting they sit and start the tea party, while Lise marvels at getting to see the real thing. Taking in her surroundings, Lise recognizes the scene as Hannah's tea party from the game. She then notices the scones and correctly identifies them as being from the Schneeball pastry shop. Hannah compliments Lise's sharp eye and reveals Alice brought them. She then asks Alice about her connection to the Boolers, which Alice confirms. As Alice explains the shop owners have been kind to her since childhood, Lise internally confirms she already knew this information. Lise recalls from the game's guidebook that Johan, the shop owner's son, is a capture target and Alice's childhood friend. Her thoughts are cut short when Alice asks how she knew about Johan. Caught off guard, Lise quickly explained that she knew their names because they were all students at the same academy, unable to admit her knowledge came from a game guidebook. Besides, she thought to herself, being so well-informed was simply what was expected of a support character. As Hannah praised the Alvaheim estate's food, she suddenly recalled Lise muttering about a support character and asked what she meant, startling Lise once again. A flustered Lise attempts a circular definition, which Hannah immediately points out explains absolutely nothing. Hannah quickly changes the subject, gushing about how cool Lord Gilbert was when he carried an unconscious Alice in his arms like a princess. Alice, who was unconscious, confirms that Gilbert carried her to the infirmary, and Hannah agrees enthusiastically. Hannah then suggests to Alice that Lord Gilbert might be interested in her, causing Lise to internally celebrate as she recognizes the significant line. She realizes this is the Hannah's Tea Party affection level check from the Otomi game. A narration explains that in the game Evergreen Lovers, players use Hannah's changing dialogue at her tea parties to judge a capture target's affection level. The narration further clarifies that, according to a strategy site, Hannah's line indicates an affection level of 60-70, with different lines for higher levels. Lise internally notes that Gilbert's affection for Alice is mediocre but dismisses it, admitting she doesn't really care about him. Her thoughts drift to Alice, whom she now sees more as a daughter or granddaughter than a game protagonist. What truly matters to Lise is the excitement of experiencing Hannah's tea party, an event she thought she would only ever see in the game, in person. As Alice mentions meeting Lady Rosine, Lise internally takes pride in her own scheming, feeling she is the one who raised Alice and guided her onto Lord Klaus's route. She recalls, however, that her own first meeting with Lord Klaus was quite different, remembering how her 5-year-old self had pushed him. Hannah observes that Alice and Lady Rosine seem to have hit it off, noting that Alice is now calling her by her formal title. Lise looks on with an expression of jealousy. She internally complains about Drill Curls, bragging about their friendship, but then concedes it's natural for her to be happy and admits her own jealousy. Lise is suddenly startled. Alice reminds Lady Elisabetta that she had previously said Alice lacked courage, a stat from the game, which Lise confirms with surprise. Lise recalls that the courage stat was surprisingly important in the Odom game, as a low score prevented bold choices from even appearing. As Alice teases her for lacking courage, Lise admits she was just thinking to herself about trying to be more courageous. Mustering all her courage, a blushing Alice declares that she also wants to become friends with Lady Elisabetta, leaving Lise completely stunned. Alice continues, pointing out that Lise sometimes drops the lady from her name and asks her to call her just Alice all the time. Growing bolder, Alice adds that she would also like to call Elisabetta by the more familiar Lady Lise, which leaves Lise speechless with shock. A flustered Lise stammers at Alice, telling her that this is not the correct way to be using her newfound courage. Watching them, Hannah observes that Lady Elisabetta is always looking out for Alice in her own unique way. Alice just giggles and says it's nothing, while the embarrassed Lise begs her to stop. Hannah's observation continues in her thoughts, as she muses that Lady Elisabetta might, but her thought is left unfinished. In the library, Elisabetta wondered if there was any way to counteract the subjugation magic that linked Theobald's vassal stone to the Master's stone. She recalled that within dark magic there was a type called a pact, which created an unbreakable vow, and she suspected the subjugation magic operated on a similar principle. However, subjugation required magic stones for both parties, whereas a pact was cast by a dark mage, making the participants' compatibility irrelevant. This suggested subjugation was a spell that should normally only work between two dark mages. She knew that because subjugation was a forbidden art, there was very little information available to help her make a judgment. This meant Theobald was bound to obey whoever held the Master's stone. A flash of light represented the moment of magical intervention. She remembered that in the game Everlaba, Alice managed to destroy Theobald's vassal stone in his route, but there was no description of the magic she used. Lamenting the lack of information, she wished she at least knew the magic formula, then wondered if one even existed in the game's lore. Still, for her plan to succeed, guiding Alice to Klaus's route, preventing his assassination and giving everyone a happy ending, saving Theobald was essential. While she was determined to stop the assassination of Prince Klaus, she knew the real problem was figuring out how to rescue Theobald. She reasoned that if Theobald actually moved to assassinate the crown prince, his execution would be unavoidable, even if he failed. If that happened, she knew his sister Fiona would be heartbroken. Elisabetta was absolutely unwilling to accept a future where Klaus's happiness was built upon the tears of Theobald and Fiona. On the other hand, she couldn't bear the pain of watching Klaus be assassinated, She resolved to change this world's fate, even if her own love vanished like foam on the sea. With her mind made up to have Alice choose Klaus's route, Elisabetta steeled her resolve. She told herself to push forward, wryly admitting that at least she had more than enough passion for the task. She recalled that the kingdom's long 4-month winter vacation was scheduled to coincide with the social season, when nobles gathered in the capital for the royal council. And yet she fumed. The entire vacation had passed, with her only becoming more knowledgeable about magic stones, achieving zero progress on her actual goals and wasting 4 precious months. Her last hope was, suddenly, a voice called out her name. It was Gilbert. Startled, Elisabetta asked what he wanted, chiding him for approaching without even a proper greeting. She greeted Lord Gilbert formally, only for him to complain that a Lady Animaria had just told him to keep some distance, which Elisabetta found pathetic. She told him not to take his frustrations out on her, but he insisted he hadn't been rejected yet. Changing the subject, Gilbert then accused Ellie of deceiving him. When a confused Elisabetta asked what he meant, he reminded her that she'd once said Prince Klaus was actually a kind person despite his cold appearance, a statement she confirmed. Gilbert scoffed at the idea of Klaus being kind and began to complain about the terrible ordeal he had suffered during the winter vacation. He continued his rant, calling Klaus a demon with a cool face, especially when it came to his treatment of Elisabetta. When Elisabetta asked what was wrong, Gilbert quickly backtracked and shyly asked if she would call him Gilbert Sama again like she had before. Elisabetta was creeped out, thinking that if he wanted to get closer to her, he should be the one to initiate it. Her thoughts were cut short when she spotted Prince Klaus nearby and cheerfully greeted him, receiving a simple nod in return. Internally, Elisabetta was ecstatic, feeling incredibly lucky to see the rarely spotted prince at the academy, and even get to greet him in the morning. Her heart gave. She then asked what brought him to their classroom, inwardly admiring how cool he looked. He replied that he was there to see Muller. When she asked if he meant Gilbert, Klaus explained that student council work was piling up. Elisabetta exclaimed that he must be busy, and the prince agreed. A thump at the sight of him. Klaus mentioned that Muller had been helping him during the winter break. Elisabetta reflected on how busy Klaus must be with both his royal duties and his role as student council president. But then she paused, questioning the timing of the winter break. A chibi version of Elisabetta fumed with jealousy. Meanwhile, Klaus told Miller he had already notified the teacher, so he needn't worry about missing class. A flustered Gilbert could only manage a meek agreement with His Highness. Elisabetta wondered about Gilbert, thinking it was an incredible perk to be able to spend time with Klaus even during lessons. Nearby students gossiped that Gilbert was probably just upset that his companion was another boy instead of a girl. Sometime later, Elisabetta noted that it was already after school. Chewing on a handkerchief, she fumed that Gilbert got to spend the entire day with Klaus for work, declaring her envy. Her maid Carla then addressed her as Lady Lise. Carla was delighted to see her using the handkerchief, saying it was worth preparing for her. Just then, Gilbert von Muller appeared, looking over at them with a perplexed expression. As Carla noted that Lizzie still looked a bit awkward, Lizzie retorted that she doesn't normally bite handkerchiefs. Just then, Gilbert appeared, asking what they were doing. Thinking, speak of the devil, Lise greeted Gilbert, who flirtatiously asked if they had been talking about him. He continued teasing, asking if she was that lonely without him, which earned him an unimpressed look from Lizzie. Gilbert then asked why they were there. Lizzie explained they were heading to the library for his research materials and pointed out he was going the wrong way for home. He explained he'd just been freed from student council duty and was getting his things when he saw them, prompting Lizzie to remark on how busy the council was. She asked if Klaus was still at the academy, but Gilbert informed her that the prince had already returned to the palace. Lizzie mused that there seemed to be a lot of paperwork at this time of year. She added that her help wasn't needed anyway. Gilbert admitted his surprise at how incredibly fast the prince worked, but Lizzie countered that his workload would never decrease if they just left everything to him. She reminded him that Klaus also had his duties as crown prince to attend to. Lise sternly told Gilbert to work like a horse to reduce Klaus's burden, prompting Gilbert to whine that Ellie-chan should be nicer to him. In the library, Elisabetta began her search among the bookshelves. Gilbert hesitantly tried to get Ellie's attention. Ignoring him, Lise turned to Carla, announcing it was time to begin their search. Her eyes landed on a particular book held out before her. Gilbert presented the book, explaining it was about magic stone research and also contained information on the Master Stone and Servant Stone, leaving Lizzie stunned. Her eyes widened further as she took in the title page of the ancient tome. She immediately began flipping through the pages, searching for the specific information. Her expression settled into one of intense focus. Finally, she found it, the ritual for a dark magic spell of subjugation. Reading the text, she saw it described a contract binding a servant to a master and mentioned the master's odd, a term she didn't recognize. She wondered if odd meant magical power, then continued reading that the spell forcibly subjugated the servant's spirit and required magic from both parties for every command. Gilbert expressed his surprise that Ellie could read the ancient language, but she explained part of her education to become queen. She then pointed out that he should have learned it in his academy classes, though Gilbert admitted he couldn't read even half of it. Elisabetta conceded that the language was slightly different from what they were taught, noting that while the grammar was modern, it had ancient remnants, leading her to date the book to about 200 years ago. Gilbert was amazed that she could deduce all of that. He stared at her in astonishment. Suddenly, Elisabetta offered to let him borrow the book, warning him to return it quickly. A surprised but grateful Gilbert accepted. Elisabetta then asked Gil where he had borrowed the book, and he replied that he got it from Anna. Gilbert watched her with a curious expression. Mulling this over, Elisabetta recalled that Count Kleinert's domain was a known producer of dark magic stones. She reasoned that it wouldn't be strange for such a document to be preserved there, as Gilbert praised Anna for being amazing. However, she pointed out that the book was not only about forbidden arts, but was also a historically significant cultural property. She questioned if Anna would really lend such a precious item to a man who had rejected her, a claim Gilbert immediately denied. Gilbert looked away, flustered. Elisabetta continued to ponder, concluding that Count Kleinert would only lend the book to an outsider upon a request from the royal palace. She then recalled that Gilbert had been with Prince Klaus during the winter break, helping the student council. Putting the pieces together, she called out to Gil. He laughed, admitting that she was sharp. Gilbert then revealed that His Highness, Prince Klaus, had personally borrowed the book from the Kleinert family, which left Elisabetta stunned. He began to clarify that it wasn't exactly a formal request from the palace. As Elisabetta questioned how Klaus could have borrowed it personally, a flashback showed the prince explaining that he knew she was researching magic stones, and had asked Anna about the book on her behalf. Klaus continued, noting that while the royal palace had a copy, it was forbidden to be taken out. He had gone to great lengths for her. Since the original was Count Kleinert's personal property, a shocked Elisabetta asked if Klaus had gone to the count's territory himself, and if Gil had gone too. Gilbert clarified that he had gone to make the request, thinking the count would agree if the prince asked. He then wryly added that it wasn't so much accompanying him as being dragged along. Gilbert then noticed Elisabetta holding out a handkerchief to him and asked why she was doing so. Instead of answering, she began chewing on the handkerchief, fuming with jealousy that he'd gone on an outing with Klaus when she never had. Gilbert told her to stop, but Carla calmly reassured him. Gilbert then tried to calm the sulking Elisabetta, who was consumed by her envy. Carla explained that the handkerchief was specifically provided for such an occasion, which only confused Gilbert further. He offered her a drink as she continued to mutter about her jealousy. He then tried to get her attention by addressing her familiarly as Ellie-chan. He observed that she truly loved His Highness, despite her claims of only aiming for the happy ending of the crown prince's route. Startled, Elisabetta asked why he was suddenly bringing that up. Gilbert pressed on, asking if hypothetically she could become crown princess, she would ever consider obstructing the prince and Alice. Elisabetta curtly replied that she disliked such unrealistic hypotheticals. He insisted, pointing out that with her game knowledge, she could simply prevent the prince's assassination and then manipulate events to cause a bad ending. Elisabetta confessed that it wasn't as if such thoughts had never crossed her mind, but Elisabetta declared, "I would never do such a thing." A memory surfaced of a young grieving Klaus. She said she wouldn't want to be the cause of Klaus wearing such an expression, remembering his past words about their separate destinies. In her memory, Klaus had concluded that they must walk their separate ways. Gilbert, confused, asked what expression she meant, and if she had seen it somewhere, perhaps within the game. Elisabetta clarified that it was the expression Klaus wore only once, at the time of the former queen's death. She continued that she had seen it in both worlds, trailing off as she recalled seeing it in her current life as well. His confusion was palpable as he waited for her to continue. Elisabetta then reminded Gilbert that he also knew of the happy ending in Klaus's route. She tearfully wondered how she could ever face standing beside the prince, after secretly robbing him of such a happy future. A remorseful Gilbert apologized to Ellie as she began to cry. Elisabetta vehemently denied crying and demanded to know what evidence he had for such an outrageous claim, while Gilbert insisted she clearly was. Gilbert challenged her to lower the fan from her face, but she refused, claiming its see-through material was sufficient. He retorted that the fan's gaudy decorations made it impossible to see through. Shifting her focus, Elisabetta thought that with the item she held, she might be able to remove Theobald's curse. She steeled her resolve, vowing that she would absolutely avert a bad ending. At a social gathering, Lady Dorothea urged Lady Hannah to go see the prince with her. The chapter begins. Hannah asked her to wait, but Dorothea, identified as the daughter of Count Baumann, insisted they couldn't possibly waste such a perfect opportunity. Nearby, the prince sighed as Dorothea declared that with Elisabetta gone, now was their only chance. Dorothea fumed internally, thinking of Elisabetta as an annoying woman who always got in her way simply because she couldn't have the prince herself. The narrator explained that despite rumors of Prince Klaus choosing Alice Imelt, Lady Dorothea remained a formidable rival who hadn't given up. However, a gag order prevented Alice from discussing the matter with anyone. While a normal person might take the gag order as confirmation, Hannah reasoned otherwise. She argued that if Alice, the beloved child, were truly chosen, there'd be no need for secrecy, implying the prince's fiancé was someone else. Dorothea triumphantly concluded that she still had a chance. Hannah found this overly optimistic but looked forward to seeing a handsome man up close. The conversation among the ladies then turned. Dorothea then pointed out that Lady Hannah had recently become quite friendly with Elisabetta. Another lady at the party brought up an old rumor that the prince had once gifted Elisabetta weeds for her birthday. When asked if the rumor was about Lady Elisabetta, Hannah confirmed it. Alice quietly added that she had heard that rumor as well. One of the girls found the idea amusing and thought about asking the prince if it was true. Another lady simply commented that she was envious. Seizing the moment, Hannah asked Prince Klaus what kind of flowers Elisabetta liked. He replied that he always gives Lizzie her favorite flowers on her birthday. The prince then pointed towards a plant, identifying it as the one. Dorothea looked over to see what he was indicating. She identified the flower as shepherd's purse or Nazuna and called it rather plain, a fact the prince confirmed. Dorothea added that it was no wonder someone might mistake it for a weed. Hannah thought to herself that it certainly was a weed. She then wondered about the prince's intentions for gifting it. Was it an act of malice, or was he perhaps unaware that shepherd's purse is considered a weed? Hannah recalled seeing a similar flower embroidered on Elisabetta's handkerchiefs. Hearing this, Dorothea scoffed that despite her refined act, Elisabetta might be quite common at heart. While Hannah was still processing the information in disbelief, Dorothea sneered that a weed-like flower suited Elisabetta perfectly. Another lady then asked the prince what his favorite flower was, to which he calmly replied that he also liked shepherd's purse the best. Elisabetta was left completely stunned by his unexpected confession, as the other girls fell silent in astonishment. Dorothea was struck with the horrifying realization of what she had just said about the prince's favorite flower. The prince, noticing her frozen expression, wondered aloud if she needed something. Startled, Dorothea non-defensively retorted that it was none of his business. Hannah Sam then calmly clarified to the others that no one had said it was wrong, only that it was unexpected. She explained that she had assumed Lady Elisabetta would prefer more flamboyant flowers. Elisabetta insisted the shepherd's purse flowers were pretty and lovely, and Hannah conceded that they were small and cute. Pleased, Elisabetta noted that Alice seemed to understand their appeal. Alice agreed that the flowers were cute and added that they were also delicious to eat, which shocked Elisabetta. Gilbert then chimed in, teasingly asking if Eliti-chan had received shepherd's purse flowers from the prince for her birthday again this year. Elisabetta confirmed that she had, before questioning why he was attending their tea party so casually. Hannah playfully chided Elisabetta for being so cold, and Gilbert pleaded that it was fine for him to join them once in a while. As Elisabetta internally noted that she had turned 17 over the winter break, Hannah praised Gilbert for being so understanding. She reflected that despite her flashy appearance and love for attention, she disliked large crowds, so her family respected her wishes by keeping her birthday parties modest. She recalled her older brother sending her a carved wooden bear, a gift she considered entirely unsuitable, along with a note apologizing for his absence. Her thoughts turned to Prince Klaus, who also sent her shepherd's purse flowers every year. Elisabetta mused that since her birthday was out of season for the flowers, Klaus used the royal greenhouse to grow them, a privilege of being his fiancée. He always included jewelry as well, which she attributed to his dutiful nature. This year's gift had been a green bouquet with holly and mistletoe, which had been a great hit at a recent garden party. A wave of sadness washed over her as she realized this would likely be the last time, fondly recalling picking those same flowers with Klaus when they were children. Her reminiscing caught the attention of the others. Hannah was fascinated by the idea of the Ice Prince picking flowers, and Alice eagerly asked to hear stories of Lady Lee's childhood. As Elisabetta recalled meeting Klaus frequently in the past, Gilbert cut in, observing that she still gets flustered around the prince and asking if she'd ever get used to him. Elisabetta snapped back that it was fine when she was a child, but it grew embarrassing as she got older. As one of the girls sympathized, a memory of her younger self surfaced. In the flashback, a young Elisabetta runs excitedly through a field of flowers. The young Elisabetta showed the cute flowers to a young Klaus, who calmly identified them as fruits. She continued to exclaim how cute they were, declaring them her absolute favorite flower. Klaus then demonstrated that it was best to pull them out from the root, which greatly impressed her. When she pointed to another, he promptly handed it to her. Back in the present, Gilbert sensed a misunderstanding. Hannah pointed out the difference. For Lady Elisabetta, it was flower picking, but for His Highness, it was weed removal. Mortified by this revelation, Elisabetta Sam was now hiding behind a tree, her face flushed with a mix of shame and resolve. She was lying in wait, preparing to trigger a specific event. Today was the first day Alice was scheduled to help with student council duties. Spotting her targets, Elisabetta stepped out and called sweetly to Crown Prince Klaus, who was walking with Alice. Approaching the pair, Elisabetta announced that she had something she wished to discuss with His Highness. She then asked if he had a moment, causing a startled Alice to gasp. Klaus turned to face Elisabetta, his expression unreadable. Alice's heart ached as she watched them, reminding herself that Elisabetta was Klaus' fiancée and it was natural for them to be close. Yet wondering why it hurt so much, she quickly realized she knew exactly why she was feeling this way. Just as Alice was about to acknowledge her feelings for the prince, Wilfried interrupted, apologizing. He stepped between Elisabetta and the other two, blocking her path. Wilfried informed Elisabetta that he needed to instruct Alice on her student council tasks. Elisabetta was taken aback by the interruption. She protested, insisting that she could also help with the student council. But Wilfried curtly told her to speak with him later, leaving her fuming. She let out a cry of pure frustration. Internally, Elisabetta noted that this was the end of her role in the game's event. But as Elisabetta von Alvaheim, she decided to add the extra flourish of biting a handkerchief in frustration. She reasoned that since Carla had gone to the trouble of preparing the handkerchief, she had to make use of it. However, Elisabetta lamented that now that she and Alice were friends, this event was incredibly difficult to perform, and she knew it would cause her immense emotional distress, making her want to skip it entirely. Despite her reluctance, she reminded herself that this was a crucial event for Alice to finally become aware of her own budding love for the prince. She recalled Carla's stern warning that this event was pivotal for locking in Klaus's route, and that Elisabetta's performance had to be reproduced perfectly. Steeling her resolve, Elisabetta declared to herself that since she had made the decision, she would see it through. Just then, Carla's voice called out to her as Lady Lizzie. From her hiding spot in the bushes, Carla reported that the targets had appeared. To motivate her, Carla promised that once the job was done, dinner would be Elisabetta's favorite seafood cream stew, prompting an exclamation from her lady. Fired up, Elisabetta declared she was going, and Carla wished her good luck. In the distance, Klaus began to speak but was cut off. Elisabetta stopped in her tracks, shocked by an unexpected sight. Flustered but determined, She muttered to herself that she always follows through, struggling to force the words out. Finally, she managed to call out to Prince Klaus, internally monologuing that, as the villainous Elisabetta, she was strong against adversity even if her heart ached from the effort. Klaus simply watched her performance with a calm, neutral expression. A concerned Alice looked on, calling out to Lady Lise. Elisabetta then noticed something off to the side, stifling a sound of surprise. She realized Gilbert was trying to suppress his laughter and silently vowed that he would pay for it later as he struggled to keep a straight face. Pushing aside her anger at Gilbert, Elisabetta Sam turned to Holno Wanzasum and asked for a moment of his time, internally celebrating her successful maneuver. He maintained a stoic expression. After he agreed, she couldn't resist glaring back at Gilbert, snapping that this wasn't a show for his amusement. Elisabetta glanced up at him. Nearby, Alice watched the tense interaction, wondering what was going on. She realized that unlike Elisabetta's many previous failed provocations, this time she felt a definite response. She was shocked to realize she was feeling jealous. Elisabetta, meanwhile, congratulated herself on a job well done, while Klaus remained silent. Suddenly, her confident facade began to crumble. The strain of the situation became apparent on her face. The strain of the situation became apparent on Elisabetta's face, her features contorting in exaggerated horror. She felt frozen to the spot, her mind beginning to race. Internally, Elisabetta was furious, wishing Klaus would just get on with it so she could stop. Finding the situation unbearable, she begged him to quickly shake her arm off if he was going to. On the verge of tears, all she wanted was to go home. She longed to be home right away, eating a warm stew. Just then Klaus began to speak, murmuring about doing this just once. Elisabetta looked up, surprised. He apologized, but before he could finish his sentence, Alice stood her ground, looking determined. Klaus told the others to go on ahead, then turned to a confused Elisabetta, reminding her that she'd wanted to talk. She stammered that she did, but trailed off as she was interrupted again. Alice rushed forward, demanding that the prince let go of Lisa-sama and questioning what he was doing with his hand. With a sharp tug, he then pulled. Elisabetta was bewildered, thinking Alice should be telling her to let go. She mused that Alice must be the type to direct her jealousy at the man, just as Alice declared herself Lizzie's friend. Klaus coolly asked if that was a problem. He then dismissed her claim, stating that he was Elisabetta's fiancé. The stunned Elisabetta towards him. Elisabetta watched, thinking that Alice was still directing her frustration at the wrong person. Klaus then tasked Wilfried with handling the situation, and Wilfried began to gently lead the protesting Alice away. As they departed, Elisabetta cried out for them not to leave her behind, particularly annoyed by Gilbert's smug expression. She was suddenly startled. She began to threaten Gilbert, telling him to remember this moment, but then trailed off in confusion. Finding herself unexpectedly alone with Prince Klaus, Elisabetta was at a complete loss, wondering what on earth she should do now. Having been pulled aside by Prince Klaus, Elisabetta imagined them in a romantic embrace. As she daydreamed, ginkgo leaves seemed to fall around them. She mused that a scene like this would make anyone think they were lovers. In her fantasy, Elisabetta giggled shyly at the thought. Suddenly, she snapped back to reality. Elisabetta chided herself for getting carried away and escaping into a daydream. She reminded herself that being this close to Prince Klaus was simply part of her duty as his fiancé and partner for official functions. Still, the proximity made her flustered. She reasoned that while they were close when dancing, their current situation felt completely different. Being so near, she found it hard to stay calm as she could smell Prince Klaus' refreshing citrus scent. Her heart pounded as she wondered why a man should smell so good. Prince Klaus then remarked that it wouldn't matter even if he smelled of sweat, but Elisabetta thought that would make her heart race all the same. She recalled her role in the game Everlaba as Elisabetta von Alvaheim, the rival character whose status and beauty were meant to offset a strong personality that ultimately leads to her not being chosen. Despite this, Elisabetta was confident in her own well-proportioned figure. She then realized that her ample chest was pressed against Prince Klaus's arm. Panicking, she realized this was a grave situation, like a girl intentionally pressing herself against a man, and it was entirely her own fault for getting them into this position. However, she reminded herself that Prince Klaus was a man after all. She recalled Gilbert once saying that no man would be unhappy to have a woman's chest against his arm. Wondering if he might feel lucky, she decided to ask Prince Klaus for his thoughts. Reiterating her confidence in her figure, she asked him again for his opinion on the matter. Prince Klaus's expression remained completely unreadable. Elisabetta sighed in defeat, realizing it was useless against his perfect poker face. She was amazed and impressed by his self-control. However, she couldn't move, as he showed no signs of letting her go. Feeling pathetic, she lamented that she was failing in her duties as a villainess. Just then, Prince Klaus leaned in close and asked what she had been trying to do earlier. Elisabetta blushed furiously at his sudden proximity. Her eyes widened in surprise. Her first thought was how handsome he looked, but she quickly corrected herself and feigned ignorance, asking if she had done something. Still held by him, she saw the coldness in his eyes and believed he was angry with her. She wondered if his anger, which seemed intense enough to change his eye color, was because she was clinging to him. But if that were the case, she questioned why he hadn't let go of her hand. She suddenly realized she was being restrained, having been so distracted by the reward of being close to Klaus that she hadn't noticed. As Elisabetta began to apologize for her forwardness, Klaus cut her off, telling her she was using the wrong name to address him. He then asked Lise when she had started calling him by that name. Confused, Lise asked what he meant by name. She then guessed he was referring to when she had called him Your Highness. Klaus confirmed that was exactly what he meant. Lise explained she was only recreating a line from the game Everlaba, but Klaus sternly told her never to use that title again, surprising her. Realizing that was the source of his anger, She mused that while calling him by name would normally be disrespectful, it must be acceptable since he himself had permitted it. Tentatively, Elisabetta addressed him as Klaus-sama. He approved, saying that was fine. Elisabetta looked at him, flustered by his response. As she processed his strange anger, Klaus reminded her that she had business to discuss. He prompted her again and flustered. She asked if he was really going to make Alice help with student council duties. Klaus explained that the royal palace wished for him to utilize the beloved child, and with reforms increasing the workload, Alice was a suitable candidate to assist. Elisabetta had to agree that his reasoning was sound. The narration explained that Klaus' presidency was practice for kingship, and Lizzie admired him for thinking ahead to reform the system before his graduation. She realized he was taking the initiative to fix things while still enrolled at the academy. Klaus maintained a serious expression as he listened. Lise reflected that while people often misunderstood Klaus as cold, he was actually very kind, noting that the game's version of him would have dismissed her curtly instead of explaining himself. She internally affirmed that she had always known Klaus was kind, competent, and handsome. Having watched him since childhood, she chided herself for agreeing with him so easily, deciding a proper villainess would act differently and wondering what the game's Elisabetta would do. Playing her part, Elisabetta declared that she could also help with the student council, but Klaus told her to discuss it later. Internally celebrating her successful performance, she repeated her offer to help. Klaus looked down at Elisabetta, considering her offer. When he remained silent, she began to panic, thinking she had misstepped. To her surprise, Klaus simply agreed, saying he would count on her. Elisabetta was left completely stunned by his acceptance. Just then, 2 guards arrived to escort the prince. Still in disbelief, Elisabetta listened as Klaus explained that more help would be useful, and that he trusted her abilities, just as his ride arrived. Seeing her stunned expression, the prince asked what was wrong and what she was holding, reminding her it was time to go. She explained it was a handkerchief to bite down on out of frustration, but he dismissed it as unnecessary and told her to put it away. At that moment, a new voice called out for Lady Alice. A memory of a room being consumed by a raging fire flashed through someone's mind. The focus returned to Elisabetta, who wore a serious expression. In contrast, Alice appeared, her face etched with sadness. In a hypothetical conversation, Elisabetta began to pose a question to Alice about what she would do if Elisabetta knew everything. She continued, asking what if she had known a great fire was going to happen but had been powerless to stop it. A painting was shown being consumed by the destructive flames. Elisabetta pushed further, asking if Alice would still want to be her friend, if it was Elisabetta's fault that she lost her parents and developed a fear of fire. Alice replied without hesitation that even if that were true, it would not be Lady Lee's fault. Continuing, Alice expressed her belief that if Lady Lee's had known about the fire, she would have tried her absolute best to prevent it. She then smiled and dismissed it as just a hypothetical story. Elisabetta looked at Alice, visibly moved by her unwavering trust. With a small laugh, Elisabetta told Alice she was overestimating her, but thought to herself that Alice would surely forgive her, even if she knew the truth. She then questioned her own capacity for forgiveness, doubting she could confidently say she wouldn't blame someone for failing to save her. Elisabetta reflected that Alice's strength came from her character, not from being the game's protagonist. In fact, she became the heroine because of that strength, unlike a villainess. The contrasting images of the heroine Alice and the villainess Elisabetta were shown side by side. Back in the student council room, Elisabetta sat lost in thought. She puzzled over an unexpected development. Though she'd followed the Everlaba scenario, she was now assisting the student council instead of Alice, a deviation from the game she couldn't explain. While in the council room, Elisabetta gazed fondly at Prince Klaus as he worked diligently at his desk. She admired how wonderful he looked, but the thought was immediately followed by the sad realization that her time to enjoy such moments might be over. The narration explained that the Spirit Festival was near. If it concluded successfully, Alice would become the Spirit King and unite with Klaus, achieving the game's happy end. And yet, despite this being her goal, Elisabetta felt a pang of conflict. She believed she had already thrown away any futile hope for her own happiness. But no matter how much she tried to suppress her feelings, her lingering attachment kept resurfacing, a feeling she had tried to ignore. Every time she spoke with Klaus or saw his face, her true, hidden desire overflowed. She didn't want to give him up to anyone and wished to keep him for herself. From the doorway, Elisabetta watched, the sound echoing her own tense anticipation. She peeked in, her face a mask of nervousness and concentration. Without looking up, he stated that he couldn't concentrate with her staring so intently, startling Elisabetta. Realizing she'd been caught, she hastily apologized for her rudeness. Elisabetta's mind raced with the grim reality that no matter what the villainess did, Klaus's life couldn't be saved without the heroine. She believed that only Alice had the power to bring him happiness. Her brother's words echoed in her memory, questioning if she could just prevent the assassination and then orchestrate a bad ending. The thought had crossed her mind countless times. She knew she was capable of it. She could let Alice save him and once everything was over, tear them apart, truly becoming the villainess. However, she knew Alice would never harbor such disloyal, calculating feelings, which made her own emotions feel unworthy of being called love. Back in the present, Klaus continued writing at his desk. Elisabetta's dark thoughts continued. She wished she could hate Alice but hated herself more for even thinking it. She despised herself most of all. But her brooding was interrupted when Klaus asked if something was worrying her. Startled again, Elisabetta stammered a denial. He simply noted her gloomy expression. She looked down, unable to meet his gaze. Klaus then remarked that she often wore the same look during poetry class, surprising Elisabetta that he remembered such a detail. She quietly wished he had forgotten about that. But Klaus recalled it clearly, remembering how she had walked around in a daze and fallen down the garden steps when she was 11. adding that he was glad she wasn't hurt. A brief memory showed young Elisabetta after her fall, claiming her only asset was her sturdiness. Back in the present, she commented on how kind he always was, even worrying about her back then, though he dismissed it as a normal reaction. Looking away, Elisabetta insisted her troubles weren't significant enough to warrant his concern. Klaus observed that whenever Lise wore that expression, she would stubbornly refuse to explain why. He then confessed internally that he sometimes feared if he looked away, she would vanish somewhere beyond his reach, leaving Elisabetta confused by his intense gaze. She misunderstood, connecting his words to her dream of becoming a traveling bard, but he clarified that wasn't what he meant. He then pointed out that while she often calls him kind, his expression grew serious as he prepared to continue. He finished his thought, stating that he was not nearly as kind a person as she believed him to be. Elisabetta looked up at him, absorbing his unexpected declaration. Just as Klaus began to elaborate on what he meant, Gilbert von Muller burst into the room, loudly announcing his arrival. Gilbert rambled on about how long it took to find them before excitedly recounting how he believed the librarian had a crush on him due to her passionate gaze. Finally noticing the tense atmosphere, Gilbert trailed off. Klaus coldly suggested he look up the definition of knock and then threatened him, leaving a terrified Gilbert to wonder what he'd done wrong. Klaus glared, his irritation palpable. Gilbert in contrast looked utterly horrified. Elisabetta wondered why this was happening. She knew things wouldn't follow the game's plot exactly, but she felt this latest deviation was going too far. Looking distressed, Elisabetta questioned she was being forced into this situation. She recalled that in the original game event her role was simply to bother Klaus and Alice before being chased away, and that was it. Elisabetta lamented that she should have been at home by now, healing her wounded heart after being coldly dismissed by Klaus, and looking forward to her favorite cream stew for dinner. Instead, she was stuck compiling the Academy's financial reports with the game's capture targets. Elisabetta fumed internally, remembering that this event was supposed to be a sweet private moment for just Klaus and Alice, even if he was only going to be businesslike with her. She wondered why the unnecessary extras Wilfried and Gilbert were also present, only for Wilfried to wryly comment that being called an extra was harsh. Nearby, Alice let out a small startled cry. She accused Wilfried of reading her mind, but he calmly pointed out that she had said it out loud, much to her horror. The whole exchange was overheard by Prince Klaus and Alice, who were working together in a quiet business-like atmosphere. Wilfried noted that her calculations seemed correct and expressed his admiration for her ability to do math while talking so much. As he continued to say he was impressed, Elisabetta snapped at him to stop admiring her and actually help. Wilfried thanked her for her help, reassuring her that she would make it home in time for her cream stew. This made Elisabetta stop and ask just how much she had said aloud. He quoted her earlier thought about the deviation going too far, confirming her fear that he had heard everything from the very beginning. Wilfried then innocently asked what a capture target was, sending Elisabetta into a panic as she frantically denied knowing anything. Nearby, Gilbert expressed his disbelief at how much progress Elisabetta had made. She retorted that he should suffer, as he complained that he was nowhere near finished with his own work. Elisabetta then thought wistfully about Klaus and Alice, who were out training, envying them. She recalled that this was supposed to be the private tutoring event, which should have already concluded with just the two of them. Although it was different from the game, she hoped that this event was happening to compensate for another that had failed, as if the game were balancing itself out. With the Spirit Festival approaching, Elisabetta grew anxious about the frequent deviations from the Everlaba game. She worried if she could still prevent Klaus's assassination, the very reason she had worked so hard. Suddenly, a voice announced their return, and a startled Elisabetta turned toward the sound. She turned around to see who had arrived. Seeing a disheveled Alice, Elisabetta rushed to her side, asking what had happened to leave her so battered. Alice ran towards Elisabetta, crying out her name. Sobbing, Alice clung to Elisabetta and called her instructor a demon, explaining that Klaus was more merciless than ever. She speculated he was holding a grudge because she had interrupted his time alone with Elisabetta. Elisabetta stopped her, demanding to know who this master was. With a cheerful smile despite her tears, Alice replied that it was His Highness, Prince Klaus, leaving Elisabetta stunned. Still reeling, she asked if Alice was truly calling the Crown Prince Master, a term she found utterly unfitting for an Otome game. She couldn't help but shout in frustration over the nickname, but Alice simply confirmed again that it was indeed him. The narration explains that in the short year since her transfer, Alice has improved her grades dramatically, now ranking among the top students in every subject. Elisabetta looked on with a pained expression. She noted with dread that Alice was even ranked second in martial arts, just behind the top-ranked Klaus. Gilbert added that based on grades alone, Alice was stronger than him. Elisabetta found this hard to imagine, recalling Gilbert complaining about losing to Alice in a duel, even though his family holds a knightly title and his own sword skills are said to be on par with a real knight. Gilbert maintained a serious expression. Elisabetta internally questioned when her Omi game world had turned into a shonen manga. After a moment, Elisabetta reconsidered, thinking that it might actually be plausible. She reasoned that a master capture route could exist precisely because it was an Otome game, making a romance with a master a valid possibility. However, she immediately countered her own thought, arguing that Prince Klaus did not fit the master character archetype at all. Convinced he was the prince type, she yelled that her real issue was why Alice was calling him master. Alice reassured her that she normally addressed him properly as Prince Klaus. Alice explained that she had just slipped up. Elisabetta seized on the words usually and slipped up, frantically asking if Alice called him master when they were alone and insisting there were far more romantic nicknames. Alice asked innocently what she meant, prompting Elisabetta to snap that she was being dense. Elisabetta passionately explained that Alice was wasting a prime romantic opportunity, a special name used only when they're alone on an unromantic term like master. Alice clarified that it was not a name she used when they were alone, but rather a private nickname she only used in her own thoughts. Alice elaborated that she initially thought of him as demon instructor, but, feeling it was disrespectful, switched to master. Horrified, Elisabetta begged her to stop giving the prince strange nicknames. She then turned to Klaus, asking in exasperation if he was really going to let Alice say such things. Klaus calmly replied that people were free to think what they wanted, admitting he had wondered why she sometimes called him master. Elisabetta was stunned by his tolerance. She silently questioned if he was truly okay with this. Watching them, Alice wondered to herself if the two were actually in a real relationship. Elisabetta observed that Prince Klaus was acting like his usual self. She concluded that the real issue lay with the game's protagonist, Alice. She reflected that while Alice was cute and diligent as in the game Everlaba, this version was also stubbornly independent and far too attached to the Villainess, making her very different from her game counterpart. Despite this, Elisabetta admitted to herself that she did find this side of Alice endearing on very rare occasions. She worried that she might be overthinking things, as a review of recent events suggested Alice was progressing smoothly along Klaus's route anyway. Nearby, Gilbert watched Elisabetta muttering to herself, and wondered if she could work without talking, noting with admiration that her hands never stopped moving. Soon her work was done and a royal carriage stood ready to depart. As she prepared to leave, Elisabetta reflected on the upcoming Spirit Festival, recognizing it as a crucial turning point in the story of evergreen lovers. At this festival, the beloved child with her multiple magical affinities was scheduled to receive a blessing from the Archbishop. However, she recalled that before that, the game Everlaba had an event where Alice would overcome her psychological trauma, which she had confessed to Klaus. It was an event where, with encouragement and support from Klaus, she would awaken her affinity for fire magic. The successful completion of this event would lead to a happy ending with Klaus, but failure would result in his assassination. Elisabetta knew that triggering this trauma-overcoming event would confirm Klaus's route. After that, it was just a matter of adjusting stats and choices to aim for the desired bad, normal, or happy ending. However, if one were pursuing another character's route, meaning Alice's stats and affection from Klaus were insufficient by the festival, the event wouldn't occur, and Klaus would be assassinated. She worriedly wondered if everything would be alright. Looking out her window, she felt a sense of unease. It had gotten late because she'd been engrossed in the book on magic stones from Gilbert, which proved far more useful than she'd imagined. She now believed she could probably save the assassin Theobald. Despite this, she hadn't managed to find him yet, and she felt that today was her only opportunity. She tried to reassure herself, remembering that as far as she could tell, Alice had successfully completed all of Klaus's required events. In fact, both Alice's affection level and her stats seemed so high that it was almost suspicious, as if she were cheating. If this were a game, Klaus's route would be guaranteed. The source of her anxiety, she realized, was the fact that this was not a game, but her reality. Overwhelmed, Elisabetta admitted she couldn't bear a future without Klaus, and could never accept one where he died. She resolved that Klaus' future had to be a happy one, even if she wasn't the person standing by his side. Her maid Carla approached and told Lady Lise not to worry, hoping that all her efforts would be rewarded. Carla promised to do her utmost to help, and a touched Elisabetta whispered her name. Hearing this, Elisabetta's expression hardened with resolve. She reminded herself that she had Carla, and that Gilbert was also helping, even if he was a little unreliable. With that, she concluded that she had done everything she possibly could as she prepared for the Spirit Festival. The carriage was waiting to take her. Upon arriving at the Ingrid Royal Palace, Fiona remarked to Elisabetta that she was surprised by how handsome the king was. Elisabetta smiled, replying that it was only natural, as he is, after all, Prince Klaus's father. Fiona then admitted that while the audience had made her nervous, she found His Majesty to be a very kind person. Elisabetta and Fiona were enjoying the party together. Suddenly, a man appeared behind them, startling them. The man, Gilbert, teasingly commented on Fiona's cuteness, comparing her to a butterfly flitting between flowers, causing her to yelp in surprise. He continued to tease, saying there was no need to be so shocked, and then likened her startled jump to that of a kitten seeing a snake, which prompted Fiona to tell him not to mention snakes. Recognizing him, Fiona addressed him as Lord Gilbert, and he greeted Fichan in return, noting that it had been a while. Gilbert then noted that her hair had returned to its original color, complimenting her by saying that while her silver hair had been mysterious and suited her, he now felt as if a flower fairy had descended into the garden. As a flustered Fiona stammered her thanks, he playfully corrected himself, suggesting that perhaps he was the one who had been lured by the flower. Fiona could only think to herself that this man flirted as naturally as he breathed. He continued his poetic flattery, calling her a lovely violet, but Fiona told him to stop. Changing his tone, Gilbert then asked if it was truly safe for her to no longer change her hair color or hide. Elisabetta stepped in, explaining that those targeting Fiona hadn't appeared for 2 years. But Gilbert interrupted to ask if it was because Fiona's brother was present. Looking annoyed, Elisabetta conceded that was part of the reason. She elaborated that with Fiona's debutante ball next year, it was important for her to get accustomed to society to act as befits a daughter of the Alvaheim Marquisate. Dismissing Gilbert's insinuation that she was avoiding her duties, She stated she had already finished her greetings and addressed him familiarly as Gil. Elisabetta then turned the tables, questioning why he was slacking off and threatening to report him to Prince Klaus, which made Gilbert immediately plead with her not to. Just then, an off-panel voice called out to Ellie. Gilbert seemed to agree with the unseen person. He then issued a stern warning to Elisabetta. She was not to do anything dangerous, even if she encountered Fiona's brother, and she must not leave Carla's side for the rest of the day. He looked at her seriously and asked if she understood. Flustered by his intensity, Elisabetta stammered that she did. Satisfied, Gilbert said, "Good," and announced he was leaving, turning to walk away as Elisabetta watched him go. Left alone, Elisabetta stood lost in thought. She wondered about Fiona's brother, Theobald, and where he could possibly be within the royal palace. Lady Priesel, whose name was Rosine, was delighted to meet Elisabetta's younger sister Fiona, remarking on how cute she was. Fiona in turn offered a polite greeting. Rosine added that she owed her current happiness with her fiancé, Fritz, entirely to Elisabetta's help. She then eagerly offered to do anything to help Fiona, but Elisabetta teasingly called Rosine by the nickname Vertical Roll, and told her she was exaggerating, causing Rosine to react with surprise. Elisabetta gave a slight knowing gesture. Rosine insisted she didn't mind the nickname, but Elisabetta was taken aback, thinking it was hardly appropriate to say in front of Rosine's fiancé. However, the fiancé, Fritz, approached and thanked Elisabetta, explaining that Rosine was actually delighted that she had given her a nickname. An onlooker playfully asked if Fritz shouldn't be angry that his beloved was being called Vertical Roll, but Fritz calmly replied that it was up to Rosine to decide how she felt. Elisabetta muttered to herself that she had never actually called them a good match, though she let the thought trail off. Rosine, however, overheard and blushed, exclaiming how embarrassing it was to be called a well-matched couple, leaving Elisabetta speechless. As nearby nobles discussed going to see the Rifuka, or spirit flowers, a narrator explained that the holy water known as the Blessing of Spirits is created by infusing magic into sacred spring water from the Walberg domain. The narration continued, revealing that Klaus is the one who performs this infusion. The resulting overflow of light particles, called Rifuka, is the main event of the Spirit Festival and his solemn duty. From a balcony, the grand scale of the city was visible. Fiona remarked that this year's Rifuka by the Crown Prince was expected to be on a scale unseen in recent years. Elisabetta looked toward her sister with a gentle expression. Elisabetta agreed it was only natural given Klaus' power, then apologized to Fiona for not being able to watch the event with her. Fiona reassured her, expressing gratitude for Elisabetta's efforts concerning her brother. Fiona then sincerely thanked her big sister Lise. She smiled warmly at Elisabetta. Fiona then asked if they could watch it together next year, and Elisabetta readily agreed, internally marveling at how cute her sister was. Elisabetta reflected that in the end her plan was moving forward. Although she hadn't been able to track down Theobald Meyer, Fiona's brother and a hidden character in Everlaba, Elisabetta knew from her game knowledge exactly where he would appear. Recalling the scene where he agonized over his assassination mission, she had deduced the time and place from the game's text and background art, confidently relying on her Everlaba otaku dedication. She knew Theobald would appear near the Grand Hall. This location was in a restricted area, off-limits to the visiting nobles, but she believed it wasn't impossible to access. She realized this was her final chance to intercept Theobald before he could make his move against Prince Klaus. She then wondered if Klaus was already in meditation, concentrating his magic for the ritual. This meant she had only ever seen his special Spirit Festival attire within the game, and she longed to see it in real life just once. A narrator explained that because the ritual exhausted his magic, Prince Klaus would not make a public appearance on the day of the festival. Elisabetta, however, was certain he would look even more handsome than his game sprite. The narration concluded that the Rifuka would descend at precisely noon, the same time Theobald was expected to make his appearance. As the appointed hour drew near, Elisabetta stood with a look of grim determination. She was startled when Carla's voice suddenly spoke up beside her. When asked what was wrong, her maid simply replied that it was time for them to go. Carla then reported a suspicious man nearby, clarifying that he was not their target, Theobald, as she pulled a startled Fiona closer. She pointed out the man to Elisabetta, describing him as having sandy-colored hair and wearing a light brown formal suit. Carla added that while his target was unclear, his murderous intent was certain, though she judged him to be an amateur for failing to conceal it. Unable to sense the threat herself, Elisabetta questioned if he was truly an amateur. She forbade Carla from eliminating him, fearing a scene, and worried that if she were the target, she'd be put under protection and lose her freedom of movement. The suspicious man watched from a distance with a determined look. Elisabetta grew frustrated with the terrible timing, realizing any delay could allow Theobald to proceed with his assassination of Prince Klaus. The man began to move toward Elisabetta's group. She suddenly wondered if the man's target was her or perhaps even Fiona. Seeing the threat, Carla apologized to her mistress but declared that she had to act. However, before she could, Lady Rosine shouted for Carla to wait, then called out to Lady Elisabetta. From across the room, Rosine and her partner Fritz watched the scene unfold. The suspicious man and Carla were both taken aback by Rosine's shout. In a sudden decisive motion, Fritz grabbed Rosine. He pulled her into a dance hold, his face set with determination. The pair then began to dance across the ballroom floor. Fritz leaned in and told Rosine, "Here we go." The would-be attacker let out a cry of surprise. Rosine calmly agreed to his lead. They swept across the dance floor with astonishing speed. Fritz's hand firmly guided hers as they moved. The man cried out as he was sent flying. As Rosine gasped in surprise, Carla coolly commented on their impressive performance while Fiona watched silently. Rosine appeared momentarily flustered by the collision. She quickly quickly recovered and rushed to Elisabetta's side, asking if she was unharmed. Elisabetta assured her she was fine, just startled, and thanked them before asking how they had noticed the man. Rosine explained that Fritz had spotted the man's knife, so they were watching him. When he moved toward Elisabetta, they intervened. Fritz added that he was simply relieved she was safe. Elisabetta expressed her gratitude, explaining she had wanted to avoid a commotion. Rosine replied that she was honored to have helped. Addressing her by name, Elisabetta complimented Lady Rosine's acrobatic lift and promised to thank her properly later, but insisted she had to leave immediately. Rosine wondered aloud where she was going, noting that the Spirit Wind Flower event was about to begin. And indeed, elsewhere in the palace, the Spirit Wind Flower event was beginning as an officiant declared it was time. He announced there was one final task, expressing his confidence in the one chosen to perform it. He then called forward the beloved child Alice. The scene was set within a grand sunlit cathedral. Inside, Crown Prince Klaus stood solemnly holding a bouquet of white roses, as Alice looked up at him from below. Elsewhere, Dorothea mused that if Lady Lise were present, she would be completely captivated by Prince Klaus. Meanwhile, Alice observed the spirit's blessing, a font filled with spring water from the Valberg domain that becomes holy water once imbued with Prince Klaus's magic. The sight left Alice flustered and visibly impressed. This central ritual of the Spirit Festival would normally halve the prince's power, but as Alice pondered this, an official instructed her to raise her head. The man introduced himself as Walberg, a high-ranking magician of the Royal Palace Magicians Division, and directed her forward. Walberg then commanded the beloved child to stand, while Wilfried watched in silence. Alice obediently rose to her feet. Gilbert kindly reassured her, explaining that despite being a ceremony, it was a small, private gathering and she had no need to be nervous. He offered a comforting smile, which Alice returned. Before them rested an ornate ceremonial plate. Gilbert announced it was time to begin, instructing Miss Alice to place her hand over the plate and imbue it with her magic, to which she agreed. As Alice held her hands over the plate, a brilliant magical light erupted from it. After Alice finished with a soft gasp, Curtis von Alfheim announced it was time for the next person. He then called for His Highness Prince Klaus. The prince stepped forward to take his place at the font. He placed his hands over the water, and magical energy began to swirl within it. Klaus concentrated, performing his part of the sacred ritual. In another part of the palace, Elisabetta wondered if they were alone, but her maid Carla confirmed they were not. Carla pointed towards a specific spot, saying, "Over there." In the direction she indicated, the dark silhouette of a man with a ponytail was faintly visible. Elisabetta immediately identified the presence of a dark magic stone enchanted with a perception-inhibiting spell. Recognizing the hidden figure, she named him as Theobald Meyer, stating she had finally found him after he had caused her so much trouble. The assassin looked up in shock, finding her on a high balcony above him. Elisabetta knew the servant stone embedded in his body was preventing him from assassinating the crown prince against his will, a fate she would not allow. Her words clearly startled the man in the shadows below. He then caught sight of his younger sister Fiona looking up in distress. Clutching his chest in pain, the man Theobald recognized the girl, breathlessly questioning if it was truly his sister Fee. From the balcony, Elisabetta commanded him to give up, calling him by his full name Theobald Meyer, but was suddenly cut short in surprise. Her maid Carla had leapt into action, striking Theobald down. As he was struck, Theobald recognized his assailant, identifying her as Carolina von Roos. Carla coolly acknowledged her old moniker, Headhunter Carla. The force of the blow sent Theobald reeling. Carla then informed him that she was already retired from that life. Nearby, Fiona cried out for her brother to stop. Theobald marveled at the power of the Shadow Division as Fiona desperately defended Elisabetta, shouting that Lady Lise had saved her. Carla's voice explained that Lady Lise's earlier words had been a bit misleading, causing Theobald to grunt in frustration. He lamented his own foolishness, declaring that after such a failure he would accept any punishment. Theobald apologized profusely, realizing he had almost attacked his sister's benefactor and was only stopped by Headhunter Carla. Elisabetta, however, told him to set that aside and listen, adding that he shouldn't use that strange nickname for Carla. He immediately objected, arguing that Headhunter Carla was a name of great honor, not ill repute meant to praise her achievements. Elisabetta cut him off, demanding he listen to her. She addressed him firmly by his full name, Theobald Meyer. Elisabetta then declared that she would now be putting him to sleep, as Carla prepared to act. Having found the assassin Theobald, Elisabetta told him to go to sleep, leaving him momentarily speechless. The defeated assassin remained silent, his expression grim. Theobald then agreed, stating he would atone for the crime of attempting to harm his sister's benefactor. As he began to offer his own life as payment, Elisabetta cut him off sharply. She asked him if he was misunderstanding something. Continuing, Elisabetta clarified that she meant exactly what she said. He was to simply sleep for one full day. Theobald could only repeat her command in confusion. She explained that while the servant stone prevents its bearer from disobeying their master, that rule only applies while they are conscious. Therefore, she reasoned, as long as he was peaceful asleep, he would be physically unable to carry out his master's orders. Elisabetta deduced that he had already received his orders, and since he hadn't acted yet, the command must have had a vague time limit. She gave examples like by the end of today, which caused Theobald to react in shock. Carla then turned to her mistress, awaiting the command. As he grunted in agony, Fiona cried out in concern for her brother. Elisabetta explained that the servant stone was restricting him with pain for any word or action against his master's will. She then coolly ordered him to be quiet and listen to her if he wished to avoid more pain. Defeated, Theobald could only address her as Lady Lise. Nearby, Carla commented on how villainous her mistress sounded, much to Elisabetta's surprise. A flustered Elisabetta told her she'd get nothing for such praise. But Carla clarified that it hadn't been a compliment. Theobald finally relented and agreed to her terms. He then produced a magic stone he had brought with him. Elisabetta gave her the go-ahead, and Carla acknowledged the order. Carla began chanting a hypnotic suggestion to put Theobald to sleep, prompting a bemused Wilfried to wonder aloud if her theatrics were truly necessary. A moment later, Wilfried confirmed that Theobald had indeed fallen asleep. He then took a small object from the assassin's hand. Wilfried noted that it was a good thing he had decided to bring it. Elisabetta identified it as a levitation stone. Wilfried told her he would use it to carry Theobald to the carriage and asked her to wait, to which she agreed. As he left, Elisabetta instructed Fiona to stay with her brother, and Fiona obediently agreed. Elisabetta reflected that with this, Klaus' death from the game had been averted. At the same time, Wilfried confirmed that Theobald was secured. He added that even if Alice wasn't on Klaus's route, the assassination event itself should no longer happen. With the crisis averted, Elisabetta finally felt the immense tension she had been holding for years begin to fade. All her schemes to ensure the prince's survival and happiness had paid off, and for the first time she felt the weight of her anxiety begin to lift. Standing alone in a grand hall, she finally allowed herself a moment of peace. But her expression quickly hardened as she reminded herself it was too soon to be relieved. She considered that as things stood, the Alvaheim family would be accused of kidnapping Theobald, a member of the Shadow Division, which was not permissible even if he was a long-lost brother. Still, she resolved that if she could remove the servant stone from his body, she could then ask for his testimony. This wouldn't just be an excuse for abducting him. It could also expose the person who plotted the prince's assassination and reveal the truth about the stolen Master's Stone and Servant Stone. Her face was set with determination. She began to review her options, knowing there were several ways to destroy the magic stone. Nearby, Theobald lay unconscious. The first method she considered was simple physical destruction. She quickly dismissed this, realizing that trying to physically break the stone would likely tear Theobald himself apart first. The next option was to wait for the magic stone to reach the end of its lifespan. She slumped in despair at the thought. Because the stone constantly emits magic, it would eventually crumble. But Elisabetta knew this process would take longer than a human lifetime, making it far too long. Ultimately, she concluded there was only one realistic method left. That method was destruction by magic power, a technique she recalled Alice using in the game. She remembered that in Theobald's route, Alice hadn't used sorcery but had poured her own magic into the stone, causing it to vanish. However, a research book stated that the servant's stone contained too much magic for an ordinary person to destroy. It was a feat only possible for someone like Alice, but impossible for Elisabetta. A new thought then occurred to her. Even if she couldn't destroy the servant stone, perhaps the master stone was a different matter. Standing resolutely, Elisabetta affirmed to herself that there were still things left for her to do. The vast, ornate hall stretched out before her, empty and silent. She clutched her fan tightly. With purpose, she began walking down a long corridor. She cautiously peeked around a corner into another hallway. Startled, she realized someone was approaching. She recognized the sound of a man's shoes, confirming it wasn't her maid Carla. She wondered if it was simply a patrolling soldier. As a shadow fell over her, she hid her nervous expression behind her fan. An unfamiliar voice then called out, addressing her as Lady Elisabetta. Looking up, she was surprised to see an older man she knew as uncle. He, Court Count Seifried, asked what she was doing in such a place. Putting on a cheerful front, Elisabetta greeted the count in return. She then turned the question back on him, asking what would bring him to this secluded area. Elisabetta mused that the count should be incredibly busy with the spirit festival, with certainly no time to be wandering behind the old, deserted chapel. The count explained that he had seen her maid carrying something that looked like a person, all wrapped in cloth, and had come to investigate, concerned that something might have happened. Elisabetta could only mutter at the description. Thinking of Carla's efficiency, Elisabetta quickly fabricated a story, claiming that while walking with her sister, they had found an injured person whom Carla was now tending to, which surprised the count. When he asked if something had happened right there, Elisabetta vehemently denied it, insisting that the person had simply fallen from a tree. The count questioned her story, but Elisabetta doubled down, explaining that the person had apparently been struck by a sudden, inexplicable urge to climb a tree. He found it odd that someone would come to the royal palace during the spirit festival just to climb a tree instead of one in their own garden. A point to which Elisabetta readily agreed. She continued her elaborate lie, insisting that the person had an immediate, uncontrollable desire to climb a tree right then and there, which ultimately led to them falling. The count could only call the tale bizarre, and Elisabetta silently agreed with his assessment. She then explained that since the injuries weren't severe enough to require the palace's medical staff, she had decided to have the person treated at her own residence. Elisabetta promised to file a formal report later, but the count told her not to trouble herself. She politely insisted, saying it was no trouble at all. The count then changed the subject, saying, speaking of which, as he recalled that her younger sister had also been present. Elisabetta confirmed that this was indeed his first time meeting Fiona. She playfully chided him for no longer visiting as he used to, but the count explained that he had tried, only to be skillfully thwarted by her father, Lord Alvaheim. The count remarked that the rumors seemed true, that her father was so doting on his sickly adopted daughter that he kept her from public view. Apologizing for her father's behavior, Elisabetta explained that he had always been a worrywart. Changing the subject herself, Elisabetta said, speaking of which, and pointed out that the Count also had a long-standing habit of his own concerning his breast pocket. Dodging the comment, the Count suddenly asked if Lady Elisabetta herself was all right. Confused, Elisabetta assumed he was referring to rumors about Fiona being her father's illegitimate child, and assured him they got along well. But the Count clarified that was not his concern. Instead, he was referring to His Highness, the Prince. The mention of the Prince brought a somber memory to Elisabetta's mind. As she uttered Prince Klaus' name, the Count stated bluntly that her engagement to him would soon be dissolved, prompting her to ask if that was what he had been referring to. A brief glimpse of long wavy hair is shown. The political reality of this decision quickly became apparent, as a noble lady was heard remarking that Lady Alice would be adopted into the Seifried ducal house. Another voice explained that since a commoner couldn't become crown princess, gaining status through adoption was the only logical step. The speaker, identifying herself as another beloved child, expressed empathy for Alice's future, wishing to become her supporter. The narration reveals that Court Count Seifried was originally a commoner who was granted his title for being a beloved child with high magical power, eventually rising to his current position through political skill. He then addresses Lady Elisabetta, acknowledging that she must have complicated feelings about the situation, and inviting her to speak with him if she is troubled. Elisabetta internally identifies the man as Aloysius von Seefried. She recalls that he is a man held in the highest confidence by the king, having even introduced his majesty to the current queen after the previous one passed away. Aloysius looks on with a determined expression, thinking that he wants to do everything he possibly can for her. He tells Elisabetta that he thinks of her as his own daughter, prompting her to hesitantly address him as uncle. However, Elisabetta cynically thinks to herself that this must be how he managed to get on the king's good side as well. A cloaked figure stood ominously in a grand hall. A voice addresses beloved child Alice. The king then asks Alice how her secret mission from the royal palace is progressing. Alice replies that it is going smoothly. The king warns her that although her target shows loyalty to the crown, he is a man plagued by dark rumors, and deceiving him and his household will be difficult even with recognition obstruction magic. He urges her to be careful, but Alice confidently assures him that this is precisely why she became the adopted daughter of the Seefried ducal house. In the latter half of the Otomi game, Everlapa, Prince Klaus is assassinated during the Spirit Festival in every scenario except his own, with the mastermind's identity remaining a secret. The mastermind is only revealed in Wilfried's route, where he and Alice investigate the assassination attempt, and his persistent efforts finally lead them to the culprit. Elisabetta realized the man responsible for the atrocity, who had illegally manipulated the royal family's dark side, was Court Count Aloysius von Seefried, the man standing before her. She assured him that she was fine, stating that she had known from the very beginning that her engagement to Prince Klaus would eventually be broken. Count Seifried then asked if the prince had spoken to her about the dissolution. When he pressed for a specific date, Elisabetta replied that Prince Klaus had told her nothing, suggesting the royal palace would have more information than she did. Count Seefried lamented that such topics were always being deflected. He continued to press the issue. Elisabetta listened with a composed expression. He explained that while he understood the prince was busy, he had urged him to proceed, believing that delaying the matter only caused Lady Elisabetta more pain, though she was already prepared for it. Internally, she accepted her fate, feeling no dissatisfaction at being sidelined, as she considered it the typical treatment for a villainess. She observed that Count Seifried seemed impatient to advance the marriage between Alice and Prince Klaus, positioning himself as Alice's guardian. From this, she deduced that the Count must view Prince Klaus as a significant obstacle to his plans. A flashback revealed Aloysius's origins. Born a commoner named Aloysius Wolf, he was a beloved child with an affinity for both light and dark magic, which earned him the title of Viscount before he married Countess Schuerte. However, less than 3 years later, Countess Schuerte died in a love suicide with the husband of the then Duchess Seefried. The widowed Aloysius and Duchess Seifried found solace in each other and soon married. He then acted as her long-term representative due to her frail health and was ultimately granted the ducal title himself at her request to the king. This transfer of a ducal title to someone not of royal blood was unprecedented in the Idonia kingdom, sparking disgusted gossip among the nobility about a commoner's ascent. In the present, King Georg addressed Aloysius. The queen let out a small distressed sound. After becoming Court Count Aloysius, who answered the king's summons, appeared to be solidifying his influence by manufacturing a conflict between the queen's faction and crown prince's faction, despite both receiving aid from his house. Elisabetta recalled that the current queen, though politically naive, was a kind and affectionate person who was sympathetic toward Prince Klaus after he lost his mother at a young age. However, since the young Prince Klaus was practically an angel, it was only natural that the queen grew fond of him. Consequently, even though factions had formed around them, the prince and queen themselves were not actually in opposition to one another. Moreover, the young prince, with the prime minister's aid, exposed widespread corruption, leading to the disgrace and removal of most members of the queen's faction, while the doting king even hinted at abdicating in Klaus' favor. This explained why Court Count Seefried was so desperate to suppress Prince Klaus and quickly solidify his own standing as the future crown princess's father-in-law. She addressed him directly, remarking that it had been a while since they'd had a chance to talk, and he agreed. She then invited him for a walk in the garden, secretly planning to take the Lord's stone from him in a public place, but was suddenly startled. To her shock, she found that her feet would not move. Count Seyfried watched her with a severe expression. He told her this was perfect, as he had also been wanting to have a long talk with Lady Elisabetta. Stunned, Elisabetta demanded to know what her uncle was doing. She realized he must have cast a concealment spell beforehand, which was why she hadn't noticed his magic, and cursed herself for being caught. The spell was likely a light-based magic known as Shadow Stitch. Immobilized, she worried that it would be some time before Carla could reach her. She had assumed the Count would be preoccupied with the Spirit Festival and Prince Klaus' assassination, never imagining he would target her as well. The realization left her in disbelief. Just then Carla appeared, asking Count Seyfried if he was also responsible for the man they encountered earlier. The Count mockingly asked if she would no longer call him uncle, but Elisabetta angrily told him not to joke, declaring his plan a failure. Carla reported that she had captured the man, but Seyfried calmly replied that they wouldn't get any information out of him. Elisabetta noted with surprise that he was admitting his involvement quite readily, when she had expected him to feign ignorance. The scene shifted to Elisabetta speaking with her father. She began to tell him about the man named Aloysius von Seyfried. A narration explained that Seyfried was known for leaving no trace of his schemes, and that the death of his first wife, a countess, was highly suspicious. Elisabetta's father had secretly investigated the matter, and discovered that the late countess had not in fact been unfaithful. This confirmed his suspicion that Seyfried had orchestrated everything. But Seyfried, sensing the investigation, approached him under the guise of a friend. To this day, the two men were still sizing each other up, with Elisabetta's father feeling he was just one step away from obtaining definitive proof. The narration detailed Seyfried's methods. He never revealed his own identity when using other, and if forced to, he would first secure an undeniable weakness to ensure their obedience. Despite his gentle demeanor, he never truly trusted anyone, and was exceptionally skilled at exploiting openings to get close to his targets. Returning to the present, Elisabetta confronted Seyfried, declaring that his true target must have been Fee, and that he must have been surprised to see the second daughter of the Alvaheim house. She recalled that after welcoming Fiona, her father had consistently refused all visits from the Count. Elisabetta had not missed the flicker of surprise in the man's eyes when he first saw Fiona that day. She knew she hadn't imagined it, just as Seyfried realized with shock that Theobald's sister was alive. Her expression hardened with conviction. Elisabetta accused him of planning to use Fiona as a hostage to control Theobald. Stunned, Seyfried admitted he hadn't expected the Marquise to have even identified the Silver Devil, confirming her suspicions. A close-up shows Elisabetta's ear and ornate earring. She questioned the name Silver Devil, realizing it must be Theobald's code name. Seyfried dryly commented on the naming sense of the Shadow Division, which also produced Headhunter Carla. Elisabetta is shown from behind as she listens to him speak. The view shifts to Seyfried's feet, emphasizing his presence before her. She then accused him of threatening Theobald over his sister to force a servitude contract upon him, impressing Seyfried with her knowledge of the contract and the stone. He mused that Theobald was foolish to trust him without confirming his sister's safety, but admitted this worked to his advantage. Elisabetta realizes this is exactly how the game Everlaba played out. Court Count Seyfried used Fiona as a hostage to force Theobald to accept the servant stone with a false promise. Seyfried explains that because he trusts no one, Theobald is a powerful weapon against him, and a man like himself would never entrust the Master's Stone to anyone else. Elisabetta concludes that on this day, the day of the planned assassination of Prince Klaus, Seyfried himself must be carrying the stone. Elisabetta suddenly stops, saying, "But wait." Seyfried reveals a glowing stone in his hand. She wonders why such a cautious man would reveal so much inside information to her. Realizing this is a common trope, she panics, thinking this might be a parting gift for the dead. Frantically, she begs him to wait, asking if he's planning something dangerous. Elisabetta nervously insists there's no benefit to killing her. She then recalls that in the game Everlaba, her character Elisabetta mysteriously disappears from Klaus's route. A thought bubble shows her dawning horror. Seyfried calmly tells her he wouldn't do something so wasteful as killing her. The realization hits Elisabetta. Her character disappears. Seyfried kills her. She shouts that it's not a joke, stunned. Seeing the stone, Elisabetta first thinks it's the Master's Stone, but immediately realizes she's wrong. As Seyfried begins to speak, Elisabetta identifies the object with shock as a servant stone. Elisabetta is confused, questioning why there is another servant stone when she believed only one pair was stolen from the palace. Seyfried reminds her that the theft of the stones is classified information. He wonders aloud how she could know about it, speculating on her sources, from her father to the Roos family. He then dismisses the thought, deciding it doesn't matter. He looked down thoughtfully for a moment as Elisabetta stared back in shock. Elisabetta was stunned by his apparent indifference. Seyfried confirms that the palace had one Master's and one servant stone, and that the original servant stone is inside Theobald. He then reveals that the stone in his hand is one he created himself. She stammered in disbelief that he had made it, but he calmly confirmed it was possible with the right formula and a powerful enough magic stone. However, at that moment she was walking completely alone. He explained that the formula was already engraved on the original servant stone, and though it was difficult, he had finally managed to create a new one. Her voice trailed off in apprehension as she began to speak. She then asked in horror if he was truly considering using the newly crafted servant stone on her. Count Seyfried's voice assured her there was no need for self-deprecation, calling Lady Elisabetta quite useful. In a moment of panic, Elisabetta realized with dismay that this was a most unwelcome compliment. The Count noted that her excellent maid, or rather bodyguard, was always watching over her. Seyfried declared he wouldn't miss this opportunity, prompting Elizabeth to protest that she couldn't fight. He coolly replied that fighting would not be necessary. He elaborated that she was excellent, and with Carla's combat power included, she was more than sufficient. Though he conceded her low magic was a drawback, Elizabeth reasoned that the spell holding her shouldn't last long and that Carla, being employed by her father, wouldn't obey her if she became an enemy of her house. She noted that only her feet were immobilized. Count Siegfried confidently stated that Carla would indeed obey. He explained that humans cannot simply cast aside their emotions, asserting that both Carla and Elizabeth's father cared for her too deeply to abandon her. The Count concluded that she did not seem to understand her own value, leaving Elizabeth confused. He then added that it would have been helpful if the Crown Prince had felt the same way, which startled Elizabeth. She began to speak about Lord Klaus. She then shouted that the prince had nothing to do with the current situation. She struggled against her unseen bonds with a pained grunt. Despairing, she wondered what to do. A terrible realization dawning that she might have been mistaken about something crucial. As she considered her predicament, Elizabeth realized the magic cast upon her was likely not Shadow Stitch. She reasoned that Shadow Stitch lacked the ability to expand its area of effect. As Elizabeth let out a small sound, Count Siegfried began to speak. The Count raised his hand slightly. Elizabeth defiantly stated that subjugation magic required the servant's consent, asking if he truly believed she would meekly agree. She continued, noting that knowledge of the servant's stone and forbidden magic was rare, to which Count Siegfried conceded she had studied well. The Count smiled faintly, a knowing look on his face. He scoffed, then posed a question. He asked if she was also aware of a method to force subjugation without consent, leaving Elizabeth utterly shocked. An explanation of the dark magic subjugation states that it requires the mutual consent of both the master and the servant to be activated. However, there is an exception. If one of the casters is mentally exhausted and their willpower is significantly weakened, the spell can be cast using the magic of just one person. Facing Elizabeth, Count Siegfried commented on how well studied she was, musing aloud where she could have possibly obtained her information about the Silver Devil. Elizabeth sarcastically accepted his praise, telling him he could ask her all he wanted after he managed to subjugate her. She continued defiantly, stating that she was full of energy from her healthy habits, and questioning if he truly believed he could wear down her spirit. She scoffed at the idea that someone like him could ever succeed. In response, Siegfried's voice noted that while Lady Elizabeth was clever and beautiful, her unconcealed arrogance was her fatal flaw. He suggested that if she had been more modest, she might have already won the Crown Prince's affection, just like the current beloved child. Siegfried mused that subjugating her would make her a powerful pawn against the prince, but Elizabeth internally vowed she would never become a tool to frame Klaus. As he spoke, she realized with alarm that the area she could move was shrinking, and she desperately wondered what kind of magic this was. Siegfried called her a stubborn girl, stating that her defiance was the very arrogance he had mentioned, before asking what she found so amusing. He declared that her attitude created an opening, leaving Elizabeth to question what he meant. Siegfried then explained that he found her easy to read, as her composure always faltered the moment the Crown Prince was mentioned. Her shocked expression confirmed his assessment. Now struggling against the invisible force, Elizabeth demanded to know what kind of magic he had cast on her. She quickly realized that this was not the shadow pinning spell she knew. Siegfried calmly revealed that the magic he used was called exhaustion. When Elizabeth admitted she had never heard of it, he smugly informed her that many spells exist outside of textbooks. He elaborated that exhaustion is a dark magic that erodes the spirit, but it is difficult to use and requires an emotional opening in the target, making it an obscure and inconvenient spell. Elizabeth tried to reason through the situation, recalling that dark magic affects the mind while light magic affects the body. Confused, she accused him of lying, asking why her body was becoming paralyzed. Siegfried explained that the paralysis was merely a side effect that helped gauge the spell's progress. She realized with horror this meant he could force her to accept a servant's stone, and he confirmed that her strong wariness had been a problem until now. He taunted her, noting how quickly her guard dropped when the Crown Prince was mentioned and asking if she truly loved him that much, to which she retorted it was none of his business. As he stepped closer, she desperately warned him to stay back. Siegfried continued his psychological assault, calling Crown Prince Klaus a cruel man. Hiding behind a pillar, Elizabeth listened with a pained expression. He reminded her she was only a fiancée in name, pointing out that Klaus now spent more time with the beloved child, and suggesting such treatment must be humiliating for her. He then suggested it would be easier for her to simply hate the prince, but as he advanced she cried out for him to stay away. In her panic, the new servant's stone slipped from her grasp. She could only watch in terror as it fell. As she lay helpless, Siegfried's voice echoed, asking if she didn't despise the Crown Prince. She scoffed at the idea of revenge, declaring that she was determined to witness Prince Klaus and Alice achieve their happy ending. He then offered to aid her in this supposed revenge if she would only submit to his control. Elizabeth internally lamented that she had worked so hard until this day precisely to eliminate obstacles like him. She despaired, thinking she had been so close to her goal. Despite her paralysis, she managed to slowly raise her hand. With renewed determination, Elizabeth vowed that she would not let Siegfried lay a hand on Prince Klaus. Siegfried coldly remarked that her infatuation was no longer devoted but simply pathetic, leaving her stunned. He held the newly created servant stone in his hand. Elizabeth continued to reach forward with all her might. Siegfried prepared to use the stone on her. He looked down at her with a cruel expression. Suddenly, Elizabeth lunged forward, breaking free from her paralysis. She noted aloud that her uncle still had his old habit of keeping important items in his breast pocket, much to his surprise. She recalled telling him something important once before. To destroy a servant stone, one must first destroy the corresponding Master's Stone, a fact she now used against him as he cried out for her to stop. With her hand closing around the stone in his pocket, she declared that destroying the Master's Stone required only a tiny amount of magic. Siegfried could only watch in horror as the stone shattered in her grasp. As the magical backlash hit her, she cried out for her husband. Her consciousness began to fade as she saw a vision of Klaus, realizing this was very bad. Wondering if this was her life flashing before her eyes, Elisabetta recalled a memory of her younger self vowing to study hard. In the memory, her younger self proudly declared she would grow up to be a fine lady. A young Prince Klaus had simply replied, "I see." The memory felt nostalgic as her past self then boldly declared she would become Prince Klaus's bride. Back then, her future seemed colorful and full of hope, a sentiment to which young Klaus had again simply replied, "I see." As her consciousness drifted, she wondered when exactly she had woken up from that dream. Was it when she discovered she possessed no magical power? Or perhaps it was when she first witnessed the existence of the story's protagonist, Alice. Her mind drifted to a memory from before, a happier time when the crown prince, wearing a flower crown, had tenderly agreed with her. Meanwhile, Alice asked Gilbert if her presence had truly been necessary, suggesting she could have conserved her magic instead of performing the flashy Rifika ritual. He explained that the prince's display is always extravagant, and scaling it back would only arouse suspicion. She sighed at his explanation, acknowledging how complicated everything was. Recalling that Gilbert had supported her wish to join the Knight Order, Alice began to wonder if Crown Prince Klaus secretly didn't want her to become the Spirit King. She trailed off, lost in thought about the prince. Gilbert listened, a thoughtful expression on his face. Alice too seemed lost in her own contemplations. She quickly clarified that she trusted and respected her master, Prince Klaus, and believed his promise to keep her 5 magical affinities a secret from the palace. Hearing this, Gilbert asked why she thought the prince might not want her to become the Spirit King. Alice reminded him of her dream to become a royal guard for the crown princess, quickly adding she didn't mean just any princess. She reasoned that if she became the Spirit King, joining the Knight Order would be impossible. Gilbert agreed, explaining that the palace officials would almost certainly push for her to marry Prince Klaus, the next king. He noted it was the most straightforward path, just like the Klaus route in the game. But Alice reflected that in the game, it was a happy ending because they were in love. However, she knew reality was different. The prince was strict with everyone, including himself, and she never thought he would indulge her selfish desires. Gilbert mused that it didn't seem like the prince was simply respecting her wishes, either. Alice wondered aloud why the prince would prioritize her personal feelings over regulations. She then concluded that there could be only one reason for his behavior. Count Siegfried let out a cry of shock as he was hit. Standing over him, a horrified Elisabetta stared in disbelief, wondering what had just happened. Looking down at her own hands, she asked herself in terror if she was the one who had done it. Her mind raced, concluding that her hidden powers must have awakened in a moment of mortal danger. Her face was a mask of pure terror. Just then, a familiar voice called out Lisa, but she dismissed it, thinking it was impossible. She reasoned that he was supposed to be at the royal palace sanctuary, far from the old sanctuary where she stood, but there he was. She stared up in disbelief, wondering how it was possible, and whispered his name in shock. A blush crept across Elisabetta's face as she looked up at the prince. Looking down at her with concern, he asked if she was injured. Startled, she could only stammer that she was not hurt at all. Hearing this, Klaus expressed his relief, saying he was glad. A close-up showed Elisabetta's flustered, blushing face. In the grand hall, Prince Klaus looked on with a distressed expression. A guard called out to his highness, and Klaus confirmed his location. He then addressed Elisabetta by her nickname Lise, and she responded immediately. Klaus instructed Lise to step back, then ordered his men to apprehend the target and to look after her. One of the guards swiftly acknowledged the command. As Aloysius von Siegfried was brought to his knees in chains, a memory of his downfall flashed. Klaus coldly named the captured man Aloysius von Siegfried. Watching the scene unfold, Elisabetta wondered if she was dreaming. She was overwhelmed, realizing she was finally seeing Klaus in his magnificent Spirit Festival attire in person, something she had only dreamed of. She thought he looked far too handsome and regretted not getting a better look earlier. Her train of thought, however, was quickly interrupted by a more pressing realization. An official pronouncement listed Siegfried's crimes: plotting the assassination of the crown prince, breaking into the treasury, stealing a national treasure, and illegally manipulating the shadow division. All deemed acts of high treason against the kingdom, leaving Elisabetta aghast. She was stunned, realizing that Prince Klaus had seen through the entire plot. She couldn't help but think how incredible and cool he was. As she noted this event never occurred in the game Everlaba, the official presented a document detailing the assassination plot, restored by royal magic and seized from Siegfried's mansion. This, along with witness testimony, was already approved as formal evidence, making Elisabetta wonder if this was all just hidden lore she never knew. A sudden, unsettling thought then crossed her mind. Perhaps everything would have resolved itself perfectly, even if she had done nothing at all. She connected the dots, realizing the von Schaltzberg magic was a power exclusive to the royal family. She surmised it was the same magic Klaus had used to restore the destroyed gifts in Alice's burnt textbook. This led her to a definitive conclusion. Siegfried's arm disappearing earlier must have been caused by Klaus's magic. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore, it was a certainty. With the evidence laid bare, Crown Prince Klaus delivered the final judgment. Aloysius von Siegfried was to be stripped of his title and sentenced to death. Crown Prince Klaus and Elisabetta are featured on the chapter's title page. Elisabetta admires Prince Klaus from afar, thinking how sharp and wonderful he looks. Gilbert approaches her, commenting on the unfortunate incident she just endured. Elisabetta is surprised to see Wilfried is also present, and he informs her that the royal palace has taken custody of their attacker. She immediately asks about Theobald's fate. Wilfried explains that since Theobald was being controlled by subjugation magic and was not the true culprit, he will not face punishment. However, another man adds that Theobald will likely be forced to retire from the Shadow Division, and Gilbert somberly agrees. Prince Klaus then reveals that the palace had long suspected Aloysius of treachery, and having received intelligence about a planned assassination attempt, had been closely monitoring his movements. Elisabetta expresses her gratitude, acknowledging that she was saved thanks to their efforts. Curtis remarks on her unusual sincerity, musing that if she were always this straightforward, it would save him a lot of trouble. Gilbert interjects, teasingly blaming Curtis for provoking their arguments before admitting he finds it fun to tease Elisabetta because she rises to the bait so easily. A flustered Elisabetta shouts at Gilbert, calling him Will. He responds nostalgically, noting that it has been a long time since she used that name. As she remains stunned, Gilbert adds that she had stopped calling him that recently. A brief flashback shows a younger Gilbert. This is followed by a memory of a younger Elisabetta. Gilbert reminds her that he was the one who suggested they stop using nicknames to avoid misunderstandings as adults. Elisabetta retorts that he started it, but Klaus cuts in, telling Will to stop and admitting it was his own fault. Klaus watches them with a serious expression. Elisabetta then turns her gaze toward the prince. Gazing at Prince Klaus, Elisabetta thinks to herself how his simple, elegant attire perfectly complements his dignified presence, calling it wonderful. Klaus dryly comments that he already heard that, causing Elisabetta to wonder in shock how he could have read her mind. He clarifies that she had been speaking her thoughts aloud, and she realizes her embarrassing mistake. Klaus maintains his composed expression. Elisabetta then notices something he is holding. Klaus explains that a soldier found her hairpin and returns it to her. A grateful Elisabetta thanks him. Nearby observers whisper in astonishment, having seen the typically stoic prince smile. Elsewhere, Curtis explains that he tracked Aloysius with his familiar, but complains that the trail vanished when Aloysius contacted Elisabetta. Wilfried sternly tells him to be more mindful of his position. Wilfried then turns to Prince Klaus, admonishing him to refrain from acting alone as he had just done, which shocks Elisabetta. As she reels from the revelations, a small snake appears from her hair and speaks, telling Lady Elisabetta that she is being a little too loud. Elisabetta recoils in shock at the sight of the snake. As she screamed in surprise, Crown Prince Klaus, standing right behind her, ordered her to be quiet. Her muffled protests are rendered unintelligible. He warned that making a scene would only advertise her weakness, but Elisabetta, while internally agreeing, tried to call for Wilfried. Seeing the commotion, Wilfried gently took the small snake and asked if he should just put it in his pocket. He mused that the creature was actually cute once you got used to it, but seeing her reaction, he sighed that it couldn't be helped. Curtis announced he would go secure the evidence. And though Elisabetta told Klaus she still had more to say, the prince promised to listen later. Taking a breath, Klaus stated that while the court count's rebellion would cause a commotion, everything should be settled within a month. He then declared that once things calmed down, he had something to discuss with Reze again. A close-up showed Elisabetta's serious expression as she processed his words. Surprised, she asked if he truly had something to discuss with her, and he confirmed it, leaving her to ponder his words. Elisabetta reflected that with Siegfried's defeat, everything was finally over. She believed there was nothing more for her to do. But Klaus suddenly interjected, telling her she was wrong. Startled by his interruption, she asked him what he meant. Klaus explained that his news shouldn't be bad for her, then amended that he at least hoped it would be something she wanted. A flustered Elisabetta started to question him but then stopped, trying to reassure herself that it was probably fine. However, she then had a shocking realization. Prince Klaus was being uncharacteristically hesitant and vague. She couldn't believe it. Internally, she wondered where the eloquent prince who had just judged Aloysius had gone and questioned what he meant by "it's okay." She was alarmed by the way he seemed to be trying to convince himself. This didn't sound okay at all. She was certain that whatever he had to say couldn't possibly be anything but bad news. Stepping closer, Klaus looked down at her and commanded Reze not to run away. Overwhelmed and blushing, Elisabetta stammered that she would neither run nor hide. Elsewhere, two men discussed an upcoming duel, with one clarifying that it was to be a fight to the death. Having since left the tense atmosphere, Elisabetta felt a wave of relief as she saw her maid Carla and embraced her, thankful she had come. Carla, seeing her lady's state, cried out to her in concern. Overcome with emotion, Carla expresses her relief that Elisabetta is safe. Elisabetta tearfully confirms she is okay. The two share a heartfelt embrace. In another location, Gilbert sighs that there's no need to rush. While Wilfried tries to get Crown Prince Klaus's attention, Prince Klaus sits looking weary. Wilfried tells the prince that he hasn't been sleeping, and that the Prime Minister is worried, to which Klaus curtly replies that he's listening. Klaus insists he has been taking naps and that there is no problem. An off-panel Gilbert marvels at how Klaus managed to handle the aftermath of Aloysius's treason in just a few days. He continues, arguing that since Klaus also took on the work of civil officials, there is no way he can be fine. Elsewhere, Elisabetta thinks to herself that all of this is... A brief image shows the captured and defeated Aloysius. Gilbert then asks Klaus if it's true that Elisabetta herself still knows nothing about the wedding. He criticizes the prince for being so prepared to marry quickly while keeping her in the dark, but Klaus retorts that he has the approval of the Marquis house. Gilbert clarifies he was talking about Elisabetta herself, teasing that the prince must be exhausted to miss the point, and notes Klaus is trying to change the subject. Curtis von Alfheim joins the conversation, remarking on how well Klaus has secretly prepared everything. Gilbert sighs in response. He then says he's impressed, predicting that Elisabetta's earnest nature will make it impossible for her to refuse such a well-prepared proposal. Wilfried quietly interjects that it would be good if her own feelings were involved. Gilbert asks what he means and Wilfried begins to explain to the prince. He points out that Klaus has barely acted like a fiancé, and they've hardly seen each other at the academy, causing Klaus to falter. Wilfried then asks if the prince has ever once confessed his feelings to her, leaving Klaus silent. Wilfried continues, reasoning that while there were circumstances, Elisabetta was unaware of them, and it wouldn't be surprising if her heart had already moved on from their nominal engagement. Gilbert sighs in exasperation, noting that Klaus always goes quiet when things get inconvenient for him. Curtis adds that Klaus becomes a coward whenever Elisabetta is involved, wishing he could show this pathetic side to the Prime Minister. He then muses that seeing this side of the prince is a special privilege reserved for his childhood friends. Wilfried concludes the thought, observing that Elisabetta's affection, in contrast, is straightforward and easy to understand. As if to illustrate his point, the scene cut to Elisabetta, who wore a crown of flowers with a blissful expression. Curtis then chided the prince for taking such affection for granted, while Wilfried added that the public already assumes Lady Alice will be queen. Unaware of this conversation, Elisabetta continued to smile happily, lost in her own world. Wilfried pointed out that His Highness had not denied these public rumors. Prince Klaus admitted he was no expert on love, but he had heard of couples who grew apart from a lack of communication, something logic couldn't fix. Wilfried agreed, noting that repairing a broken relationship is difficult. He then mused that women supposedly move on from past romances more easily than men, warning that even she might lose interest if her feelings cool. In a sunlit garden, Elisabetta and Alice sat at a table while Prince Klaus watched from a distance. Alice Amelt's face was alight with joy as she spoke. She continued to smile brightly, her happiness evident. Elisabetta, meanwhile, blushed deeply, her gaze lowered in a state of happy embarrassment. Her expression was one of pure, heartfelt joy. The thought that he might have already lost her spurred Prince Klaus into action, and he abruptly declared he was leaving. A surprised Curtis von Alfheim called out to the prince, questioning his sudden departure. Klaus's hand was seen holding a small round glowing object. Curtis pressed him, asking where he was going, and what would become of his official duties for the afternoon. Curtis calmly replied that he had already taken care of the prince's duties, having anticipated this outcome. He then cheekily suggested that Klaus should just admit he cleared his schedule because he was desperate to see her. The prince paused, a thoughtful expression on his face. Curtis watched him with a knowing smile. Klaus finally conceded, apologizing to his aide, Wilfried, for the trouble. Wilfried began to chide him, but Klaus interrupted, stating that this was the one thing he could not concede, even to Wilfried. Elisabetta and Klaus stood close together, her looking up at him with a blush. Curtis feigned ignorance, muttering that he had no idea what they were talking about. Wilfried's voice was heard, affirming that of course he would wish for his best friend's happiness. The scene opened on the exterior of a modern house. Inside, a door stood closed in a hallway. A staircase was visible nearby. A young man's voice called out, telling someone to clean up because he was about to start making dinner. On a couch, a young woman engrossed in her phone gave a non-committal grunt in response. The young man, now seen wearing an apron, appeared and asked if she had even been listening. On her device's screen, the Otomi game Evrelaba displayed the character Gilbert. Her brother noticed she was playing Evrelaba again, remarking on her fondness for it, to which she merely grunted. Looking at the screen, he tried to recall the name of the Playboy character. His sister clarified that she liked him as a character, an answer he accepted. The brother voiced his concern that his sister's gaming might lead her to fall for a similar type of man, but she retorted that Gilbert wasn't her type, prompting him to tease that she only had eyes for Klaus-sama. His sister asked if he hadn't played the Gilbert route, but her brother countered, teasing that people like her were prone to suddenly changing their tastes after clearing a character's story, which left her silent. She then demanded to know why he was smirking. The brother's attention was then caught by a nearby book. The book lay on a nearby surface. As he wondered aloud if she had just bought the book, his sister suddenly panicked and yelled at him not to touch it. When he asked what the big deal was, she scolded him for being careless with books, accusing him of leaving them open and face down. He grumbled that she should have just put it away then, and she fell silent. His sister then retreated into her room, closing the door behind her. Her brother watched her go. The door to her room remained closed, his expression turning serious. The brother asked if it was true that she had turned down the school recommendation. From behind the closed door, his sister asked how he knew, and he explained that her homeroom teacher had called him. He relayed the teacher's concern, noting it would be a waste for someone with her grades not to go to university. She simply replied that she had already told him she was going to get a job. Her brother pressed the issue, questioning why she had studied so hard if not to go to university. He then tried to reassure her about their financial situation, promising that even without parents, his job would be enough to support them. His question from the past, "Are you listening?" faded as Gilbert, in the present, thought of the name Ely. A moment later, a real voice broke through his reverie, asking, "Are you listening, Gilbert?" Pulled from his memories, Gilbert's eyes were wide with a sudden shift back to reality. He quickly apologized for being distracted, explaining that he was sleep-deprived from thinking about various things. She teased him, surprised that even he had worries, to which he feigned offense. She then declared her plan a resounding success, having ensured a happy ending for everyone by preventing Lord Klaus's assassination, and celebrated as he congratulated her. She then told Gilbert that the research book on magic stones he had acquired proved to be very useful, praising him for a job well done, Gilbert replied that it was his pleasure. He flirtatiously added that he would do anything for his cute Ellie, and assured her he had already returned the book. The narration explained that because Elisabetta had saved Lord Klaus, the event where Alice would have awakened her fire magic never occurred, leaving her as a beloved child instead of the Spirit King. Elisabetta's only regret was that Alice had not been able to become the Spirit King. She mused that for the event to happen, Theobald would have had to attack Lord Klaus, which would have been terrible. Sighing, she acknowledged how difficult it was to achieve a true happy ending for everyone. An off-panel voice then brought up the subject of Theobald. The scene then cut to Theobald himself sitting up in bed with a somber look on his face. The narration explained that Theobald had retired from the Shadow Division and was subsequently interrogated at the Royal Palace. After the investigation, it was arranged for him to be taken in as a servant by the Alvaheim Marquis house. Curtis noted that Fee was excited for Theobald to arrive, but when their mother suggested adopting him, Curtis dismissed the idea, worried about creating rumors related to the family succession. Elisabetta reasoned that the overcoming trauma event was born from Alice's feelings for Lord Klaus and the support he had given her. Because of this, she was sure that Alice would have another opportunity to overcome her fear of fire even after the events of the game. She felt confident that recent events confirmed Alice was securely on the path to be with Lord Klaus. Gilbert casually commented that it was probably fine even if Alice Chan didn't become the Spirit King. He pointed out that, after all, they did manage to prevent the Crown Prince's assassination. Elisabetta vehemently disagreed, arguing that having a Spirit King is a great honor for the royal family and a happy outcome for both Alice and Lord Klaus. Prompting Gilbert to dryly note her fondness for authority. She began to protest, saying, "But," Wilfried interjected, suggesting that the prince himself might not actually wish for a Spirit King. Gilbert agreed, adding that while that was the case in the game, the real prince might feel differently than his game counterpart. Stunned, Elisabetta challenged Gilbert, asking what gave him the right to speak so knowingly. She accused him of getting arrogant just because he was close to Klausama and had been selected for the Royal Guard after graduation. As he looked on in brief confusion, she continued her tirade, resentfully noting that he acted as if he knew Klaus-sama better and was closer to him than she was. Her expression was a mixture of jealousy and frustration. As she began to stammer in frustration, pulling out a handkerchief, Gilbert bluntly told her to put it away. He recognized it as her biting handkerchief, a concept he found absurd even as he said it before shouting at her to be quiet. Elisabetta glared back, clutching the handkerchief in embarrassment and anger. With a sigh, Gilbert began to explain what he was actually trying to say. He reminded Ellie that she had been a huge fan of the game Evrelaba in her past life and therefore knew it in great detail, a fact she readily confirmed. Because of that, he continued, she had a tendency to get too caught up in the game's logic. He explained that while Evrelaba had affection ratings, they only measured a capture target's feelings for the protagonist. No such system existed for the Villainess. Elisabetta agreed that this was obvious, reasoning that creating such a complex system would have been too much work for the game's developers. Gilbert countered that such complexity was the nature of reality, and his main point was that being a capture target didn't automatically mean they would fall in love with the protagonist. He elaborated that it wouldn't be strange for someone to fall for a cute girl like her, who had been devoted to them for so long. Stunned at being called cute, Elisabetta blushed deeply, which only prompted Gilbert to tease her about how adorable she looked. Gilbert himself then became flustered, turning away with a caw. Having regained her composure, Elisabetta stated that she understood what he was trying to say. A decorative pattern filled the panel, marking her moment of reflection. She reasoned internally that it wouldn't be strange for Klaus-sama to fall for a lady as beautiful and powerful as herself, but then considered that the protagonist is loved for reasons beyond simply being the main character. She thought about Alice's charm, her brightness, kindness, and a vulnerability that made others want to protect her, and wondered if she herself possessed any of those qualities. With a sense of resignation, Elisabetta concluded that she was, after all, the Villainess. An image of her in her classic haughty villainess pose flashed through her mind. Gilbert pointed out that her self-deprecating attitude was exactly what he was talking about, before abruptly informing her that Klaus-sama was calling for her, much to her shock. She asked in disbelief if Klaus-sama was at the academy, and Gilbert confirmed it, explaining that the aftermath of Aloysius's rebellion was settled and the prince had business to attend to there. Remembering that Klaus-sama had previously said they needed to talk, Elisabetta realized this must be the reason for his visit, and Gilbert agreed. He noted aloud that the recent affair was resolved much faster than the month he had been told it would take. When she didn't respond, he called out her name, just as she started to sway unsteadily. Startled, he quickly moved toward her, reaching out to support her. Elisabetta shouted that she didn't want to hear it because she wasn't mentally prepared and tried to flee. But Gilbert told her not to run. After catching her, Elisabetta told him to let go, claiming she still had class. Gilbert retorted that he had to take her or the prince would kill him. Furious, Elisabetta accused him, declaring his previous conversation must have been a trap to win her over, and she couldn't forgive it. She called herself a fool for thinking he might have been worried, and trying to encourage her with his strange talk. She then demanded to know when he had become a subordinate of Lord Klaus, accusing him of bowing to power and preparing to sell her out as a traitor. Gilbert grabbed her, shouting back to ask who she was calling a traitor and starting to say that he had always been thinking of her. Elisabetta was taken aback by his sudden intense words. Blushing, Gilbert told her to just come with him, awkwardly adding that it probably wasn't what she was thinking before trailing off in embarrassment. He internally panicked, wondering what he had been about to say, and if it was a confession, while Elisabetta thought that wasn't her intention at all. Gilbert blamed his recent dreams for his slip-up. He recalled Wilfried mentioning that he'd called out for Lady Elisabetta by her nickname in his sleep but promised to keep it from the prince. Wilfried had added that getting involved with her was scary because of the prince, but Gilbert internally refuted that this was his reason. He reflected on how much Elisabetta resembled his sister Eli from his past life. He felt he couldn't leave her alone and had wanted to talk to someone in the same situation. Gilbert admitted to himself that his reasons for approaching her had all been trivial. However, as he helped this girl who was so different in looks and personality, he began to see something familiar in her expressions and gestures. He realized he was seeing his sister in her. In his past life, he couldn't do anything and left his sister Eli all alone. But he resolved that this time would be different. Gilbert dismissed his feelings as his own selfish satisfaction, something he would never say to her. As Elisabetta looked on in confusion, she asked him if he had said something. Gilbert looked away, flustered. He kept his gaze averted, his expression tense. He finally replied that it was nothing. Lise stormed in to confront Prince Klaus, demanding to know why he had made Alice act like a spy. Klaus calmly confirmed that Gilbert had told her. Lise protested, reminding him that Alice was the beloved child and asking what he would do if something happened to her. Lise recalled her past worries about Alice, realizing now that she had only been putting on a brave face. As she began to fret, Klaus simply told her to sit down. Meanwhile, Alice was shown looking thoughtful. Klaus explained that Alice was the ideal person to infiltrate Aloysius's circle without arousing suspicion. He clarified that while he gave the order, Alice agreed and, in return for her service, requested that her preference for a post in the knightly order be heard. Lise was shocked to learn Alice wanted to join the Knights. She realized she had never discussed Alice's future after graduation, having simply assumed she would prepare to become the crown princess. Klaus then added that Alice's ambition was to become the personal guard of the crown princess. Lise was stunned that she wanted to guard the princess, not be with the prince, a fact Klaus confirmed. Lise wondered what Alice could be thinking, reasoning that it was impossible for her to become her own guard. She apologized to Klaus for Alice's naivety, dismissing it as a bad habit of saying nonsensical things and promising to give her a stern talking to later. Klaus, however, turned the tables, stating that he had something stern he needed to say to Lise, which surprised her. He then declared that Alice von Siegfried would not become the crown princess. Lise was stunned into silence. She questioned his statement, reminding him that he had told the court council he would choose the crown princess himself. Klaus corrected her, clarifying he had only said he wanted to decide by his own will, not that he had chosen Alice. Klaus explained that a royal guard requires considerable skill, and he had simply gotten carried away while training Alice because she was a quick learner. He also admitted that letting people think he favored her had been convenient during the situation with Aloysius. Lise realized with a jolt that Alice must have known about this arrangement. Still, she pressed him, pointing out that everyone had assumed Alice would be queen, and he had never denied the rumors. Lise began to argue that it was because Alice had feelings for him. Her expression was filled with concern. Klaus, however, looked resolute. Anxiously, Lise asked about Alice's feelings, but Klaus cut her off, stating bluntly that there had never been any special feelings between them. Lise was shocked. He continued, pointing out that Lise herself had been suspicious of his relationship with Alice from the start. He then added that Lise in turn had been secretly helping Alice, a claim she quickly denied. As Klaus leaned in, a flustered Lise pointed out that he was getting a little too close. Klaus offered to move away if she was uncomfortable, a proposition Lise called unfair. She turned away, blushing. She exclaimed that she wasn't uncomfortable, but then stammered that she was simply embarrassed because he was so close. Hearing this, Klaus smiled, saying he was relieved. Lise's face turned bright red. He then told her that she would just have to get used to being embarrassed. He then asked the still flustered Lise why she was so concerned about Alice. He directly questioned if it was because Alice is supposedly the heroine of an Otome game. As she stammered in shock, he revealed that Gilbert had told him everything, assuring her it was a secret he hadn't shared with anyone else. Lise was inwardly furious with Gilbert for his betrayal. As Gilbert excused himself to go to the student council room, Lise fumed, realizing that his betrayal was the reason he had recently grown so close to Prince Klaus. Lise's anger wasn't about Klaus knowing her secret, but that Gilbert had held secret meetings with the prince behind her back. She then confronted Klaus directly, accusing him of monopolizing his own time with Gilbert and excluding her, calling it an unforgivable act of getting ahead. Klaus calmly stated that while he understood their motivations, he found their story of a past life and a game to be rather unrealistic and difficult to believe outright. Surprised, Lise asked if this meant he had actually believed her fantastical story. Lise was touched, thinking how kind Prince Klaus was to have at least listened to her story. She then began to ask him about Alice's situation. Klaus cut to the chase, confirming that if she was referring to Alice becoming the Spirit King, then Alice had indeed already awakened her fire magic, leaving Lise stunned. Lise reeled in shock from the revelation. Klaus explained that he had used concealment magic to hide Alice's fire powers because she herself did not wish to become the Spirit King. He warned Lise to keep this a secret from everyone, including the king, which made her realize he was actively concealing the potential Spirit King. Lise immediately concluded that Klaus must have been lying when he said he wouldn't make Alice the crown princess. Klaus looked utterly baffled by her conclusion. He asked her how she could possibly have arrived at that deduction. Lise explained that for Alice to awaken her fire magic by overcoming her fear, key game events like the downtown date and the after school for two must have already occurred. As Klaus questioned the ridiculous-sounding event names, Lise internally cursed the criminal Gilbert for not explaining the game's mechanics properly. She clarified that events are simply simply occurrences that are necessary to advance the game's plot. Reze elaborated that through these events, he and Alice would have deepened their bond, giving Alice courage, but Klaus denied any memory of doing so. Reze insisted that he must have told Alice he would protect her, but Klaus flatly denied ever saying such a thing. Klaus internally scoffed at the idea, thinking Alice should protect herself, which prompted Reze to scold him for referring to the Spirit King so dismissively. He clarified that he only taught Alice concealment magic because she was upset that becoming the Spirit King would prevent her from joining the Royal Guard, and he had no idea how she actually awakened her powers. Klaus corrected her, stating that Alice is merely a beloved child, not the Spirit King, until she is enthroned, causing Reze to cry out in frustration at his dismissive tone again. When Reze pressed him on how Alice awakened her magic, Klaus simply stated that he didn't know and had never heard. Reze was aghast that he hadn't even asked. But Klaus explained that while the matter was important to the kingdom, the details were a personal issue he felt no need to interfere with. She despaired that the game wouldn't progress, to which Klaus retorted that he had no intention of progressing it. He drew a clear line, stating that he was not the same person as the version of him in her game. Reze reflected that while she was a fan of the game's version of Klaus, she found herself preferring the real one, who showed so many more expressions. Klaus, still confused, asked what an otome game was, finding it odd that a game for maidens was full of men. Reze struggled to explain that it was a game filled with a maiden's dreams. Seizing on the word dreams, Klaus asked if Reze also enjoyed such things, misinterpreting it to mean she wanted to have romances with many different men. Flustered by his implication, Elisabetta demanded to know what he meant, exclaiming that the game Everlaba had no reverse harem ending. She continued, clarifying that while she had completed every route in her past life, she had always been devoted solely to him. Hearing this, Prince Klaus simply replied that he was glad. His simple response left Elisabetta utterly bewildered. She asked what he meant by being glad, and Klaus explained that a serious person like her might consider it selfish for a crown prince to choose a spouse based on love. However, he admitted that, contrary to what she might think, he was actually quite a selfish person. Klaus elaborated, confessing that he wanted the woman who would stand beside him as crown princess to be someone he truly loved with all his heart. As he spoke, he gently reached for her face. Overwhelmed, Elisabetta asked why he was telling her this and looking at her with such intense eyes. She stammered, realizing with a blush that his actions felt just like a confession. Elisabetta's mind raced as she considered the possibility that she was the crown princess Klaus was speaking of. A memory of her younger self surfaced, wishing that such a thing could be true. Filled with desperate hope, she silently pleaded with him not to deny what she was thinking. Klaus looked down at her with a serious expression. He then asked if she truly still didn't understand. Without waiting for an answer, Prince Klaus leaned in and kissed a stunned Elisabetta. The kiss left Elisabetta blushing and wide-eyed with shock. After pulling back, Klaus gazed at her with unwavering intensity. She could only stare back, her heart pounding in her chest. He told her that if she believed he was the kind of man who would do such a thing with just anyone, he would have to correct that misunderstanding. Klaus stood over her, awaiting her response. Elisabetta weakly protested, reminding him that she had no magic. Klaus dismissed her protest, asking if it was conceited of him to believe she had dedicated herself to her queenly education not just for self-improvement, but because she truly wanted to be his crown princess. Elisabetta looked up at him, her eyes filled with emotion. He pressed further, asking if her heart's true desire was to be far away from him, stating that he wanted to hear her real feelings. Klaus reminded her of her old dream to become a wandering poet and travel the lands, asking if that was truly what she wanted. Overwhelmed, Elisabetta could only stammer, unable to form a coherent reply. Finally answering, Reze confessed that she didn't want to be separated from Lord Klaus and wished to stay by his side forever. But even as she spoke, her voice began to falter in distress. She then cried out that such a future was impossible for her. It was a thought she had held on to for so long. Overwhelmed with guilt, Reze tearfully questioned how she could possibly stand beside Lord Klaus after having hidden his happy future from him and nearly taking it away. Holding her face gently, Lord Klaus asked if she was the one who would make him happy, telling her not to even think about leaving him if that was the case. He then confessed that for a very long time there had only ever been one person he had feelings for. He then sealed his confession with a kiss. As he moved closer, a trembling Reze asked if he was being serious, to which Lord Klaus simply replied that he loved her. Lord Klaus simply gazed down at her, his expression unreadable. Pulling back slightly, Klaus declared that if she couldn't believe him, he would keep kissing her until she did, leaving Reze flustered. He immediately captured her lips again. Reze looked up at him, her face a mixture of hope and confusion. Finally breaking away, a blushing Reze cried out that she understood and believed him now. She then pleaded with him to forgive her. A close-up shows Klaus' determined expression. He held Reze close, her face flushed and bewildered. However, Klaus declared that it wasn't enough yet. Reze reacted with shock, protesting that this was strange, but he simply asked what she found strange. He then silenced her with a deep, passionate kiss. Reze tried to protest that she believed him, but Klaus cut her off, playfully asking what exactly she believed. Rendered breathless, she could only gasp. As their kiss continued, Lord Klaus whispered his love for Reze one more time. Leaning over her on the sofa, he told her he wanted her to be by his side forever. He then looked her in the eyes and formally asked her to become his queen. Overwhelmed with emotion, a tearful Elisabetta stammered her acceptance. Prince Klaus reminisced that Elisabetta had always been by his side, recalling that they first met when he was 5 years old. He explained that she was introduced as a playmate for him, the crown prince. She was Elisabetta von Alvaheim, the red-haired, red-eyed daughter of the Marquis Alvaheim. The two children stood before a woman in a dark dress in a grand hall. He fondly remembered that she was Lee. She bowed her head respectfully. Klaus felt that Lise's feelings for him were a mix of adoration and the kind of affection an older sister or parent would have for a younger child as she called out his name. He simply addressed her as Lisa. Worried about Klaus, who often fell ill from being unable to control his magic, Lise frequently followed him around. When he asked if she was there again, she would retort, "What of it?" This continued until he was 7, the year his mother passed away. At his mother's funeral, an onlooker noted that the young prince wasn't even shedding a tear. Klaus stood alone before his mother's casket, his face stoic. The courtier whispered that he must be a cold-blooded prince after all. Suddenly, a sharp voice demanded to know what they had just said. It was a furious young Lise daring them to say it again. She passionately defended Klaus, shouting that there was no way a son wouldn't be sad after losing his mother. With tears in her eyes, Lise declared that she would not forgive anyone who spoke ill of Prince Klaus. Klaus looked on, his eyes wide with surprise at her outburst. Lise was then physically restrained and carried away. For her actions, Lise was later confined to her quarters. She continued to struggle as she was taken away. Lise had told him she would cry on his behalf, a memory that led the present-day Klaus to think of her as a foolish woman. The memory was tinged with a sense of violence or passion. Klaus recalled that members of the von Schultzberg family have eyes that change color with anger, making their emotions easy for others to perceive. He realized that knowing Lise was crying for him had made him immune to anything others said. Klaus continued his recollection, stating that he and Lise became engaged when he was 8 years old. He noted that it was a natural course of events given their social standing, and he described her as a person who cried, got angry, and laughed often. He had always believed that this girl, his complete opposite, would remain by his side even after they grew up. "That's what I thought," he concluded, as the memory seemed to shatter. The memory was from when they were 9. He had found her crying, and she tearfully confessed to breaking an important vase her father had received from the king. He was shocked, knowing the vase was a gift symbolizing renewed friendship with a neighboring country, and its destruction could reignite conflict. He saw her small hands trembling as she clutched the broken pieces. He looks at her with concern, softly saying her name. As Lise continues to sob, Klaus watches her with a stoic expression. He then reaches his hand out towards her. Klaus thinks to himself that he hates seeing her cry, and bluntly tells her to stop. As she starts to object, her father looks on in shock. A magical light emanates from his hand, restoring the broken vase. Lise looks up, her tears stopping in surprise. Her father immediately warns the young prince that he must not use that particular magic in front of others. Back in the past, Klaus explained that the magic was a special script of the spirit language, exclusive to the von Schultzberg bloodline, a fact Walton acknowledged. Walton had argued that since Lise was trustworthy and destined to be crowned princess, her knowing the secret was not an issue, which left the young Klaus confused. He remained thoughtful, processing the conversation. However, the king then revealed that the engagement would eventually be dissolved, allowing Klaus to marry his true chosen partner. It was then that Klaus learned his fiancée Lise was merely a political shield of Idonia, a revelation that shocked him as he'd never heard of it. His father added that Lise in turn would naturally marry another man. Klaus reflects on how he had accepted all his heavy duties, from correcting palace corruption to taking on some of the king's own work. Yet the one thing he could never accept was a future where Lise was not by his side. He was resolute about this one point. He was aware that Lise's magical power was unusually low for a noble, making her an unsuitable candidate for crown princess. He also understood that her father, Walton, suspected as much but couldn't bring himself to tell her, fearing it would hurt her. Klaus wondered if Lise would cry upon learning the truth, quickly concluding that she would. He reasoned that she would find out during her assessment eventually, making it a matter of crying now or later. Believing it was better for her to know sooner, he resolved to tell her the next time they met. Both the young Klaus and Lise thought about what they would do next time. In the end, however, he couldn't bring himself to tell her anything, and her 10th birthday came and went. Years later, at a debutante ball when they were 15, a radiant Lise gushed over how handsome Klaus looked, earning a curt reply. Nearby, Gilbert muttered that he was also present. She continued to gaze at him with adoration. Seeing this, Gilbert excused himself to go greet other guests. Klaus internally noted that no one would accept a powerless crown princess. When Lise cheekily asked if he was happy, he told her to be quiet, resolving to create a situation where everyone would have no choice but to accept her. However, the path was not easy as assassins began to relentlessly target her. It was no exaggeration to call her his shield, as she drew all the danger to herself. He knew that even with a shadow guard, the academy was an extremely difficult environment in which to protect her from them. As a countermeasure, he reduced their tea parties together. This sparked rumors of a falling out, but ironically, it also made the assassins vanish. Although things went according to his plan, Prince Klaus found the result deeply irritating. He had only reduced their tea parties and wondered why everyone so readily believed they were on bad terms. While aware of his own aloofness, he questioned whether his attitude had truly been that terrible. He reflected on what was most irritating of all. It was the fact that Lise herself had taken the rumors at face value. A vision of Lise appeared, smiling gently while holding a cup of tea. He was exasperated that she was trying to set him up with Alice, wondering why the woman he loved was encouraging him to be with someone else, and if she still saw him as a younger brother. A memory surfaced of a young boy, Gilbert's past self, pleading with his sister to stop looking at him with those eyes. In the present, Wilfried remarked to Gilbert that he seemed to have earned the prince's favor, But Gilbert was incredulous, questioning if this was what being favored looked like. Wilfried explained that it had been difficult at first, reminding Gilbert of when he danced with Lady Elisabetta at the welcome party. Curtis recalled how Klaus had been annoyingly loud about Elizabeth supposedly misstepping. And as Gilbert expressed his shock, Klaus interjected that Lise would never make such a mistake. Wilfried told Klaus that if he was so worried, he should have told Elisabetta everything from the start, which would have saved him from sneaking into her mansion like a thief. Klaus replied that he couldn't because Lise's feelings are far too easy to read on her face. He added that this was especially true when things concerned him. The scene shifted to Aloysius in custody, where Curtis noted the court meeting had ended without issue. Aloysius confirmed this, musing on Elisabetta becoming crown princess. Observing him, Carla noticed Aloysius was smiling slightly, and Gilbert suspected he was plotting something. Gilbert then tried to get the prince's attention, but Klaus remained silent. Carla then remembered something important. Curtis explained that for the past 7 or 8 years, a movement for the rights of the magically weak had grown, backed by a powerful unknown supporter, causing Klaus to react with dawning realization. Gilbert bluntly asked Curtis what he was up to, questioning his age 7 years prior. Curtis called him a brat, but declared that his goal was finally within reach. Klaus reflected that it had taken him 8 long years to finally marry his fiancée. As he gently caressed a sleeping Lise's face, he thought that this was what he had always wanted to do. He held her close, thinking that what he had always desired was finally in his arms. The two of them lay together, embracing peacefully in bed. In a flashback to her past life, Lise's former self, Eli, awoke with the realization that she was still alive. She recalled losing her parents and then her only brother, which made her so afraid of further loss that she pushed everyone away and ran. In the end, she was left with nothing but her own empty self. She reflected with regret that even if no one had loved her, she still could have loved someone else. She bitterly called herself an idiot. She wondered despairingly if it was now too late for everything. Just one person would have been enough. Even if she were hated or loathed, she wished she could have at least loved someone with all her heart. Lying in her sickbed, the thought trailed off with, if only. The wish concluded with the desire to be reborn. In the darkness, 2 figures shared an intimate moment. Elisabetta slowly woke up, wondering if she was having a dream from long ago. She tried to make sense of it, realizing that in the dream she wasn't a child but actually a bit older than she is now. Frustrated that she couldn't remember more, she was brought back to reality when Klaus gently called her name, Lisa. Finding herself in bed with him, Elisabetta wished him good morning, and he asked if she was all right. She touched her cheek and realized she had been crying. She explained that she'd had a dream she couldn't recall, which made her cry, and Klaus simply acknowledged it. Klaus looked down with concern at a suddenly flustered Elisabetta. Elisabetta became extremely flustered, realizing her situation. Klaus watched her reaction closely. Her thoughts raced. Realizing it had been less than a week since she married Klaus and that he was now her husband, a memory of her wedding day flashed through her mind, cementing the fact that she was now his wife. Back in the present, she was startled to realize her body was being washed by someone else. She saw that it was Klaus himself gently washing her hair. As he cared for her, Elisabetta had a sudden, clear realization. She was in love with him, a truth she hadn't known until that moment. The voice from her dream echoed in her mind, musing on the profound happiness of loving and being loved in return. This inner voice seemed to offer comfort, saying everything was all right now, and that she had done her best, which only confused Elisabetta. She wondered if she was still half asleep, but was startled when Klaus asked what she was thinking about. He then leaned in and asked if she was still thinking about the dream. Completely flustered, Elisabetta stammered a confirmation. Her face turned bright red as she looked away. Klaus noted that it seemed like a memory she was on the verge of either remembering or not, and she nervously agreed. He looked down at her with a gentle yet determined expression. He then told her it was fine, and that she should just forget the dream entirely. Confused by his command, Elisabetta could only let out a small questioning sound. Leaning in for a kiss, Klaus declared that he would help her.